In ancient ruins, Shin Hyul, our main character, was walking up the stairs. A monster appeared in front of him, blocking his path. The monster opened its mouth and growled at Hyul. High in the sky, huge magic circles appeared one after another. Hyul began to read the spell. Hyul dropped to one knee, pouring his power into the magic circle beneath his feet. Hyul's cloak fluttered behind him from the power of the magic he was about to cast. Hyul continued to chant the spell, and a large snowflake of ice appeared on his palm. Hyul's spell, which involved ice magic, was finally finished. An image of a beautiful ice girl appeared, looking down on the world. Hyul stood at her feet, casting a permafrost spell. The ancient columns were covered in ice. The monster backed away, continuing to growl. The image of the ice girl released its breath towards the monster. Ice magic flowed from Hyul, who stood in the magic circle, freezing the monster. The magic circle under Hyul's feet began to gradually disappear. Sunbeams filtered through the broken ceiling of the ruins, illuminating Hyul among the small snowflakes, the remnants of magic. Hyul looked in front of him at the frozen monster. Hyul was born into a house of magicians in Korea, and even among skilled magicians he was considered a genius. Hyul's father stood near the large window, asking him if Hyul knew what awaited him. Hyul, the third son of a prestigious house of magicians, was confident in himself as he gave his father an affirmative answer. Hyul confidently told his father that he would achieve results worthy of the name of their esteemed house and lead the house to new heights. Hyul's father turned to the window, saying that Hyul's talent surpassed that of his brothers, and that no one could compare to him. Hyul's father said that he had high hopes for him and ordered him to reach the top in interactive magic and prove himself at the summit of magicians. Hyul promised his father that he would handle this task flawlessly. Hyul looked at his father's back, knowing that he had to surpass even his father to become the greatest mage in the world. 2 years later, at a prestigious educational institution, the Obelisk Academy of Magic, the teacher, holding a tablet in his hands, called on the second-year students to gather because they had a practical test. The teacher turned to the student Baek Sa-hyuk, telling him that there was nothing to worry about and that he should work as usual. But Sa-hyuk was not worried at all. Sa-hyuk pointed to the side, saying that the last seat on the exam would be taken anyway. Sa-hyuk spoke about Hyul, who stood among the students without mincing words and wondering how he even moved from course to course without the basics of magic. Sa-hyuk looked at Hyul with arrogance, calling him a useless blockhead who couldn't use magic. Hyul didn't react to his words. Modern magicians were considered a rare and valuable asset. Sa-hyuk was told to begin the practical test when a system window appeared in front of him, and a little further on were the monsters created for the exam. Sa-hyuk used a fireball spell that came out from the system window towards the monsters. Sa-hyuk shrugged, claiming it was easy when he was given an excellent grade and told he had completed it within the time limit. Next was Hyul, who, unlike the other mages, was unable to master the implanted AI chip that accelerated spells. Hyul continued to cast spells the old-fashioned way, concentrating mana in his heart, forming an 8-step magic circle. But before he could finish casting his magic, the monsters he had created approached him and knocked him down. Sa-hyuk smirked as he looked at him, asking if Hyul really thought it was magic. Hyul couldn't hide the anger on his face. Hyul constantly heard that he was just an outdated magician who couldn't handle interactive magic, and advice to give up magic. Hyul was kneeling in front of the floor, broken by the explosion where the monsters were. The other students openly laughed, seeing the result of his efforts, and the teacher gave him a failing grade because of the elapsed time. Hyul clenched his fists, thinking that he had failed once again. But even this couldn't upset him completely, because Hyul was able to improve the speed of transformation a little, which made him happy. His father gave up all hope for Hyul when he was declared a loser, and even sent him a pill that would destroy the magic circle in his heart. But Hyul was not going to give up on his dream. He chose the path of traditional magic, which can only be learned from ancient books. Hyul stood in his room, littered with books, indignant that no one had thought to translate them into electronic form. Hyul's gaze was drawn to the book lying on the table. He wasn't sure if he had bought it. Hyul took the ancient book in his hands, examining the castle. Hyul opened the book, turning the pages, and noticed that it looked valuable, despite being a little worn. Hyul tried to decipher the handwritten text in the book. Hyul read the name Rybel Weitner with disbelief and a smile. He had not heard this name for a long time. Rybel Weitner was the first greatest magician, the first emperor of the Magic Empire, and the founder of magic. Hyul often came across his name in the memoirs he read as a child. Hyul was brought out of his thoughts by a book that began to glow in his hands. Hyul covered his eyes with his hands from the bright light coming from the pages. Hyul dropped the book, continuing to cover his eyes. But the book did not fall completely to the floor, continuing to illuminate his room with light. Hyul was shocked by what was happening, continuing to look at the light from the book through his hands. A voice came from the book, saying that only someone who possessed an identical nature could hear it. The voice introduced itself. Rybel Weitner said that he was bequeathing this book to Hyul, as he met the requirements. Hyul looked with wide eyes at the image of the great magician that appeared from the talking book. Hyul didn't yet realize that the fact that he had been a reject at the academy from the very beginning of his training turned out to be his greatest advantage. In the past, students stood on the academy grounds, and the professor said that those who failed the test would be sent to additional classes. Hyul remembered how he was the only one who failed the exam that time, and everyone was talking about him. Remembering that he was the only one who didn't get along with artificial intelligence, Hyul felt as if he had been born again. The opportunity that the talking book had opened up for him had dazzled his eyes and given him hope. The next day, within the walls of the Obelisk Academy of Magic, it was a bit noisy in the large dining room where the students were seated. Kayul sat by the window and picked at his food. A guy, Ji-Suchin, approached Hyul with his tray, asking if he was sitting alone again. Hyul pretended to be unhappy with the company, looking at Suchin. Suchin ignored Hyul's displeasure, pulled out his chair to sit down, and immediately took a closer look at Hyul's food, noting that it looked delicious. Hyul looked at Suchin, who was sitting in front of him, wearing a rumpled shirt, his hair hastily tied up, and eating rice. Despite his sloppy appearance, Suchin was among the top 10 sorcerers in the academy, and reached the third circle at the age of 18. But now Suchan was reaching for Hyul's food, who had to defend himself so that Suchan wouldn't steal anything from the plate. Hyul believed that Suchin was the only person he could call a friend in his life as a scum of magic. Suchin, with his mouth full, reminded Hyul that he should say something if he was being bullied. Then Suchin would deal with the bullies. Hyul waved it off, saying that he had found a strange book, which piqued Suchin's interest, but not enough to stop him from chewing. Hyul remembered what the book looked like, noticing that all the pages after the third were empty. Hyul told Suchin the details, and they began to discuss whether the book might be enchanted, and whether it might be someone playing a prank on Hyul. Hyul explained a little awkwardly what exactly the voice had said, remembering that no one who did not meet the requirements would be able to open the book. Suchin became interested and asked if he could try opening the book. Hyul became more serious when he got to the last thing he had to say about the book. Hyul remembered his shocked reaction when he read the words written on the last page, and Suchin urged him to find out the details. Hyul honestly told Suchin that the book said that he should create a magic circle not in his heart, but in his brain. Suchin reacted seriously. He said that this was not funny at all, and someone must want Hyul dead if they were suggesting such a thing. In the evening, in the dormitory of the Magic Academy, Obelisk Suchan came to Hyul's room. Hyul handed the hesitant Suchin a book that would not open unless he looked like Rybel Weitner. Suchin tried his best to open the book, but it wouldn't budge. Accepting his defeat, Suchin handed the book back to Hyul, guessing that there might be some kind of seal on the book. Suchin advised Hyul to fill his head with this dangerous nonsense, scratched the back of his head, and wished him good night, saying that he would go to his place. Hyul looked at the door that closed behind Suchin. The book opened easily in Hyul's hands, and he looked at the pages. Hyul's thoughts, having witnessed Suchin's useless efforts, revolved around the fact that nothing was stopping him from opening the book. Words began to appear on the page that had previously been blank, and Hyul was surprised. Rybel Weitner again addressed Hyul as his successor, noting that he was most likely creating a magic circle in his heart. Rybel didn't seem surprised by this fact, noting that this was a natural way for ordinary people. Hyul read the words that appeared with interest, wondering if Rybel was really saying that this method was wrong. The book soared out of Hyul's hands again, surprising him with its suddenness. The voice from the book told Hyul that if he accepts his will and wants to become his disciple, Hyul must destroy the magic circle in his heart. The voice penetrated Hyul's consciousness, saying that the next step after destruction would be the creation of a new circle in Hyul's head. The book closed and fell to the floor, saying goodbye that only after this should Hyul open the book again. Hyul muttered under his breath, looking at the book, which was too serious to be a simple joke, insisting on what Hyul had to do. Hyul knew all his life that mana is destructive to the brain. If it ends up in the brain, the psyche can break down, or the brain can die altogether. Hyul clutched his head, thinking that the book's instructions were like a demand to commit suicide. Hyul continued to grumble that no one would sign up for something like that as he went to bed. The book remained lying on the floor. The next day, Hyul came to the professor in the educational building of the Magic Academy. Hyul handed him the book, asking him to take a look at it once. The professor studied the cover, examining the ancient manuscript. The professor looked at the book from different angles with a critical eye, realizing that the book emanated an aura of antiquity. The professor asked if Hyul wanted the book to be tested, but Hyul asked to at least try to open it. To explain his request, Hyul said that he wanted to know whether the book was sealed with magic or not, citing strange rumors. The professor pointed out to Hyul his academic performance, saying that it was better not to think about rumors, but agreed to check the book. The professor was busy checking the book, trying to catch traces of some kind of spell. He handed the book back to Hyul, saying that there was no magic in it, and telling him to stop being interested in fables and get down to studying. Hyul walked down the corridor, dissatisfied that the professor had not caught anything and he had not been able to get any information. Hyul looked at the book in his hands with a dreamy look, realizing that there was a chance that this was all real and not someone's prank. The book in his hands, which was open only for him, could be real. That same evening, Hyul sat in his room, looking at the book in front of him, lying on the floor. Hyul picked up the bag of pills from the table and looked at it. These pills were sent to Hyulu by his father. They were specially made to destroy the mana circle. Hyul remembered the stern image of his father, who told him to forget about practice and become at least an outstanding theorist in magic. Hyul had no intention of giving up magic, which was why he hadn't even thought about taking the pills until now. Hyul was nervous. The hand holding the pills was shaking from fear that nothing would work. Hyul told himself that he was already on the sidelines of life, and he had nothing to lose, and he threw them in his mouth, forcing himself to swallow, deciding that if he was going to die, he was going to die. Hyel felt pain as if he was dying when he swallowed the pills. Hyel fell to the floor, feeling like the circle in his heart that the mana was tied to was being destroyed. The pain of the destruction of the magic circle in the heart meant the end for anyone as a magician. Hyel gathered his last strength. Realizing that there was no way back, he directed mana into his brain to create a new magic circle. Hyel will break the taboo by believing the book so that the past Hyel will die, being reborn as a new magician. Hyel no longer felt the old pain so clearly. It was covered by a stronger one from the fact that mana gushed into the convolutions of the brain. Hyel thought that this was death, but at that moment he heard someone whisper in his ear, calling him his successor. Voices created with mana. Mana spirits swirled around him and whispered, letting him know that they were one with mana. Hyel heard voices, singing and laughter in his mind. All these sounds together made him feel as if he had been blessed. Hyel woke up only in the morning. He was lying on the floor. Not far from him lay a closed book. Hyel sat up, looking at his hands with disbelief. He couldn't believe that he was still alive after experiencing such pain. The book opened by itself and caught Hyel's attention. Hyel picked it up, surprised to see symbols on pages that had previously been blank. Hyel even began to hear the voice more clearly, and Rybel Weitner congratulated him on being able to take the first step. Rybel Weitner told Hyel the title of the book he was holding, calling it Adred. Rybel Weitner continued to speak with Hyel, saying that from now on the writing of his legend through the Book of Adred would begin. Hyel looked at the book, listening carefully to the voice of Rybel Weitner, who was saying that he was bequeathing all his magic to him. Rybel Weitner was almost physical, talking solicitously to Hyel about what he should call Hyel other than successor from the future. Hyel couldn't hold back his emotions. Tears started flowing from his eyes when he heard Rybel Weitner call him his student. A few days later, in the educational building of the Obelisk Magic Academy, the students sat at their desks and listened to the teacher's lecture. Hyel was reading Adred at the time, amazed at how exciting the study of magic could be. Adred contained a lot of hidden knowledge, and Hyel found it fascinating. It was only through Adred that Hyel learned that mana had a will of its own. This is what helped explain why mana is destructive to the brain, because it is like a clash of two consciousnesses. But Hyel, like Rybel Weitner, was different. His brain was not subject to the will of mana, and therefore he could not receive damage. Hyel rubbed the back of his head where the AI chip should have been, finally understanding why it hadn't taken root. Hyel was distracted from studying the book by the professor's voice, who called the students to attract their attention. The professor reminded about the upcoming midterm testing, saying that a new rule will be added. The students listened attentively to the professor's words, and Hyel also looked up from his study of Adred. The professor continued speaking, saying that this year there would only be one option for each failing test. The professor looked at Hyel with a sneer, informing him that anyone who failed would be expelled from the academy. The professor laughed, specifically stating that this rule was proposed by the House of Magi so that Hyel would understand his father's intervention. The students began to smirk, saying that finally the magic-deficient Hyel would be weeded out. The professor, who was also not delighted, picked up on these conversations, hinting at Hyel, who was already on the verge of expulsion. Hyel didn't listen to them, thinking about how his father had tried his best to get him out of the academy so as not to endure the shame of the family. That same evening, outside the academy in the city, Hyel stood next to the sign for a place where you could rent a simulation training ground to practice before the test. Places like this were expensive in the city, and even in this place, it was hard for Hyel to afford it. A training center employee greeted Hyel as he entered. Hyel got straight to the point, saying he needed an hour's rent and confirming he would be training alone. The worker handed him a keycard to the room and began to explain the rules for using the holograms. Hyel told him that he didn't need to bother explaining because he already knew. The worker looked after Hyel, recognizing him as the son of the House of Mages who was not compatible with interactive magic, and mentally sympathized with the poor guy. A voice came from the simulation room, announcing that the simulation was beginning. Hyel stretched his wrists and listened to the simulation's mission, which required him to crush the wolves. Holograms of a pack of 10 wolves appeared around Hyel. The wolves bared their teeth at Hyel, ready to attack at any moment. Hyel knew that these were low-ranking monsters, but their number made the task more difficult. The average time to complete this task was 12 minutes. Here, Hyel wanted to test what he learned from Adred every day to evaluate his results in practice. Hyel was about to use his new mana circle, which was now located in his head for the first time. Hyel raised his hand to the ceiling using the infinity circle, and mana swirled around his body. The wolves rushed to attack as soon as they sensed a threat. Hyel repelled their attack in an instant by using a water spell. Hyel looked at the water he summoned with magic in awe, thinking it was incredible. He was surprised that he had such power. While the rest use interactive magic, using magic circles on the heart, Hyel uses a magic circle in his brain, causing mana to circulate throughout his entire body, causing all the dormant power within him to be released. Hyel opened his eyes, seeing how powerful the fire spell he had cast was. The voice of Rybel Weitner told a shocked Hyel that he shouldn't be surprised by such things, because there was still a long way to go. Rybel Weitner seemed to be stroking Hyel's head, saying that the Circle of Infinity was only the base of his magic. Rybel Weitner told Hyel that he could perform spells the way he imagined them in his mind. According to Rybel Weitner, this was only the first circle of his magic, called the Call of the Heart, and Hyel was filled with anticipation of the future. After some time, the worker saw Kayul off, politely saying goodbye to him. The worker sighed wearily, complaining that he wanted to go home now that he was alone, and went to clean up the training room after Hyul. The worker decided to entertain himself by watching the failed genius that everyone considered Hyul train. The worker stared in surprise at the results he displayed on the screen. Kayul's result was comparable to the level of the international competition record, taking only 6 minutes and 37 seconds. The worker didn't believe it and kicked the screen, thinking it was malfunctioning again. At this time, Kayul was walking back with Adred in his arms and humming contentedly to himself. The first circle that Hyul was able to weave, the Circle of Infinity, proved to be a serious challenge for him. Hyul studied what was written in Ired, realizing that it was different from all the basics he knew before. In Ired, it was said that Hyul could bend the mana that was in his arms, legs, heart, and brain to his will. It was difficult for Kayul to understand what this meant based only on the vague description. The thought eluded him as soon as he felt he could understand. In the standard teaching of magic, it is said that for magicians, there is a certain wall, a limit of enlightenment, which you encounter when the limit is reached. This fact was considered relevant for all eras, and Hyul decided to concentrate on pumping through the whole body, concentrating in the lotus position. That was what was said in Irede, but Hyul felt a little unsure, as if it didn't seem enough. 10 hours passed unnoticed while Hyul was pumping mana, and he did not feel tired. Hyul went to school still feeling a little sleep-deprived afterward. Suchin was walking towards him, waving happily at Kayul. Suchin noticed Hyul's sleepy appearance and patted him on the back, asking if he was okay, causing Hyul to yelp. Hyul's thoughts were occupied with the fact that he had to keep the mana circulating every day in order to adapt to the circle. Hyul remembered how, at the age of 12, he created the second circle of mana, and everyone began to call him a genius, and his father placed great hopes on him. Now Hyul had only one circle in his mind, and he was trying to figure out how to move forward. Hyul thought that in order to progress he needed to overcome the wall of enlightenment. He remembered his father when he still believed in Hyul. The words his father had said then came back to Hyul's mind. His father told Hyul that the ideal was more like shackles, and Hyul clearly remembered that moment. The realization hit Hyul that the ideal was an illusion, a lie created by human arrogance. When Hyul returned to his room, he sat in the lotus position again, beginning to concentrate mana in his body. Now he could feel it clearly. The mana in Hyul's hands and fingers was tangible. All the mana that was in Hyul moved according to his wishes. Hyul found the key in imperfection and freedom of expression, allowing him to cast spells without formulas. The interactive magic that the others used shortened the casting time, but created a monotonous pattern. But Rybel Whitener's method, as described in Ired, was as unbridled as thought itself. Hyul felt that he could freely change the form of magic at will, and a bird made of fire magic appeared above his hand. Hyul was delighted. His magic, the magic of Rybel Whitener, did not obey algorithms and formulas, did not need them. Hyul stopped, feeling how just the first circle had mercilessly drained his stamina, but he was still in awe of such magic. Hyul felt that, thanks to Ered, he would reach incredible heights when he crossed the wall of enlightenment. Sometime later, when Hyul was sitting in class, the professor came into the office, calling him because he had a guest. Kayul was distracted from his studies, not understanding who could have come to him. The professor and Kayul were walking down the corridor, and the professor told Kayul that by guest he meant his father. The professor led Kayul into the reception room, where Kayul's father stood looking out the window at the view. The professor attracted the attention of Hyul's father by saying that Hyul had arrived. Father Kayul turned over his shoulder to look at the people who entered. Kayul greeted his father, telling him that they had not seen each other for a long time. Father Kayul gestured for the professor to leave them, and the professor said goodbye to him as he left the reception room. Hyul and his father sat on the sofas opposite each other, and his father noticed that Hyul still had not given up on attending classes. Father looked sternly at Hyul, concluding that he had not taken the pill he had sent him. Hyul confirmed his words. Hyul confidently told his father that he had recently achieved something in magic. His father shook his head wearily, saying that Hyul continued to chase empty dreams. Hyul ignored his father's reaction, confidently declaring that he was going to become the greatest magician of the generation. Hyul's statement made his father look at him. Kayul, without flinching, met his father's gaze, confident in his words. Kayul's father sighed again, wearily reminding him that Kayul had already lost a year. Kayul's father became very serious, saying that it was time for Kayul to finally accept reality. Hyul listened as his father said that no matter how much effort he put in, and how hard he worked, even if he achieved something in the future, Hyul's father told his son that he would not become a real magician until his body was compatible with interactive magic. Father again insisted that Kayul take up theory and stop burying his extraordinary talent. Kayul interrupted him, reminding him of what he had already said at their last meeting. Hyul declared that he would never give up magic, putting his hand on his heart. Kayul rose from the sofa, saying that he was not interested in ordinary life, especially in the shadow of his father. Hyul felt confident as a student of Rybel Whitener, saying that he wanted to lead the House of Magic. His father responded after a short silence, saying that it was not something that could be achieved by wishing alone. Kayul chuckled, saying that he would prove it to his father in action. His father did not believe in him, asking how he could prove it if he was barely able to move from one course to another. Hyul told his father that he would be in the top 10 rankings at the next test. Kayul's confidence was so strong that he assured his father that if he failed, he would leave the academy and take up theory. Kayul set a condition that if he succeeded, his father would recognize him as a magician and would provide appropriate support. Kayul's father rubbed his forehead wearily, noticing that Kayul's so-called successes had completely gone to his head. Father Kayul rose from his seat, threw on his coat, and walked towards the exit. As he said goodbye, he turned to Hyul, saying that he hoped that all of Hyul's statements were not just empty talk. Kayul looked after him with a serious face. A few days later in the academic building, the professor attracted the students' attention by saying that the final version of the testing format had been adopted. The students began to discuss among themselves what might await them, and Hyul looked attentively towards the professor, waiting for information. The professor continued by informing the students that they would be fighting one-on-one with each other. Hyul listened carefully to the information that the tests would last 3 days. Sayuk and the others looked at Hyul with grins as the professor said that after the 16th round, observers from the magic tower would appear. Hyul was determined to prove himself in the upcoming test, in the building of the educational building of the Obelisk Academy. After some time, all the students discussed the upcoming duel-style test, mentioning the presence of representatives from the magic towers. Hyul listened to the conversations, deciding that for greater effect before the upcoming exams, he should attract the attention of the media. All students dream of joining the magic tower, which was founded by a dozen of the most powerful magicians in the world. Hyul turned around, hearing someone trying to get his attention with insults. Sahyuk and his charges stood in front of Hyul behind him, asking how he was feeling. Hyul looked at a second-year student like himself. Baek Sahyuk, although he irritated Hyul, was one of the top second years. Sahyuk continued to pester Hyul, saying that his first duel would be with him. Sahyuk was confident of his victory, and smugly asked Hyul if he could taste defeat. Sahyuk leaned close to Hyul, saying that he was going to take revenge on him for what happened 5 years ago. Hyul knew what he was talking about. 5 years ago, they both took part in the finals of the competition for young talents. Hyul still remembered how Sahyuk lost to him dryly and burst into tears right there in the arena. Then they started calling him a loser. But now that Hyul was incompatible with interactive magic, Sahyuk felt like a king. He deliberately reminded about the expulsion for failure. Hyul remained silent as he listened to Sahyuk pester him as usual, saying that he could knock him out during the duel so that he would feel less ashamed. While Sahyuk was bragging, Hyul realized that he couldn't miss such a moment when his first opponent in the exam stood in front of him. Hyul mockingly asked Sahyuk why he should be afraid of him, deciding to use him for the entire program. Sahyuk stopped mocking, asking Hyul with displeasure what he had said. The noise in the corridor stopped, and all the students turned their attention to Hyul and Sahyuk. Sahyuk bragged, not believing that Hyul, who everyone considered defective, thought he could handle him. Sahyuk came a little closer. He pointed his finger at his temple, asking Hyul if he still didn't understand where his place was. Hyul listened to Sahyuk's loud words and sighed tiredly. Hyul rubbed his chin with a smug smile, reminding Sahyuk that 5 years ago he had also barked at him but failed. Hyul said out loud the conclusion that Sahyuk had not learned anything since then. Sahyuk was shaking with anger because of what and how Hyul said in front of everyone about his loss 5 years ago. Hyul laughed, not sincerely asking for forgiveness, asking Sahyuk if he really still held a grudge, and reminded him of his old nickname. Sahyuk couldn't contain his anger, calling Hyul a monster. Sahyuk grabbed Hyul's shirt collar, calling him a defective piece of shit. Hyul pushed his hand away without raising an eyebrow, and said that Sahyuk does not change, remaining in the shadow of those who can trample him. Hyul adjusted his tie, adding that a genius, unlike Sahyuk, would always remain a genius. Hyul smiled widely as he told Sahyuk to get ready, as he was going to imprint this truth on him for the rest of his life. Hyul continued down the corridor, leaving the shocked and furious Sahyuk unattended. Sahyuk called Hyul an arrogant bastard, promising to burn him to ashes and trample on the ashes while biting his thumbnail. The next day, articles about Hyul appeared in the media, raising the question of whether the genius would return or fall even lower. Hyul dried his hair after taking a shower, reading the articles with his name on them with satisfaction, suspecting that it was Sahyuk's family who tried to blow the situation out of proportion. Hyul mentally compared Sahyuk's appearance to that of a snake, thinking that this prank with the articles was quite in keeping with his style. Hyul continued to look at the articles, saying that the midterms would show everyone that geniuses always pull through. Hyul was pleased with the articles that came out, believing that the more attention he received, the better it would be for him. Hyul's attention was drawn to the vibrating phone on the table. Hyul picked up the phone, greeted his father, and asked if he had seen the article, receiving a positive response. Hyul told his father not to pay attention to it. Hyul's father stood in the middle of his office, confidently asking his son that he had probably stumbled upon these articles himself, and Hyul confirmed it. Hyul's father cut short his son's claim that he did it for attention, saying that he did not accept Hyul's conditions because he believed them. Hyul listened to his father's voice on the phone as he said that he accepted the conditions because it didn't matter to the House of Magic. His father continued to say that even now he does not believe in Hyul's victory, and the articles disgrace the House of Magic, and he does not understand why Hyul needs this. Hyul told his father that people had long ago written him down as excommunicated from the house, and he apologized, but such damage would mean little to the House of Magic. Hyul stroked Irid's spine, listening to his father say that just because the damage was minor didn't mean it wasn't there. Hyul spoke with all seriousness about his awareness when his father reminded him that the name of the House of Magic always followed him, no matter what he did. Hyul's father looked at the phone in surprise when his son said that all this was empty compared to the benefit, and asked him what he meant by benefit. Hyul confidently told his father that he himself was a benefit to the House of Magic. Hyul reminded his father that he was going to become the greatest magician by the standards of the family and the world, hailing from the House of Magic. Hyul's father sighed wearily, noticing that his son's ambitions were comparable to those of the tower's leader. Hyul thanked his father after hearing from him that whatever would be, would be. Hyul's father warned his son that if he continued to defame the name of the House of Magic, he should prepare for the consequences. Hyul put the phone on the table, ending his conversation with his father. Hyul clutched the towel he was holding and told himself that the bets were off. Midterm exam day at the Academy Arena. Hyul stretched his wrist as the exam observers in the stands prepared to watch the first stage. Sahyuk, Hyul's first opponent, mockingly questioned his attitude towards the article, asking if he liked popularity. Sahyuk told Hyul that he couldn't even cast spells properly, but he continued to disgrace himself, covering his laughter with his hand. Hyul smiled at him, saying that only Sahyuk would be disgraced here, surprising his opponent. Hyul mockingly thanked Sahyuk in all the norms, slightly bowing his head for the fact that he fell into his trap. Hyul smiled and told Sahyuk that it was the least he could do for him since Sahyuk didn't like him, meaning that he would quickly beat him up. Sahyuk, hearing Hyul tell him not to cry later, became furious and amused, deciding that Hyul had really gone crazy. Hyul raised one finger, indicating the first circle. A finger was tilted towards Sahyuk as Hyul stated that he would only need first circle spells to defeat him. The Obelisk Academy's indoor arena was filled with spectators watching the progress of the midterm testing. Among the spectators were professors and students like Hyul. Sahyuk clicked his tongue in displeasure after hearing Hyul's confident statement. Sahyuk's bad habit of biting his nail when he was angry resurfaced, asking how Hyul, with his skills, dared to open his mouth. The referee blew his whistle, signaling that the first round of midterm exams for second years was about to begin. The judge waved his hand, allowing Sahyuk and Hyul to begin, and moved away from the center of the arena, making room for their duel. Hyul looked confident and calm, as if this was what he had been waiting for. Sahyuk gave in to his emotions. He stretched out his hand towards Hyul, shouting at him to die and calling him a defective degenerate. Sahyuk's pupils narrowed in rage as he cast his spell. Sahyuk used interactive magic with his chip, sending several fire projectiles towards Hyul. Hyul dodged the blow, recognizing Sahyuk's signature move that he used most often. The chip embedded in Sahyuk's neck was working at full capacity, helping its owner cast quick spells. Sahyuk cast the third circle spell, Explosion, intending to leave only ashes behind Hyul. Hyul moved with anticipation as he looked towards Sahyuk and his spell. The spectators in the arena could see how the place where Hyul stood was hit by fire projectiles of third circle magic, and everything there was engulfed in flames. Sahyuk laughed, saying that there was no need for Hyul to pretend to be all-powerful, thinking that victory was already in his hands. Sahyuk's laughter stopped when he noticed the movements. When the smoke cleared, Hyul appeared before him without a single scratch, and Sahyuk couldn't believe that he was unharmed. Sahyuk had no intention of giving up. He immediately began to cast the next spell, asking Hyul to endure it. Sahyuk put a lot of effort into the next third circle fire spell. Hyul cast a water spell, collecting the liquid in his palm, and was completely calm as the fireballs flew towards him. Hyul spread his arms out to the sides, forming a water shield above himself, which easily stopped the third circle's fire spell. Sahyuk watched in confusion as his favorite spell failed to do any damage, and was stopped by Hyul. Hyul easily manipulated the water around him, blocking Sahyuk's magic without any problem. At the same time, the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower, Kim Kan-yoon, a magician of the 8th Circle, watched the duel, muttering under his breath that he did not understand anything. Kim Kang-yoon looked out the window from the special room to the arena where the duel was taking place, thinking out loud that Hyul's first round magic was fast. His secretary next to him said she was curious why Kim Kang-yoon had put off tower business to watch the second year's exam. The secretary asked Kim Kang-eun if the Tower Lord knew about Hyul's magic, thinking that he came here for him, but he said no. Kim Kang-yoon did not take his eyes off Hyul, who was participating in the duel, saying that he simply saw an article about the genius's return and became curious. The secretary sighed, concluding that it was just a coincidence. The secretary reminded Kim Kang-yoon that if the world knew that he had come to watch the second-year students' exams, there would be a lot of gossip. Kim Kang-yoon laughed when he heard about her worries and said that he himself was well aware of it. Kim Kang-yoon noted that this is why he asked for a VIP room, to hide from prying eyes. The doors to the VIP room opened slightly, and a silhouette appeared behind them. Kim Kang-yoon turned around with interest. Looking a little surprised, he greeted the newcomer. Hyul, meanwhile, continued to enjoy participating in the duel with Sahyuk. Sahyuk began to get nervous. He bit his nail again, not understanding what kind of crazy thing was going on. Sahyuk didn't understand how the first circle magic could block the third circle magic so easily, remembering how Hyul did it. Sahyuk became increasingly nervous as he noticed that Hyul was currently having an abnormally high speed of casting spells. Hyul saw how nervous Sahyuk was, and mockingly asked him if he was interested in how he could cast spells so quickly. Sahyuk shouted at Hyul to shut up, losing his temper. Sahyuk was angry. He told Hyul to die silently, not intending to endure the humiliation of losing to Hyul a second time. Sahyuk once again cast the third circle of fire spells. This time, his spell was not blocked. Fireballs fell on the place where Hyul stood, and an explosion occurred. Sahyuk looked a little crazy, confident that he had succeeded this time. He said that the charms of the first circle were no match for him, but Sahyuk's words were cut off mid-sentence. Hyul stood in the middle of the explosion without a single scratch, invitingly waving his hand at Sahyuk. Sahyuk only had time to exclaim in confusion when Hyul created a wind spell, directing the wind spear at Sahyuk. Sahyuk barely managed to dodge the wind spear that threatened to pierce him. Sahyuk looked at Hyul with confusion, not even noticing when he managed to create a wind spear. Sahyuk looked at Hyul, who was dusting off his academy uniform after the explosion, and didn't understand why his attack didn't even scratch Hyul. Sahyuk became increasingly nervous and angry, and asked Hyul if he really intended to win with just first circle magic. Hyul created a new wind spear, saying that this is what he would do. The wind spear flew according to Hyul's will. Sahyuk barely managed to put up a defense using interactive magic. Sahyuk looked at the wind spear that had crashed against his defense in a crazed manner. Sahyuk had not yet lost confidence that his third circle interactive magic would be stronger than Hyul's first circle magic. Sahyuk shouted at Hyul, saying that he had only become bolder because he had learned to cast a little faster, not noticing how the sun was hiding the attack. Sahyuk's insults towards Hyul came to an end when another wind spear slammed into the arena from the sky, cutting through the uniform on Sahyuk's shoulder. Sahyuk started to scold Hyul while looking at his shoulder. Sahyuk didn't understand when the wind spear had moved behind his shoulder, looking at Hyul, who was running his finger through the air. Sahyuk couldn't help but ask what the hell Hyul was doing here. Hyul's actions attracted the attention of not only the enemy, but also those in the VIP room, Kim Kang-yoon and his secretary. Hyul smiled smugly, clearly knowing that his opponent didn't understand what was happening. His hand was raised, wind magic gathering around him. Hyul condescendingly asked if he should show it to Sahyuk again, so that he could understand. A bird created by wind magic fluttered above Hyul's hand. Hyul pointed his finger at Sahyuk, setting the flight path for the wind bird, and it rushed in the indicated direction. Sahyuk looked at Hyul's spell in shock, not believing that it was a wind spear, and his head couldn't comprehend the trajectory of the spell's movement. Hyul chuckled, agreeing that it was usually impossible to do that. Hyul created more birds, saying that it was within his power, and warned Sahyuk to try to block them well. 4 wind birds rushed towards Sahyuk. Sahyuk clicked his tongue and tried to summon the barrier as quickly as possible. A barrier appeared in the path of the wind birds, protecting Sahyuk from the 3 that crashed into the barrier in front of him. Sahyuk had time to rejoice, thinking that this was just a first circle spell, and all he had to do was be able to block it. At that moment, the 4th wind bird crashed into Sahyuk's back, knocking the air out of his lungs. Sahyuk didn't expect this. He was trying to figure out if one of the wind birds could have changed its trajectory. Hyul interrupted his thoughts, saying that it was wrong of Sahyuk to be distracted in the middle of a fight. Hyul spread his arms. New wind birds appeared around him. He told Sahyuk that he was just getting started. Hyul directed the wind birds towards Sahyuk without a specific trajectory. Sahyuk jumped back, cursing at Hyul and deciding that he could save himself by increasing the distance and moving out of the reach of his wind birds. Sahyuk believed that the range of these spells was limited, and hoped to buy himself some time. Sahyuk was confident that if he kept his distance, Hyul's unpredictable attacks would not reach him. Hyul, as if he could read his thoughts from his movements, praised Sahyuk for his good conclusion. Hyul decided to change tactics. He brought his hands together, placing his palms together. The Hyula windbirds changed their movements and began to gather together. Sahyuk looked up at the sky in shock, not understanding how this was possible. The windbirds united into one large windbird and flew straight towards Sahyuk. Kim Kang-yoon, the tower's lord, watched Hyul's actions with interest along with the other VIP room visitors. Kim Kang-yoon called Hyul's magic amazing, not understanding how he was able to combine spells and change the trajectory in an instant. Kim Kang-yoon's gaze fell on the man who had joined them to watch the duel as he asked what kind of magic this was. Kim Kang-yoon asked Hyul's father, Mr. Shin In-hyuk, thinking that he should definitely know the answer. Shin In-hyuk was the head of a highly respected family of magicians, and an 8th circle magician. Kim Kang-yoon could not help but know him. Shin In-hyuk didn't respond to Kim Kang-yoon, and the Tower Lord's secretary spoke up, saying that Hyul's magic ignored all the rules. She meant the original spell code that underlies all enchantments, what creates the enchantment and places limitations on it. If the target for the spell is further away than the spell's code specifies, the spell will not reach the target and the trajectory cannot be changed. Everyone is used to the fact that spells only work if everything matches the source code. Battles between magicians are more of a battle of wits. Modern magicians use carefully studied spells, and victory depends on anticipation and quick reaction. But Hyul, his magical style, which he inherited from Veitner, was different. The magic style that Hyul used ignored all principles of the original spell code. The great wind bird Hyula crashed into Sahyuk's barrier, causing it to crack. Sahyuk found himself on the broken floor of the arena, lamenting that he was losing to some first-round magic. Hyul approached him, not surprised that Sahyuk underestimated the magic of the first circle. He told him that his third circle did not matter here. Hyul sat down next to Sahyuk, a small amount of water appearing on his hand as he reminded him that it was possible to kill with a simple pen. Sahyuk stared at the water that had collected on Hyul's hand in confusion and asked what it was. Hyul smiled at him, replying that it was still first circle magic, water magic. Hyul directed the water towards Sahyuk, gradually cutting off his breathing, saying that killing didn't require incredible magic. The water enveloped Sahyuk's head, preventing him from breathing, and he scratched his throat. Hyul rose to his feet, brushing off his academy uniform, and began to talk about its safety zone properties that kept him from getting hurt. Hyul turned his gaze to Sahyuk, who was suffocating without access to air, noticing that the magical barrier on his uniform was useless to him. Sahyuk rolled on the ground, his limbs twisting, Hyul calling him as useless as the uniform that couldn't protect him. The arena watches what is happening with bated breath. Hyul looked at the audience. Hyul turned towards the instructor, asking if the result was obvious to him. The instructor, hearing Hyul's words that he could continue, quickly blew his whistle, signaling the end of the duel. A voice echoed throughout the arena, announcing that the match was over, and Shin Hol was declared the winner. Sahyuk was carried away by his friends, holding him under the shoulders. Hyul also left the arena. Hyul looked at his hand, clenched into a fist, realizing that he had already managed to forget. Hyul remembered the long-lost feeling of victory that often accompanied him as a child, when everyone considered him a genius. Hyul felt great, feeling that he had been rehabilitated as a magician. Kim Kang-yoon walked with his secretary down the corridor of the academy arena after finishing watching the duel that he was interested in. Kim Kang-yoon clearly remembered the duel he had just witnessed, believing that Hyul was a supernova explosion. Kim Kang-yoon felt genuine interest, intrigued by what he saw. Kim Kang-yoon's eyes gleamed with a little obsession as he said he wanted to know more about Hyul. Meanwhile, Suchin came running to Hyul. He was completely delighted with Hyul's victory, asking him what kind of training he had been doing. Suchin was at Hyul's side in an instant, putting his arm around his shoulders and bombarding him with questions with unbridled delight. Suchin continued to discuss magic with wild delight and animated gestures, showing with his hands some moments of the duel. Hyul asked if Suchin really wanted to know more about his magic, and Suchin agreed, leaning towards him so that no one else could hear. Hyul leaned closer, starting to whisper in Suchin's ear about the magic he had been using from afar. Hyul interrupted with a sly smile, saying that it was a secret, breaking Suchin, because he wanted to keep aired and the secrets in it only for himself. Hyul took out his phone, attracting Suchin's attention. Hyul asked if Suchin had seen the interview he had been given after the match, saying that it contained an explanation of his magic. During the interview, Hyul stood in front of reporters who were curious as to how he instantly activated his charms. Hyul looked into the camera, listening to questions about how he changed the trajectory and shape in one use of the spell. As soon as Hyul was about to answer the question, someone approached the group of journalists and interrupted him, saying that he would answer for Hyul. Hyul was surprised when he looked in the direction from which he heard the voice. Kim Kang-yoon approached them with his secretary. He told Hyul that he watched the match he recently participated in. Kim Kang-yoon walked up to Hyul, put his arm around his shoulders, and began telling the reporters that Hyul had used the fourth circle memorization magic. Kim Kang-gi extended his hand, on which a small flame appeared, to demonstrate what he meant. The reporters looked at Kim Kang-yoon and Hyul in surprise. Kim Kang-yoon continued to explain Hyul's magic for him, saying that this spell can activate the spells that the magician knows the structure of. Kim Kang-yoon responded to a reporter's question about why such magic is not used everywhere by saying that the magic should be weaker by 3 circles. Kim Kang-yoon turned to Hyul, asking if he was right in his explanation, and Hyul confirmed everything. Hyul was mentally glad that Kim Kang-yoon came with his own explanation, and he didn't have to talk about Waitner's style. The reporter stepped forward a little, asking if it was true that Hyul was a 4th circle since he could use memorization magic. Kim Kang-yoon placed both his hands on Hyul's shoulders, confirming this information, and Hyul decided to just smile politely. The flashes of the cameras blinded their eyes, capturing Hyul with the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower. Everyone was sure that the tower's ruler could not make a mistake, and considered it exclusive, comparing his height with Kim Kang-yoon himself. Suchin, who was watching the interview, looked at Hyul in surprise, asking about the 4th round, but quickly declined the questions. Suchin returned to the interview, where a question was asked about bypassing the source code. Kim Kang-yoon thought about how to answer this question, and Hyul watched with interest to see what he could come up with. Hyul took the initiative to explain, saying that it was quite easy to bypass the rules of the source code. Hyul continued to say that they just needed to modify the formula itself, causing Kim Kang-yoon to be surprised. Kim Kang-yoon looked at Hyul with wide eyes, thinking that it was simply impossible to modify the magic formula. It was clear to Kim Kang-yoon that this could not be done easily. Kim Kang-yoon looked at Hyul, wondering what his future would be like if Hyul was compatible with artificial intelligence. Hyul meanwhile cast a magic modification spell, summoning a butterfly-shaped charm. Butterflies filled the space among the reporters when Hyul said he was calling this magic modified. Kim Kang-yoon looked at his charms with predatory awe, covering his mouth with his hand. Hyul and his magic looked like a revolution in the world of magic in Kim Kang-yoon's eyes, turning everything upside down. The interview ended, opening the main news page of the site. Suchin looked at Hyul suspiciously, asking him about the modified magic and whether he really wanted people to believe it. After receiving an affirmative answer from Hyul, Suchin congratulated him on his victory, but did not believe in the modified magic. Suchan told Hyul that it was time for him to go back to the dorm, surprising him by leaving so quickly. Suchin said, as he left that he needed to prepare well for the difficult opponent that awaited him tomorrow. Hyul watched him go, curious about what kind of difficult opponent awaited Suchin. The next day, at the Obelisk Academy arena, where the midterm exam was taking place, spectators from the stands watched the duel in which Suchan took part. Suchin was on one knee, wiping his face, and did not take his eyes off his opponent. Hyul watched the duel from the stands, wondering who exactly Suchin had called a difficult opponent. There was a girl standing in the arena opposite Suchin. Adela Steward was preparing the Moon Bullet spell. Adela belonged to the French Steward family, a house of divine guardians of Korea, created from the fusion of two magical families. Hyul watched the duel, wondering how unique Adela's magic was. Adela stood on the magic circle she had created while Hyul recalled that the stewards had modified their magic, adding a lunar attribute. Suchin put up a barrier in front of himself, trying to block Adela's attack. Adela directed her spell at Suchin. Suchin's barrier shattered into pieces and he himself flew back. The instructor, who was monitoring the progress of the duel, whistled into a scroll, announcing that the match was over. The victory went to Adele, who at that moment was letting her hair out of its ponytail. Hyul was still looking at the arena with interest, thinking about his own things, while everyone around him was rejoicing. Hyul analyzed the magic of Adela that he had seen, thinking about the combination of light and darkness that created a glow like the moon. Steward magic had its own range, power, and other characteristics that were not listed in the source code databases. Hyul wasn't surprised that Adela wasn't easy to fight. He was distracted from his thoughts by Adela's gaze directed towards the stands. Hyul tried to figure out if Adela had just been looking at him. After some time, Hyul stood in front of Suchin, speaking words of consolation to him for his loss and handing him water. Suchin was devastated by the loss, lamenting that he had been given Adela out of all the possible opponents, while Hyul calmed him down. Suchin asked if Hyul had won his second fight, and upon receiving an affirmative answer, began to think about Hyul's next opponent. His words were interrupted by Adela, who came up to them, telling Suchin that he did well and they had a good fight. Suchin thanked her a little awkwardly, saying that he had learned a lot. Adela seemed not to listen to him, looking intently ahead. Hyul couldn't understand Adela's interest, catching her gaze on him for the second time. Adela asked Hyul if he had become a real wizard. Adela said she hoped he would help her remember the reason she came to this academy. Hyul knew Adela even before she enrolled in the academy, as their houses had a strong connection with each other. Their meetings often took place at various events, and Hyul could describe them as rivals. Adela even gave up her studies in France to follow Hyul to Obelisk Academy and crush him. However, ever since Hyul proved unsuitable for interactive magic, she hadn't even spoken a word to him. Hyul was branded a scumbag, and Adela lost the opponent she had been dying to defeat. Hyul scratched his neck awkwardly, telling Adele that he was unlikely to be able to compete with her for now. Adela turned around and, as she left, said that they would have to find out in battle. Suchin looked at Hyul, asking if everything would be okay, but Hyul did not understand the essence of his question. Suchin was shocked that Hyul was asking him about this seriously. Suchin told Hyul that his next opponent would be Adela Steward. Hyul didn't expect this. His eyes widened in surprise. He asked Suchin again. The arena was already empty by that time. It was getting dark. Hyul did not believe what he heard from Suchin, realizing that he had little time. The next day, at the Obelisk Academy arena, Adela flexed her wrists while the instructor looked at his watch. In the stands, the academy students were whispering that Hyul had not yet come because he was scared. Adela waited calmly in the arena while the students went psyched about Hyul, saying that he didn't stand a chance against her. The judge shook his head, getting Adela's attention, and a voice in the arena announced that the waiting time was up and the victory went to Adela. Hyul ran into the arena, pulling on his sweater, asking to stop. Hyul smiled, apologizing for being late. The instructor started scolding him, asking where he had been. The instructor quickly interrupted himself, saying that he would require an explanation later. There would be no time for a break, and it was time to get started. A voice in the arena called for Hyul and Adela to take positions. Adela asked Hyul why he was late. Hyul said that nothing special happened. Hyul formed an infinity circle around himself, saying that he was just making some preparations. Adela asked again, trying to understand what preparations he meant. Hyul smiled, saying that he had to prepare for their fight, because Adela was quite strong, and promised her an interesting fight. Adela asked Hyul if he really could change anything in a day, but Adela already felt it. Hyul in front of her was different from how he was yesterday. Adela hoped that she would be able to see his true gift. Hyul prepared to cast his spell, warning Adela in advance to give it her all from the start. At the start of the match, Adela began casting a spell, and a circle of magical energy appeared above her. Adela raised her hand in the shape of a firearm towards Hyul. Adela cast the fire revolver spell, and magical energy gathered from her fingers to fire. Adela used third circle magic, firing 3 fire blasts towards Hyul. Hyul raised his hand, controlling wind magic. Wind currents blocked the shots that did not manage to reach Hyul. Adela immediately began to cast the following spells, summoning earthen needles, and a small staff-like object appeared in her hands. The arena floor began to crack, and something was breaking through from under the ground. Hyul had to jump back to protect himself from the earth needles that jumped out at him from under the arena. Adela watched as Hyul dodged the earthen needles in a jump. Adela was about to make her next attack, saying that Hyul wouldn't be able to dodge while he was in the air. Adela stared at Hyul, preparing to work her spell. A large magic circle appeared behind Adela as she began to prepare an airstrike against Hyul. Hyul noticed Adela preparing an attack against him while he was in the air current. Hyul knew that most people couldn't avoid it, even if they knew about it. But a grin appeared on his face. Hyul landed on the barrier he had created in the air. The students watching the duel were confused as to how he had created a protective barrier in mid-air. Adela was also amazed. Adela looked at Hyul, who was using the reversing barrier as a support as if nothing had happened. Adela felt that Hyul was exactly the same as he always was. He still had an incredible magical sense. Hyul looked at Adela with a smile, thinking that he would have to use everything he had to counter the moon attribute. Hyul was determined, ready to use the sun itself in this battle to be able to resist Adela. Adela couldn't look at Hyul directly. The sun was blinding her. Adele had to close her eyes so she could focus on her opponent even a little. Hyul was preparing an attack at this time, hiding behind the sunlight, and Adela realized that she could only defend herself. Adela created a barrier in front of herself to protect herself from Hyul's attacks. Hyul jumped down from the reversible barrier he was using as a support. Hyul used an air spell to create a sword out of thin air in his hands. Hyul slashed at Adela's barrier with his air sword. Hyul was well aware of how careful Adela was, using a third circle spell as a countermeasure when he used the first. Hyul was pushed away from Adela's barrier, which was stronger than his spell. Hyul landed on his feet, using his hand to keep his balance. Adela was ready to move forward, deciding it was now her turn to attack. Before Adela could cast the spell, she noticed something was holding her leg and preventing her from moving. Adela was surprised to see that Hyul had already managed to block her movements. Adela didn't understand when Hyul managed to use Earthbind on him. Adela realized with shock that Hyul had used it as soon as he landed. Adela was amazed at the speed of the spell, realizing that she could not keep up with his movements at all. Hyul had already changed his position, attracting Adela's attention. Hyul began to cast new spells, changing his position. Water appeared on Hyul's palm as he cast the magic charge spell. Adela broke the earth binding that was restricting her movements. Meanwhile, Hyul had already created 3 magical charges around himself. Hyul directed magical charges towards Adela, which now resembled the images of dolphins. Adela managed to put up a barrier in front of herself. Hyul's magical blasts crashed into her barrier, unable to penetrate the third circle spell. Adela chuckled, deciding that this would be a lot easier than she thought. Adela recalled a moment from the interview where Kim Kang-yoon explained that Hyul uses the magic of memorizing the 4th circle. Adela knew perfectly well that this allowed the use of magic 3 circles below the current one, and Hyul only had access to the 1st circle. Adela was confident that Hyulu would not be able to defeat her with only 1st circle spells. Another spell flew from the direction of the sun towards Adela. Adela, who couldn't notice the spell from behind, didn't have time to dodge the modified wind spear. Adela didn't understand when Hyul could have managed to activate this spell. Adela remembered Hyul using such a spell in the match against Sahyuk. Adela guessed that Hyul might have hidden it in her sunblind spot. Adela writhed in pain, losing her balance. Hyul came closer to Adele, who had fallen to the arena floor. Hyul asked if Adela had forgotten who she was up against because it had been so long since they had fought each other. Adela pressed her lips into a thin line, feeling angry. At the same time, Kim Kang-yoon's secretary said that Hyul's fighting instincts exceeded all expectations. Kim Kang-yoon himself watched the arena from the VIP room with genuine interest, realizing that Hyul had planned and led the fight from the very beginning. Kim Kang-yoon recalled every moment of the fight between Hyul and Adela, where he forced her to attack. Kim Kang-yoon could see how every move Hyul made was planned to give him more advantages. This amazed and interested Kim Kang-yoon, who was still trying to understand Hyul's magic. Kim Kang-yoon continued to speak while standing next to Hyul's father, who was sitting in a chair and looking out at the arena. Kim Kang-yoon noted how Hyul distracted Adela by creating small traps that were unnoticeable to her. Kim Kang-yoon analyzed the entire match from start to finish with great interest, especially amazed at how good Hyul was at strategy. Kim Kang-yoon looked at Hyul's father, calling his son the most skilled magician of the 1st circle. Hyul's father did not show much emotion when Kim Kang-yoon said that this was the nickname given to Hyul by the media. Hyul's father did not share his joy about the magic of the 1st circle. Hyul's father told Kim Kang-yoon to just look at the arena where Hyul was standing opposite Adela. Adela was already on her feet and looking at her opponent. Hyul also looked at her, expecting their fight to develop more seriously. Hyul's father noticed that despite his advantages, Hyul could not deliver the decisive blow. Hyul's father said that Hyul could not complete the task. He looked at his son, who kept his fists clenched at his sides. Father Hyul continued, looking at his son's serious face, saying that Adela hadn't even used her trump card yet. Adela put her hand on her heart, telling Hyul that it was truly impressive. Their fight reminded her of the past. Adela said that now she too will fight with all seriousness. Hyul knew perfectly well what this meant. He was expecting it. Adela used her family's lunar attribute. Hyul covered himself with his hands, preparing for a more serious fight, not taking his eyes off his opponent. Adela was ready to use the special magic of the greatest house of divine guardians. A halo of the moon appeared behind her. A huge magic circle with the phases of the waxing moon appeared above Adela. Hyul continued to shield his eyes from the light emanating from around him as the arena crumbled around him. The magic circle completely covered the arena where the fight between Adela and Hyul was taking place. Hyul's father began to rise from his seat, attracting the attention of Kim Kang-yoon and his secretary. Kim Kang-yoon followed Hyul's father with his gaze, asking if he was really about to leave. Hyul's father turned to him, saying that the battle was over and there was nothing more to see. Their conversation was interrupted by an unexpected sound. They both turned to the window that looked out onto the arena. Kim Kanun's secretary exclaimed in surprise. Kim Kang-yoon looked at the arena, not hiding his impression. Suchin jumped up from his seat in the stands, his mouth open in shock. Adela looked at her opponent in shock, saying that this was unthinkable. A large magic circle appeared behind Hyul, from which fire magic erupted. Hyul extended his hand towards Adela, casting a fiery volcano spell. Adela still couldn't believe that she was seeing the magic of the second circle in front of her. Hyul reminded her of his explanation for being late because he was preparing for their match. Adela was still trying to figure out how he was using memorization if he was currently showing second circle magic. Adela, not believing what she was saying, asked Hyul if he had really somehow reached the fifth circle. Hyul smiled without answering. The night before, at the Obelisk student dorm after Hyul learned of the upcoming fight with Adela, Hyul was sitting on his bed with Ired's book lying opposite him, and he was silently looking at the book. Hyul thought that Adela was not an opponent that he could deal with using only first circle magic. Hyul took Ired in his hands, realizing that even his own fighting style was no match for her magic. Hyul grumbled as he opened the book, saying he wanted to fight her when he got stronger. Hyul looked at Ired's new page, realizing that if he could make it happen, everything could change. Hyul reread what he saw once more, seeing that it said to pour mana into the magic formula. The words in Ired that the formula could open up new facets of reality for Hyul attracted him. Hyul wondered what this formula could do, looking at it with some distrust. Hyul quickly stopped himself, deciding that he had enough hesitation. Hyul put mana into his hand. Hyul pressed his hand filled with mana to the book, and the pages began to glow. Hyul's mana was absorbed into the magic circle drawn on the pages of Ired. Hyul closed his eyes to avoid being blinded by the bright light that once again appeared from Ired. Hyul pulled his hand away from Ired, shielding his eyes from the book as the glow became unbearably bright. Ired remained lying on Hyul's bed, emitting a faint glow, and Hyul disappeared. Hyul opened his eyes, trying to adjust to the change in lighting. His surprise knew no bounds when Hyul realized that he had ended up in a different place. It looked like a library. Kayul looked around, trying to figure out where he was. A voice behind him greeted him at the first test page. The girl, who appeared out of nowhere, introduced herself as Alpha, the guide responsible for the first trial page. Hyul turned to Alpha, asking again, still surprised by her appearance. Alpha opened her arms, saying that this was the first test on the pages of Ired. Hyul remembered the magic circle he had poured mana into, surprised by what was inside the book. Hyul looked around again, surprised that this was not a teleport to somewhere, but an entrance to a spatial dimension inside the book. Hyul was amazed. He considered it something incredible. Alpha continued to explain, saying that this test would test the successor's intentions. Alpha said it would reveal details of the test at launch. Hyul listened carefully to Alpha's words about how, after successfully completing the test, new pages of Ired would open up for him. Hyul thought about it, realizing that he needed to pass the tests in order to receive the instructions to advance to the second circle. Alpha asked Hyul if he wanted to begin the test. Hyul answered without hesitation, saying that he already wanted to start. Alpha bowed, accepting his consent. Alpha began to slowly disappear, hovering above Hyul, saying that his test was beginning. Alpha completely dissolved after the words that the test was beginning. Hyul looked at the vanished Alpha above him, shocked by what was happening. Hyul was amazed that Alpha was a magical entity that looked so much like a human. Veitner's voice caught Hyul's attention, and he said that he would now explain the details of the test to him. Hyul immediately recognized the voice of his teacher, which he had already heard from Ired. A gem appeared in front of Hyul, and a voice explained that it was called an elemental. Hyul listened to the voice explaining that the gem contained an indefinite amount of mixed elements of nature. Hearing the task of setting the final order of the mana in the stone, Hyul looked at the gem in front of him. Hyul knew that one had to be very careful when interacting with the mana of wild elemental stones, as it was a very delicate material. Hyul looked closely at the chaos of their elements of nature, realizing that there were only 4 types within them. Hyul tried to figure out how to organize the mana, comparing it to a mixture of different loose ingredients that needed to be separated. Hyul knew that only a skilled master of the mind technique could handle it, and he took the task very seriously. But more than the excitement of a difficult task, Hyul felt intrigued as to whether he could handle it when he began working with the gem. Hyul channeled mana into his eyes, using a mind technique to be able to see all the particles inside the gem. The chaos of the 4 elements inside the gem appeared before Hyul in all its glory. Hyul began to use the mind technique, carefully separating each type into its own sections so that they would not mix with each other. Infinity rings moved around Hyul as he concentrated on working on the task with the gem. Hyul strained all his strength, channeling it into concentration to cope with the mind technique. Hyul opened his eyes, looking at the gem, where each facet had particles of its own type. He grunted, putting in effort. Hyul was thrown away from the gem and crashed back into a bookshelf. Hyul realized that any extra fluctuation in mana could cause a shockwave, and he would have to act even more carefully. Hyul took off the book that fell on his head, thinking that he was trying to divide the mana. But there was so much mixed up inside that it was difficult to do. But Hyul refused to give up. He had a great idea, and he was going to continue no matter how long it took. Hyul completely forgot about time as he continued his attempts to organize the mana flows within the gem. The slightest mental slip-up would cause a shockwave, throw Hyul back, and force him to start all over again. After many attempts, Hyul finally succeeded, and he looked at the divided mana inside the elemental stone with delight. Weitner's voice congratulated Hyul on passing the test, and Hyul felt warmth as he addressed him as his successor. Weitner's voice informed Hyul that the second circle, the circle of resonance and new recordings in Ered, would now open to him. Hyul opened his eyes in his room. He was lying on his bed, the sun's rays were shining through the window. It took him a few moments to realize that he had returned from passing Ered's test. Ered, still open, lay nearby, and text was beginning to appear on its blank pages. Hyul took Ered in his hands with a smile, happy that he would finally be able to form a second magic circle. Hyul looked at his watch, deciding to figure out how much time was left before the start of the competition. Hyul was confident in himself, deciding that before the competition began, he would learn the second circle spells. In the present day, at the Obelisk Academy Arena, a match is taking place between Adela and Hyul. Adela used a Halo spell based on the lunar attribute of the Steward family magic. The arena beneath Hyul broke apart due to Adela's magic circle hanging over it. Adela waved her hand, directing magic to the place where Hyul was. Adela watched as her magic broke the arena where Hyul stood. Suchin watched their fight, worried about Hyul, for whom this should have been the limit. Adela fixed her hair, saying that this could be considered the end of the match. Adele was curious about how Hyul had progressed in such a short period of time, but the genius she had been chasing all this time was no longer there, because Adela believed that she had won the long-awaited victory. Adela was about to leave the arena when a noise made her stop. Adela turned around at the noise, not understanding what the sound was. Hyul activated the second circle, the circle of resonance. A large magic circle appeared behind Hyul's back, and in each hand was an element. He cast a spell of darkness blindness. Hyul completed the merging of the two circles of infinity. Huge hands appeared from the magic circle behind Hyul. Hyul controlled them, as if they were his own. They repeated his movements. Hyul called them to become his hands and feet. Hyul's father and Kim Kang-yoon were amazed by what they saw from the window of the VIP room at the arena. Suchin and the other students opened their mouths in shock. Adela froze in place, trying to understand what was happening before her eyes. The hands summoned by Hyul destroyed the pillars of her magic, preventing them from moving further. Hyul began to cast the next spell, casting the Fire Volcano spell. Adela tried to react, preparing to call upon protective spells. Hyul used the first version of Resonance. A fire weapon appeared next to him, aimed at the enemy. Adela stared ahead with wide eyes, not believing that this was possible. Adela saw the attack flying towards her and knew she was powerless to block it. Adela still cast the barrier spell. Adela looked at Hyul with a warm smile, glad that he was back and now he would be her target again. Hyul's fire cannon fired a burst at Hyul's command. The instructor jumped to the side, covering his face from the rising dust. Hyul looked ahead as the dust settled. Hyul's father and Kim Kang-yoon looked at the arena without looking away. Adela lost her balance, falling backwards after Hyul's attack. Hyul looked at Adela, who had lost consciousness after the powerful attack. Hyul sat down, feeling tired after the fight with Adela. An announcement was heard throughout the arena that the fight was over, and Hyul was declared the winner. Kim Kang-yoon looked again at Hyul's father, who was heading out of the VIP room, asking him where he was going. Hyul's father informed him that he had to fulfill his obligations. Kim Kang-yoon chuckled, understanding what he was talking about. Kim Kang-yoon looked down at the arena again where Hyul was. Kim Kang-yoon looked at Hyul smiling at the audience, concluding that his father really was a man of his word. After the fight, there was a crowd in the corridors. Everyone was whispering among themselves. Hyul took off his jacket, feeling exhausted as hell. The second circle of infinity synchronized with the first circle in his head and strengthened his magic. The moon attribute magic that Adela used is a hybrid. This magic combines the range of light magic and the power of dark magic. In other words, if you overdo it with dark magic, the range of the strong will decrease. Hyul was only able to deal with the Halo with the help of his more advanced dark magic. Hyul only needed to glance at the magic formula thanks to his perfect mana control, and the resonance circle allowed him to understand the magic formula with incredible accuracy. And he was able to decipher the very structure of the spell. Thoughts about how training with the elemental stone had helped him were interrupted by other people's voices. Hyul looked where everyone was looking. Kim Kang-yoon adjusted his glasses, knowing how much attention he was attracting. Kim Kang-yoon walked confidently towards Hyul. Kim Kang-yoon called out Hyul's name as he approached him, as if they were old friends. Hyul stared at Kim Kang-yoon, not understanding anything. Hyul jumped up from his seat, exclaiming in surprise about the Tower Lord who stood right in front of him while the others looked at them. Kim Kang-yoon told Hyul that he came to talk to him. Hyul sat across from Kim Kang-yoon at a table in a private reception area. Kim Kang-yoon appeared friendly as he apologized to a tired Hyul and said he was watching the match. Hyul thanked him. Kim Kang-yoon adjusted his glasses and said he would get straight to the point. Kim Kang-yoon asked Hyul if he really reached the fifth circle. Hyul looked at Kim Kang-yoon in surprise, not knowing what to answer. Hyul understood why Kim Kang-eun was asking him about this after using the second circle spells, as Kim Kang-eun thought by memorization. Hyul understood that according to the logic of memorization, if he used the spells of the second circle, then he should be, at least, a magician of the fifth circle. Hyul raised his hands, saying that he had not reached the fifth circle. Kim Kang-yoon still acted friendly, saying that he knew it, and asked how he used the second circle back then. Hyul hesitantly asked if Kim Kang-yoon would believe him if Hyul said he used a modification to the charm. Kim Kang-yoon thought about it, asking Hyul if he meant what he showed in the interview back then. Kim Kang-yoon recalled how Hyul released butterflies among the reporters. Hyul agreed, deciding that it would be easier this way, and said that it was just another modification. Hyul thought that the 5th round at his age would be a worldwide sensation, and he realized that it was better not to use the 3rd round in front of everyone. Hyul thought that it should be hidden for now. But Kim Kang-yoon tried to find out how the modification related to the 2nd round. Kim Kang-yoon watched Hyul closely, waiting for his answer. Hyul placed his hand on his chest, saying that he had perfected the spell itself. Kim Kang-yoon became interested in his words, asking Hyul again as if he didn't believe it. Kim Kang-yoon stood up from his seat, laughing and thinking out loud that it was possible while Hyul was nervous. Kim Kang-yoon stood right next to Hyul, lamenting that this was simply amazing. Kim Kang-yoon reached out to Hyul, his eyes turning red. Hyul turned to Kim Kang-yoon with gratitude, who praised him for overcoming the shortcomings of those charms. Hyul froze when he saw Kim Kang-yoon's red eyes. Kim Kang-yoon looked at Hyul carefully, holding his hand on his shoulder. Kim Kang-yoon looked like he wanted to get into Hyul's head. Hyul froze in place, amazed by the sensations. The moments that Kim Kang-yoon looked at Hyul seemed endless. Kim Kang-eun smiled at Hyul after finishing and removed his hand from his shoulder. Hyul listened to Kim Kang-eun's words, who said that Hyul really didn't have the mana formation characteristic of the 5th circle inside him. Kim Kang-eun smiled and told Hyul that it seemed that Hyul was not lying to him and that he really had not reached the 5th round. Kim Kang-eun straightened his tie with a smile and said that he would go and explain everything to the reporters. Kim Kang-eun pointed to his eyes, saying that they would serve as proof. Hyul stood up from his seat, still shocked from the inspection, and thanked Kim Kang-eun, wishing him a safe journey. Hyul continued to bow in farewell until the door closed behind the Tower Lord. Hyul exhaled, still a little nervous about the situation. Hyul ran his hand through his hair, thinking that he couldn't have predicted that he would use his red eyes to confirm his words. Red eyes were the characteristic of the Blue Tower Lord Kim Kang-eun. They say that thanks to them, he is able to discern the essence of mana itself, and these are the best magic detectors in the world. Hyul wondered if he had really passed their test, and the Tower Lord said nothing about it. Hyul remembered about Ered, which contained the magical style of Veitner, the greatest secret, and he was not going to share it with the world. The next match on the territory of the Obelisk Academy Arena also ended with a victory for Hyul. Hyul looked at his unconscious opponent and clenched his fist, determined to move on. In the hallway immediately after the match, Adela ran at Hyulum, trying to stop him. Hyul turned around, surprised to see Adela. Adela, covered in bandages, approached Hyul, who was surprised that she had regained consciousness and was already on her feet. Hyul asked what she wanted, and Adela suggested discussing the battle they had just had in detail, a little nervously. Adela tugged at her hair with a dull look, saying that it could be done not now if Hyul was tired before the final. Hyul interrupted her, saying that they could do it right now and pointed towards the waiting room. Adela's eyes lit up when Hyul said he could use some analysis too. Hyul went forward while Adela thought that analyzing their match would allow her to learn a lot. Adela was burning with the idea that she too wanted to become like Hyul, who felt her determined gaze even behind his back. At the same time, in a skyscraper on which was the coat of arms of the House of Magic, in the sunlit penthouse, a television was on, showing an interview with Hyul. The girl from the House of Magic was shocked by what she saw, because she thought that he was finished with a long time ago. This place was a subsidiary office of the Magic Tower. Shin-sia, the eldest daughter of the magician's house, looked at the big TV screen where Hyul was shown, cursing. Sia was sure that the battle was already decided, she muttered under her breath, getting her brother's attention. Sia turned to her older brother, Shin Jihan, asking if Hyul would get away with this. Jihan looked at her, asking what she wanted him to do. Sia couldn't control her emotions as she asked Jihan what would happen if Hyul returned to the house, reminding him of the atmosphere that was there a year ago. Sia gestured vigorously, saying that she couldn't stand this kind of treatment any longer. But Jihan stopped her, telling her not to worry. Jihan remembered what Hyul was like a year ago, when he was considered a genius. Jihan continued, saying that right now, Hyul could barely handle the second circle of magic, and in a fight, it was nothing. Jihan looked at Sia again, asking her if she had seen his matches. Sia couldn't calm down so easily, telling Jihan that there was a stir around Hyul again. Jihan put his arm around his sister's shoulders, telling Sia to listen to him carefully. Jihan looked at the TV, saying that Hyul's opponents were students who had barely reached the 3rd circle. Even a 4th-round rookie would be his equal. Jihan continued by saying that Hyul had a critical flaw, his unsuitability for interactive magic. Jihan was sure that Hyul was inferior to an ordinary 4th circle mage, despite the fact that he managed to compensate for the difference with AI chips. Sia agreed with her brother, still a little worried, deciding that Jihan was right, and Hyul could only flounder in the mud. Sia started biting her nail, wondering if Hyul would somehow be able to compensate for it while Jihan drank coffee. When Sia said that Hyul could somehow threaten her position as the family heir, Jihan looked at his sister. Jihan poured mana into the mug, breaking it, and said that that was when he and Hyul would sort things out. That same day, closer to sunset, in the arena of the Obelisk Academy, the final of this midterm exam was taking place in the arena. One of the opponents fell unconscious on the arena floor. The instructor blew his whistle, letting everyone know that the match was over. A voice echoed throughout the arena, informing everyone that the winner of the midterm exams was Yahello. The students applauded him from the stands, welcoming the return of a genius. Yahello listened to their joyful cries, enjoying the moment. Many were amazed that Yahello was able to surpass the AI with just ancient magic, calling it a genius as Yahello waved it around. Suchin shouted to Yahello from the stands that Yahello was the best. Suchin appeared in front of Yahello in an instant and began shaking his shoulders, happily telling him that everyone now recognized his skills. But not everyone was happy with his victory, believing that Yahello was nothing without his ancient tricks. The class teacher approached Yahello with Suchan, congratulating his student and saying that he was proud of him. Suchin immediately suggested throwing a small party to celebrate Yahello's victory, and the teacher said that he had wanted to suggest it himself. Suchin started shouting at all the students to get ready, not hearing Yahello asking him to stop for just a second. Yahello raised his hand so Suchin finally noticed him and said that he wanted to go, but he had an important meeting today. Suchin asked Yahello in shock, who had already managed to wriggle out of his embrace, asking how they could celebrate without the culprit. Yahello waved goodbye to him, apologizing and saying that it was very important. The class teacher patted Suchin on the shoulder while Yahello shouted an apology at him. After some time, Yahello walked outside the academy grounds, thinking that this was too important a meeting for him to miss. Something immediately caught Yahello's attention when he stepped outside. There was a representative car parked next to the academy, and the driver greeted young Mr. Yahello, saying that he had been waiting for him. Yahello looked at the old man, accepting his greeting. The driver opened the door for Yahello, informing him that the head of the family was already waiting for him, and he would escort him to the mansion. The car arrived at the mansion when the sun had already set behind the horizon, and the moon was shining high in the sky. Yahello approached the door of a familiar mansion. Yahello looked at the doors, thinking that a whole year had passed since he had been here. After being labeled as a scumbag, Yahello rebelled against his father and entered the academy anyway, choosing to live in the dorms. He was forbidden to enter the family mansion. And here he is, a year later, standing inside the mansion. Yahello looked around in front of him, noticing that nothing had changed during his absence. Yahello walked forward, knowing full well where his father was waiting for him. Yahello approached the large oak doors behind which his father's office was hidden. Yahello pulled himself together, remembering the last time he saw his father. Yahello was determined. He finally returned after a long absence. Yahello knocked his knuckles on his father's office door. His father sat at the table in his office, with an empty chair in front of him. Hearing a knock on the door, Father Yahello looked up at the door. Yahello opened the door, hearing his father's voice telling him to go inside. Yahello entered his father's office and bowed to him, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. Yahello raised his head, turning to his father. His father closed the book he was reading, telling Yahello to sit down. Yahello sat down on a chair opposite the table, and his father said he was almost ready to accept his son's failure. His father stood up, walking around his son who was sitting on the chair, criticizing his abilities in magic in the past compared to interactive magic. Yahello listened to his father, who told him directly that Yahello could only successfully prove himself as a talentless and unsuitable candidate. His father placed his hand on the back of the chair behind Yahello, saying that he wanted to channel his undeniable talent into theory to somehow improve the situation. His father was serious, saying that this time too he had no expectations from Yahello. He considered it a cry of despair. Yahello told his father that he understood his reaction. Yahello's father reminded him of the article that was published about him with the help of Suhyuk's family, saying that he thought it was a good opportunity. Yahello looked at his father's back as he approached his desk again, and spoke about how Yahello should have faced humiliation and surrendered. Father Yahello admitted that he completely destroyed his expectations, and was able to overcome the lack of incompatible. The father recalled the moment from the interview with Yahello, noting that he was even able to create his own modification of magic. Yahello's father turned to his son, admitting that this round was Yahello's. His father acknowledged with a smile that his prowess in battle was worthy of the title of a true wizard. Yahello's eyes widened in surprise when he saw and heard his father's confession. Yahello sincerely thanked his father, jumping to his feet. His father continued in a more friendly tone, saying that from now on the family would fully support him. Yahello's father was serious. He told his son that he could ask for whatever was required for his studies, and all restrictions would be lifted from him. Yahello's father pointed to his son, telling him to use his powers for the glory of the family as a rightful heir. Yahello was happy to hear these words from his father again. Yahello's father raised his finger, warning his son one last time. Yahello's father stepped as close to him as possible, telling him what awaited him if he rolled down again or stood in one place for too long. Yahello's father placed his hand on his son's head, saying that he would personally destroy his magic circle using the power in his voice. Yahello clenched his fist, feeling the pressure of the 8th circle sorcerer from his father, which terrified him. But Yahello knew perfectly well that this was his last chance, so he agreed with his words without hesitation. Father Yahello sat back down at his desk, asking what his son was aiming for. His father reminded him that in the past, he wanted to lead the Shin family. Yahello's father named all the brothers and sisters who were far ahead of Yahello. Yahello was not going to go back on his words, saying that his decision to become the head of the family was final. Yahello's father asked how he was going to do this. Hearing that Yahello wanted everyone in the family to accept him, Yahello put a newspaper on the table, saying that the event would happen in 2 months. Yahello was referring to the World Magic Olympiad. which brings together the most outstanding personalities from all over the world. Kayul confidently told his father that he would bring him a gold medal from the Olympics. The Magic Olympiad is open only to students under 20 each year, and is an arena for those who want to attract the attention of the world. Kayul's father was not so confident in his son's words. He reminded Kayul that the country's best result was the silver medal won by the tower's ruler. Kayul's father asked if his son understood how impossible his promise of a gold medal was to fulfill. Kayul understood his father's concerns perfectly well, and said that this was why he would have a request for him. Hyul asked his father to prevent his brothers and sisters from interfering with him for the next 2 months, until the competition was over. Father thought, looking at Hyul, that he was a desperate guy who used for immediate protection what he might not yet receive. The father chuckled, deciding that under normal circumstances he would have refused him, but now he told his son that it sounded tempting. The next day, in the academy dormitory building, there were books strewn all over the floor in Hyul's room. Hyul was sleeping on the floor among the books, with Ired lying open on him. The sunlight blinded Kayul, who had barely opened his eyes and did not notice how he had managed to fall asleep. Hyul rubbed his neck, remembering that as soon as he returned from the family mansion, he immediately began searching for the next test. Kayul, who had barely fulfilled the conditions for the second round, was already impatient to move on to the third, for which he needed a test. But Ired didn't give him a single clue in the records. Hyul's only hope was in resonance. Hyul understood that he could upgrade him to the level of a master of the second magic circle. Hyul was ready to pour in mana, making it flow according to the principles of resonance, in order to reach the second test. Hyul checked the records and erred, believing that the development of the resonance circle was connected to how he developed the circle of the call of the heart. Hyul couldn't understand anything from the notes. He tried intuitively, creating a connection of circles between his palms. The circle's connection resonated weakly with Ired due to the mana infusion, but nothing happened. Hyul buried his face in the book again, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. Hyul sighed, deciding that a short walk might help him clear his thoughts. After some time in the city on the river embankment, Hyul walked along the embankment, feeling his thinking become clearer from the fresh air. Hyul took a deep breath with his eyes closed and smiled, deciding that after his walk and breakfast, he would try to immerse himself in his studies. Hyul opened his eyes to hear someone shouting at him to watch out. Hyul turned around, not understanding what these warnings were about, and saw something flying at his face. The next moment, a package flew into Hyul's face. Hyul sat down rubbing his face in pain, and the culprit of the incident approached him, asking if he was okay. Hyul looked up and was surprised to see a familiar face. Adela looked with concern at Hyul, who received her package. After some time, they were walking along the embankment together, and Hyul asked her how the package had even flown towards him. Adela told how she was spinning around with the bag in happiness, anticipating how she would drink banana milk, and according to her, the package simply flew out of her hands, flying towards Hyul. Hyul accepted her awkward explanation, and Adela apologized again, bowing to him. Hyul tried to calm her down by saying that he had gotten banana milk for free, and asked Adela if that was the only kind she drank. Adela opened the bag filled with a bunch of milk cartons without hesitation, saying that it was the best invention of mankind. Adela and Hyul were drinking banana milk while walking, and the girl asked if Hyul had really gone home the other day. Hyul answered honestly that yesterday, he was officially given back all his rights as a family member. Adela was happy for him, asking if he still dreamed of taking the place of the head of the family. Hyul was surprised by her question, asking if he had said that before. Adela remembered the moment from her childhood when she heard those words from Hyul. With a smile, Adela said that Hyul often mentioned this. Hyul looked thoughtfully at the sky, replying that this was no longer his dream. Adela was surprised by his answer, asking if Hyul had really accepted reality. Adela said thoughtfully that the House of Magicians had many worthy candidates, and it was not easy to become the head, but Hyul did not understand why she said this. Hyul looked at her, confidently saying that his dream was not only to get the House of Magicians. Hyul's eyes gleamed with confidence as he added that he was going to become the head of the Magic Tower. Adela listened in shock to his words that Hyul wanted to stand at the top of the entire world of magic. And this was his new goal. Adela said thoughtfully that it sounded like some kind of unattainable goal. Adela smiled at Hyul, saying that for someone who had come as far as Hyul, this was clearly not an easy goal. That same evening, in the family mansion of the House of Magicians, Sia bit her nails nervously. Saya suddenly stood up from her seat, turning to Jihan, who was standing next to her. She asked why he wasn't worried at all. Jihan stood with his arms crossed over his chest, saying that their father must have had his reasons. Jihan thought, putting his hand to his chin, not believing that his father had set such conditions during their meeting. Some time ago they came to their father's office, who called them. Their father said that he knew Jihan and Saya well, so he would have to give them a direct order not to touch Hyul for the next few months. Sia's mouth dropped open in surprise as she stood behind Jihan, who frowned slightly. Saya began to ask her father in a raised voice why he was doing this, but Jihan stopped her questions with a wave of his hand. Jihan remained calm, asking his father if he was saying this for any special reason. Their father kept his eyes on them, saying that he was sure that they already knew that Hyul had been reinstated in his rights in the House of Magicians. Their father continued to say that Hyul's value was not great because he had not participated in the family business for a whole year, The older brother and sister listened to their father's words about how Kayul would need time to adapt again. Their father, in the form of a question, pointed out that his children standing in front of him could hinder his adaptation so that Hyel could not become the head of the family. Jihan remained silent and had a calm expression on his face, but inside he was seething with discontent. Jihan smiled at his father, saying that he understood his request, and asked if his father wanted to tell them anything else. Their father rose from his seat and turned to the window, saying that he was not going to tell them anything more, and sent them off to rest. At the moment, Sia was trying to find out from Jihan why he didn't even argue. Sia fell silent, stopping to torture her older brother with questions, as if she had seen something. Jihan's face was twisted with anger as he said that it wouldn't have changed anything anyway. The other siblings, Minhyuk and Minji, weren't interested in competing for the position of head of the family, and Jihan understood why they weren't invited. Jihan didn't understand why his father wanted them to leave Hyul alone because he missed a year. Jihan understood perfectly well that his father had ordered Kayul to somehow make up for lost time. But such protection was only available to the younger ones without a chip. Hyul was already 17, and Jihan wondered why his father had demanded this of them. Sia began to bite her nails again, fearfully assuming that her father might have already made his choice. Jihan interrupted her thoughts, saying that this definitely couldn't be the case, because Hyul had demonstrated too little. Jihan understood that his father most likely saw potential in his youngest son again. Jihan exhaled, assuming that his father might simply be interested in Hyul's magic, or that he had forced him to do so by promising something in return. Si listened to Jihan's words, asking what Hyul could possibly promise. Seiya grabbed her head with her hands, lamenting that under normal circumstances, her father would never do such a thing, and cursed Hyun. Sia asked Jihan if the people assigned to Hyun should be removed, and Jihan confirmed, unless she wanted them to be gutted by the Shadows. The Shadows were the father's personal spies who secretly worked for the family. They were good at everything from infiltration to protection. Jihan moved closer to the door, preparing to leave, and told Sia that he had already called off his observers. Sia jumped up again, asking Jihan what he intended to do next. Jihan didn't answer her, saying that he would go first. He knew very well that Si rarely took direct part in anything. Jihan didn't like the idea of doing nothing, and acknowledged the danger from Hyel, deciding that he needed the help of the Black Magic Tower. The next day at the Obelisk Academy, class teacher Kayula congratulated everyone on successfully passing the midterm exams, telling them about his pride. Hyul stood listening to the class teacher say that he was proud of Hyul for winning first place. Kayul approached his class teacher, having received a certificate, and heard the words that he had the best result among children of the same age in the country. His class teacher suggested that he maintain this result for a couple of months in order to take part in the World Olympiad. Kayul answered with confidence that this is exactly what he would strive for. While Hyul was returning to his seat, the other students whispered among themselves, thinking that Hyul was acting like something out of character. Nobody believed that Kayul would last the next 2 months, and they bet that he would deflate within a week. Kayul did not comment on the students' whispers in any way, but simply sat down at his desk. Hyul grinned, looking forward to the future. After some time, Suchin was stretching in the academy's corridor, happy that it was finally over. Suchin grumbled tiredly about having to endure 8 theory classes in a row. But Hyul reminded him that from now on, it was just practice. Suchin replied that it would be no less stressful, and Hyul gave him a friendly punch in the chest, telling him that he could use some physical activity. Suchin dropped to his knees, making a timeout gesture with his hands, while Hyul looked at him, saying that he was clearly out of shape. Suchin glared at Hyul with displeasure after surviving his friendly blow. Suchin rose to his feet and ran after Hyul, remembering that now he couldn't beat him in magic, and Hyul told him to work on his weaknesses. Hyul smiled when he heard Suchin grumble about getting pumped up and giving him a pumpkin. Hyul chuckled, suggesting that they grab some food and head to the gym. Suchin looked at him silently with a long face, and Hyul wondered what this meant. Suchin tried to hide his feelings by saying that he wasn't feeling well, and that he wanted to give up not because he didn't want to train. Hyul crossed his arms over his chest, telling Suchin to tell it like it is. Suchin placed both his hands on Hyul's shoulders, admitting that he didn't hate training, but simply didn't like training with Hyul. Hearing Hyul's question, who couldn't understand why he was bothering him during training, Suchin honestly admitted that Hyul was scary. And not only him. In the training hall of the Obelisk Academy, a crowd of students looked towards Hyul, who was doing squats with a huge weight. Hyul thought about talking to Suchin as he continued training, while those around him looked at him with fear because of his workload. The students in the room recognized Hyul because of his recent achievements. Hyul finally lowered the barbell with a large weight, finishing the set. Hyul wiped the sweat from his face with a towel, thinking about how he had neglected his training while learning Veitner's magic. Hyul took a sip of water from his sports bottle, remembering what he had read about it in IRED. It said that physical exercise can improve the circle because it circulates throughout the body, and they are interconnected. Hyul continued training, knowing that he needed to train both magic and physics. Hyul took a determined approach to training, determined to achieve the body of his dreams. The next day, within the walls of the Obelisk Academy, a monster resembling a panther with 3 eyes growled. Hyul stood in the arena surrounded by 3 monsters. Monsters with huge claws rushed to attack Hyul. Hyul jumped to the side to avoid their attack. Hyul watched the monster's movements carefully as he activated his circle. Hyul attacked the monsters with windy spears. One of the monsters disappeared after being attacked by Hyul, but the other two continued to attack. Hyul ducked, avoiding the attack, and the monsters collided heads. Hyul activated the flame volcano spell, and a fiery charge gathered in his palm. A firebolt hit one of the monsters. The last monster continued to attack Hyul. As the last monster fell to the fire spell, a voice echoed throughout the arena, announcing that Hyul had finished his practical training. The class teacher looked at his tablet to announce the result. Hyul smiled and thanked his homeroom teacher when he heard that he had received the highest score. After some time, Hyul sat on a bench while other students were preparing to take the exam and looked at his hand. Hyul felt that thanks to the circles of infinity, his physical indicators increased almost 1.5 times. Hyul was eager to push the laps as much as he could, looking forward to the improvements he would achieve on the third lap. Hyul closed his eyes to concentrate and sense the mana. Hyul concentrated all his attention on the resonance circle, the 2 streams of mana inside him that spread throughout his entire body. Thanks to his training with the elemental gem, Hyul could sense every tiny detail. Hyul tried to reduce the vibration and deviations of the mana flows, and align their flows, feeling how they slowly become one. Hyul exhaled tiredly, relaxed, and looked at the ceiling. Hyul had achieved 99% synchronization, but the last one was elusive no matter how hard he tried. But Hyul did not lose his determination. He had to bring the second round to perfection, and he knew that he would definitely succeed. That same evening, Hyul went out for a run. Hyul ran through the streets, listening to music on his headphones. Something around the corner of the building caught Hyul's eye, and he slowed down a little. A dark silhouette around the corner of the building began to move. A fist was aimed at Hyul's face. Hyul barely managed to lean back to prevent the unknown man in the hooded suit from hitting him in the face with his fist. Hyul, dumbfounded, asked the stranger, who was hiding his face, who he was. Hyul's eyes widened in surprise when he recognized the man hiding behind the disguise. Baek Sayuk stood in front of him, his hood pulled over his head and half of his face covered with a black mask. Sayuk swung at Hyul again, but he was able to dodge it. Sayuk told Hyul that he looks like a rat because of the way he dodges punches. Hyul squatted down to pick up the earphone that had fallen out and asked Sayuk why he hadn't gone home for the weekend. Hyul chuckled, deliberately irritating Sayuk by asking if it was because he couldn't go now. Hyul stood up, mocking the fact that Sayuk was now on probation, while Sayuk was shaking with anger. Hyul didn't calm down even though Sayuk told him to shut up, continuing to talk about Sahyuk's father, who he used to hide behind. Hyul remembered how he defeated Sahyuk during the first match, calling him poor since he had nowhere to go now. Sahyuk exploded in anger, calling Hyul a piece of trash. Sahyuk began to cast fire spells. Hyul himself did not expect that Sahyuk will start to cast spells on the street because of a couple of harsh words directed at him. Sahyuk rushed at Hyul, shouting at him that he was a bastard. Hyul pushed away his hand, which contained concentrated fire spells, preventing him from being hit. Sahyuk cursed, realizing that he was caught. Hyul tripped Sahyuk at the same moment, knocking him to the ground. Sahyuk shouted at Hyul to get off him, but Hyul didn't say anything, thinking that even this prank of Sahyuk's was a good opportunity for him. After some time, several cars appeared in the same alley and people gathered. Sahyuk tried to break free from the grip of the people trying to calm him down, shouting that he had to teach Hyul some manners. Hyul was explaining the situation with Sahyuk to some man. Hyul pointed to a camera hanging in the alley that was supposed to record the events. Hyul continued to say that he couldn't believe Sahyuk's behavior, but the man simply said that it would be announced at the academy tomorrow. The man advised Hyul to return to his dorm room while they tried to calm Sahyuk down and get him into the car. Hyul listened to the words, thinking that Sayoku should continue to act in the same spirit. The next day at the Obelisk Academy, in the hall, students were crowded around the information board, whispering about how Sahyuk had been caught using magic on the street. There was a penalty report posted on the bulletin board, which stated that Sahyuk had been given a 10-point penalty. Hyul passed by, overhearing the students discussing the leniency of Sahyuk's punishment, saying that he usually got suspended from classes. Hyul wasn't surprised that Sahyuk got off so easily due to the special treatment at the academy. The Beck family was influential and had donated significant sums to the academy in their time. Hyul simply moved on, thinking that Sahyuk would still have to listen to a lot of moralizing for the rest of his life. At the same time, Sahyuk was talking on the phone, listening to insults. Sahyuk apologized to his father over the phone while his father reminded him that he had asked his son to sit quietly until graduation. Sahyuk's father stood in his office, looking out the window, asking Sahyuk if his request was really that hard. Sahyuk's father warned Sahyuk that if the family did not receive the title, he would be held responsible for it, and Sahyuk repeated once again that he was sorry. The call ended, and Sahyuk looked at the screen where instead of his father's name, a money bag was written. Sahyuk cursed while looking at the screen. Sahyuk threw the phone to the side and it flew off the column. Sahyuk ground his teeth as he said Hyul's name. Sahyuk was filled with anger and malice as he remembered his sworn enemy. Sahyuk screamed that Hyul was an unbearable scumbag and started stomping on his phone. The phone shattered under Sahyuk's foot while he was shouting curses at Hyul. Sahyuk flinched as he heard the instructor's voice behind him, saying that Sahyuk's heart was full of envy. Sahyuk turned around, recognizing Instructor Smith, and asked if he wasn't allowed to react like that. Instructor Smith told Sahyuk that he could choose between love and hate. Instructor Smith came closer, asking Sahyuk if he really didn't want revenge. Sahyuk felt a little confused when he heard Instructor Smith say that he had to take revenge on Hyul. That same evening, in the dormitory of the Obelisk Academy, Hyul was sitting at the table in his room. Hyul checked his phone, thinking that Sahyuk should have been reprimanded by now. Hyul's thoughts about how this was only to his advantage were interrupted by an incoming message on his phone. Hyul's father told him about the deal with the Back family, in exchange for them turning a blind eye to the incident, for 3% of the income from the mines. Hyul read the last words of the message with a satisfied and slightly sly smile, where his father praised him and told him to say if he needed anything. Hyul knew very well that for the Beck family to gain the title, it was necessary to have good relations with influential families. Hyul, who was the victim of the incident, was the direct heir to the House of Mages, and the Bayek family had to take extreme measures. Hyul was pleased with the good asset from the Beck family, who were ready to hush up the incident at any cost, thinking about how important the title was. Sahyuk is now almost excommunicated from his family, because he almost deprived his family of the opportunity to become prominent because of the title that brings prestige. Hyul picked up Aird, deciding it was time to get back to working on the resonance now that he had figured everything out. The next day, on the territory of the Obelisk Academy, Hyul walked down the street, noticing that the academy had tightened its security measures due to the recent incident. Hyul's eyes rolled back when he heard a familiar voice calling him. Hyul turned around to greet Instructor Smith. Instructor Smith came closer, looking at Hyul. Instructor Smith looked at Hyul carefully, remaining silent. Hyul simply waited, waiting for the instructor to tell him what he wanted from him. Instructor Smith told Hyul that he had recently noticed that Hyul did not like him, and Hyul first honestly agreed, and then began to deny it. Instructor Smith didn't blame him, agreeing that he had been rather strict with Hyul, but said it was all for his own sake. Instructor Smith extended his hand to Hyul, offering to start their relationship over again. Hyul said he didn't think it was necessary and was about to thank Instructor Smith, but it was quickly interrupted. Hyul felt something that went through him to the bone, not understanding what this feeling was. Instructor Smith continued to speak with his false smile, congratulating Hyul on his first place in the exams, holding out his hand. Hyul felt confused, not understanding why Instructor Smith was clearly emitting mana, but it felt somehow wrong. Hyul looked at Instructor Smith, who was surrounded by dark energy. It seemed dark and ominous to him. Hyul couldn't believe that Instructor Smith was a representative of the Black Magic Tower. It was the first time that Hyul felt such energy in real life. It was a huge shock for him. Hyul knew about the Black Magic Tower like everyone else. This tower was unofficial, different from the recognized dozen. The Black Magic Tower was led by a mage who called himself the King of Death, and his followers were criminals with impure thoughts. Hyul still couldn't believe that the instructor in front of him was connected to the Black Magic Tower. Hyul's thoughts wandered away when he thought that he might not be the only one within the academy's walls. He was worried about how long it had been like this. Hyul forced himself to stop, realizing that something completely different was important now. He was still standing opposite the instructor's outstretched hand. Hyul directed mana into his eyes, deciding that he should first understand the structure of the instructor's spell to understand the situation. In a matter of moments, Hyul figured out the structure of the instructor's spell that he wanted to cast on Hyul. Hyul recognized the formula he could see. It was mind control magic. Hyul thought, remembering that his brain was not susceptible to the influence of the will of mana. It dawned on Hyul that Instructor Smith's mind control simply wouldn't work on him. Hyul sighed mentally, deciding that he had escaped without incident. They were still standing in the same place among the other students of the academy. Hyul felt relieved knowing that the instructor had not yet realized anything. Hyul decided he'd better pretend the mind control had worked and closed his eyes for a moment. Hyul opened his eyes, making his gaze unfocused, deciding that this way he could find out what the Black Tower wanted. Instructor Smith thought his spell had begun to work, and he stopped extending his hand to Hyul. Instructor Smith rubbed his face with his hand, saying he never thought he'd have to apologize to a defective character. Instructor Smith leaned closer to Hyul, telling him to listen carefully. Instructor Smith placed something in Hyul's hands, ordering him to carry it with him at all times. No questions asked. Hyul pretended to accept the order, wondering if this was all the Black Tower wanted from him. Instructor Smith turned to him again, wanting information about his mind control magic. Hyul pretended that his consciousness was resisting, bending over and clutching his head, believing that he could not tell it in any way. Instructor Smith took his game for the fact that the subconscious mind is trying with all its might to protect the secrets of his unique magic. Hyul thought he was a fool when Instructor Smith countermanded his order. Hyul was only able to perform like that in front of Instructor Smith because he knew about mind control magic. It was a spell that was aimed directly at the enemy's brain, which was able to control it, and it was the signature of the Black Tower. Hyul knew that such a spell could even destroy a person's brain if the mage was of a high level, so it was on the list of prohibited ones. Hyul simply demonstrated how a person can resist, to a certain extent, when an important topic is raised. Although Instructor Smith clicked his tongue in displeasure, Hyul realized that his magic was not their ultimate goal since he gave up so easily. Instructor Smith began to lament, confirming Hyul's thoughts that he could not fail the mission because of his desires. Instructor Smith snapped his finger, canceling the spell, saying that he would extract everything from Hyul after the main mission was over. Hyul pretended to be disoriented after the spell was lifted, and Instructor Smith feigned concern for his student. Instructor Smith told Hyul that he had become absorbed in his thoughts during the conversation and sent him off to rest, saying that he would not detain him any longer. Hyul agreed, confused, as Instructor Smith walked back towards the academy. Hyul watched as Instructor Smith mingled with the crowd. Hyul looked at him until he disappeared from sight. Hyul glanced at the time on the large clock located on the academy building. Hyul walked on, ignoring the carefree students who were deciding how to spend their break. Hyul wandered into the quiet inner courtyard of the academy. Hyul sat down on the bench, looking at what Instructor Smith had given him, ordering him to carry it with him everywhere. Hyul lifted the small chip to eye level, examining it more closely, and realized that he had been given an illegal AI chip. Hyul immediately realized that Instructor Smith had given it to him in order to frame him, making him appear to be the user of an illegal AI. Hyul presented newspaper headlines and reports that smeared his reputation. Hyul wondered who the customers might be, deciding that there was no need for Instructor Smith to go that far. Hyul thought out loud, rubbing his chin. He understood that someone could have ordered this from the Black Magic Tower. Hyul thought about Sahyuk, but quickly dismissed the thought, realizing that for someone who was bound by all possible restrictions, this was hardly possible. Hyul came to the conclusion that there was a high probability that one of his brothers and sisters could be the customer in order to remove him from the race for the position of leader. Hyul began to think about suspects, believing that his sister Minji had never been particularly active in the power struggle and had no motive. The next suspect was brother Minhyuk, but Hyul believed that he wasn't low enough to plan such a thing. For Hyul, there were only two suspects left, Sia and Jinyuk, and he believed that they might even be in cahoots. Hyul wondered if he could just pin down Instructor Smith to find out, but Hyul quickly pushed these thoughts away, realizing that the Black Tower would not ignore the leak of information, and the instructor might not know everything. Hyul chose a different path, deciding that it would only attract the attention of the Black Tower, and the instructor could become a scapegoat. That same day, Hyul went to the Blue Magic Tower. Hyul took the elevator up to the desired floor. Kim Kang-yoon greeted him without immediately turning to face Hyul. Kim Kang-yoon asked Hyul why exactly he wanted to see him. Kim Kang-yoon looked at Hyul attentively. The atmosphere was different from the friendliness he had shown before. Hyul noticed that the greeting from Kim Kang-yoon, the Lord of the Blue Tower, was colder than usual. But this did not bother Hyul. He believed that he had no other choice now. Kim Kang-yoon covered his face with his hand, trying to send Hyul away, saying that he was busy now. Annoyance could be felt from him. Hyul looked at the irritated Lord of the Blue Tower, thinking that he had no choice. Hyul approached Kim Kang-yoon, asking if he had interrupted his research, and Kim Kang-yoon honestly said that he was researching a certain mana stone. Kim Kang-yoon was still deep in thought, and Hyul looked at his desk, curious about what kind of mana stone he was referring to. Hyul saw on the table of the Lord of the Blue Tower an elemental stone, which was connected with the test of the first stanitsa of Ered. Hyul smiled, considering this a good opportunity, and looked at Kim Kang-yoon. Kim Kang-yoon invited him to sit down anyway, telling Hyul to get straight to the point so they could get everything sorted out quickly. Kim Kang-yoon still looked irritated as he asked what was so important about Hyul that he asked for an immediate face-to-face meeting. Hyul noticed that Kim Kang-yoon was extremely annoyed, and knew that no matter what Hyul told him now, he would not cooperate. Hyul decided that they needed to come to some kind of agreement, and said that he wanted to share his knowledge before getting down to business. Hyul brought up the stone that Kim Kang-yoon was researching, telling him that it was an elemental stone. Kim Kang-yoon was shocked when he heard Hyul's words. Kim Kang-eun stared at Hyul, asking what he and why he knew about the stones whose name had not even been revealed yet. Kim Kang-ni gave off a warning aura, and Hyul raised his hands, saying that he had absolutely not spied on the Blue Tower. Hyul reached into his briefcase to answer Kim Kang-yoon's question about how he knew about these mana stones. Hyul handed Kim Kang-yoon the stone he had tuned during the challenge, saying that he had the exact same one. Kim Kang-yoon even got up from the sofa in surprise when he saw Hyul's elemental stone. Hyul didn't let him finish, saying that he was right, and that he had a perfectly tuned elemental stone in his hands. Kim Kang-yoon's mouth widened in surprise, asking Hyul if he had really set it up himself. Hyul answered his question affirmatively, saying that he was the one who was able to tune the elemental stone. Kim Kang-yoon still didn't fully believe Hyul's words, thinking that he must be joking. Kim Kang-yoon knew that many famous masters had tried to tune the elemental stone, but they had failed. Kim Kang-yoon thought that even he, who was called the world's expert in magic stones, could not organize the flow of mana. And that was why Kim Kang-yoon didn't believe that Hyul, who was sitting in front of him, a simple student, could handle it. Kim Kang-yoon was still trying to understand while looking at the elemental stone in Hyul's hands, and asked Hyul if he was just lucky. Hyul did not dispute his words, agreeing with his version about luck, and added that he brought it here so that Kim Kang-yoon could help with the material. Kim Kang-yoon asked Hyul if he wanted to explain how exactly he had tuned the elemental stone. Hyul replied that he himself did not know how it happened, saying that it just happened, and now he can only talk about this. Kim Kang-yoon didn't believe his words for a second, asking Hyul how lucky he was to have found it and set it up completely by accident. Hyul could only laugh awkwardly, but Kim Kang-yoon quickly gave in, saying that any magician has the right to his secrets. Kim Kang-yoon waved his hand, saying that he would not interrogate him anymore, and Hyul thanked him for his understanding. Hyul let him look at the stone closer, and Kim Kang-yoon examined it while wearing gloves so as not to harm it. Kim Kang-yoon returned the stone to Hyul, asking why he brought it to the Blue Tower. Hyul said he brought it to create an artifact. Kim Kang-eun began to take off his gloves, asking what kind of artifact Hyul wanted. Kim Kang-eun suggested artifacts, naming clothes, dyeing, and even weapons, so Hyul could clarify his choice. Hyul only said that anything would be good enough for him as long as it could increase the effectiveness of elemental magic. Kim Kang-eun said he understood Hyul, but clarified that stones of such high quality require other high-quality materials for the artifact. Kim Kang-eun asked Hyul in all seriousness if he was prepared for the fact that it might cost him a lot, but Hyul looked at him blankly. Kim Kang-eun laughed, remembering that the person sitting in front of him was a direct descendant of the House of Magicians, and said that he would send a bill to Hyul's father. Hyul stopped him, saying that there was no need for that, and added, putting his finger to his lips, that his family members should not know about the artifact. Kim Kang-eun laughed, telling Hyul that he was a sly one, and drawing an approximate amount in the air, asked how Hyul was going to pay. Kim Kang-eun removed the written amount, asking if Hyul could really pay it out of his own pocket, and then Hyul moved on to his idea. Kim Kang-eun became interested and asked the smiling Hyul if he knew of another payment method. Hyul made an offer, saying that he could set it up for the Blue Y Tower's all elemental stones, and Kim Kang-eun may be present. Kim Kang-eun didn't expect such a proposal, and asked Hyul again if he was really ready to reveal his tuning method to him. Kim Kang-eun said that it was very tempting, agreeing with laughter, and said that the tower would then also be indebted to Hyul. Hyul, hearing Kim Kang-eun's words, asked if he could ask him for one more favor. Kim Kang-eun asked what exactly Hyul wanted and if it was related to the agenda. Hyul placed the chip he had received from Instructor Smith on the table in front of Kim Kang-eun. Kim Kang-eun picked up the chip, looked at it carefully, he knew exactly what it was, and asked Hyul where he got it. Hyul clenched his fists as he explained that there was a mage from the Black Magic Tower in the academy, and it was he who gave him the chip. Hyul did not say who it was, but said that he suspected that a criminal group was operating in the academy. Hyul asked Kim Kang-eun for help so they could get rid of them. At night, when the moon was already high in the sky, Hyul stood near the academy next to the car. Hyul thanked Secretary Kim Kang-eun for giving him a ride and wished her a safe journey. Kim Kang-eun's secretary bid farewell to Hyul, telling him to see her again without much emotion. Hyul watched as the secretary's car drove away down the road. The corridors of the hostel were quiet and deserted. Hyul fell onto his bed in his room, feeling the fatigue accumulated during the day. Hyul felt lucky that Kim Kang-eun was researching the elemental stone. Hyul put his hands behind his head, happy that thanks to this he would receive an artifact that even his father would not know about. Hyul remembered Sayuk, who had caused him trouble, and whose family shares he had originally intended to use for payment. But now Hyul managed to save them, and he was very pleased with it. Fatigue gradually overcame him, and he closed his eyes, hoping that everything would work out. Hyul remembered the conversation he had with Kim Kang-eun today, who said he couldn't believe it. Kim Kang-eun couldn't understand how the Black Tower mages were able to settle in the academy, which was famous for its security. Kim Kang-eun twirled the only piece of evidence that Hyul could provide between his fingers. Kim Kang-eun smiled when he heard Hyul's question, asking if his request was too burdensome. Kim Kang-eun said that under other circumstances the Blue Tower would not consider testimony with such evidence, but he is willing to take the risk. The next day, Hyul walked down the hall, announcing on the phone that he was already there, and leaving the rest of the worries to the person he spoke to. Hyul entered the elevator, leaving behind him a hall filled with people. Kim Kang-eun's voice through the phone's speakers reassured Hyul, telling him not to worry because the Blue Tower would not make a mistake. Hyul went up the elevator, telling Kim Kang-eun that he understood everything and trusted him, suggesting that they call each other later. Hyul climbed out of the elevator and went into the hall where the worker led him. A smile blossomed on Hyul's face as he announced his arrival. Hyul addressed his brothers and sisters, who were already sitting at the set table and awaiting his arrival. Minji, the second daughter of the House of Mages, greeted Hyul happily, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Hyul told Minji that she hadn't changed at all when she came up to greet him, meaning it as a compliment. Minji reached her hand up to the top of Hyul's head, noting how much he had grown in that time, comparing his height to Minhyuk. Minhyuk, the second son of the House of Magicians, told Minji not to jinx it as he happily walked up to Hyul. Minhyuk placed his hand on Hyul's shoulder, admitting that he was glad he was back, even though it was stupid of him. Hyul thanked his brother, thinking that Minhyuk was still as honest as always. Hyul looked at the remaining brother and sister, greeting them more reservedly, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Jihan and Sia looked at Hyul without getting up from the table. Jihan, the first son of the House of Magicians, noted that Hyul had matured, and now his face was not as childish as before. Sia, the first daughter of the House of Magicians, greeted him, calling him her youngest. Hyul accepted their greetings, thinking that Sia, despite her smiling appearance, was ready to eat him alive. Jihan raised his glass, inviting Hyul to sit at the table so they could enjoy the food and chat. Jihan, as if by chance, asked Hyul why he had gathered them all here. Hyul sat down next to Minji and said that there was no special reason. He just wanted to see his brothers and sisters after a long separation. Sia interrupted their conversation, asking if he really called them for this stupid reason, even though they were all so damn busy. Hyul smiled, saying that he was sure that Jihan or Si would have arranged the meeting themselves if he had not managed to gather them. Sia snapped, standing up from her seat, asking Hyul how he dared to speak to his elders like that. Sia pointed her hand at Hyul, demanding that he tell her frankly what he had in mind by calling him a booger. Hyul pretended not to understand her question, but Sia did not give up, continuing to ask him in a raised voice if he would fight for the position of head. Hyul asked Sia if she would believe him if he said he wasn't going to do it. Sia laughed, saying she wouldn't believe it, and Hyul asked why she was asking him about it then. Jihan interrupted Sia, who continued to scold Hyul, saying that she shouldn't have asked, because in such a matter actions are more important than words. Jihan took the initiative to ask Hyul about his new magic he had invented, asking him to share the details with his family. Hyul mentally assessed Jihan's move, who decided to check with one question whether Hyul was a contender for the position of leader. Sia agreed with Jihan, saying that it was a wonderful idea. Hyul wasn't going to let his older brother and sister push him into a corner. Hyul made a pitiful and vulnerable face, turning to Jihan and Sia, saying that this secret was his only hope. Hyul managed to squeeze out tears, looking more pitiful, saying that he could not share his only lifeline. Minji, moved to tears by Hyul's words, said that in that case nothing was needed, while Jihan in the background tried to understand what he had just seen. Si looked just like Jihan, even Mihyuk was amazed by Hyul's acting talent. Hyul continued to play while Minji gently wiped the tears from his cheeks and thanked Minji for being so understanding. Mihyuk raised his glass, happily saying that these questions were unnecessary, changing the subject to have Hyul tell him how he had been doing all this time. Minji said that she also wanted to listen to her brother's story, but Jihan remained silent, realizing that the moment for testing had been missed. Dessert was already served on the tables in front of everyone. Jihan was chatting animatedly with Sia. Hyul happily chatted with Minji and Mihyuk. The time on the grandfather clock showed 10 o'clock in the evening. Hyul, who was watching the clock, noticed that enough time had already passed and decided that it was time to act discreetly. It triggered urgent alerts to be sent to the phones of everyone present. Everyone picked up their phones to check what had happened. Minji looked at her phone in confusion, asking what it was. Mihyuk shouted, saying that this was an emergency. Sia was no less surprised, asking how this could happen now and at such a time. Jihan curled his lips in displeasure, holding the phone in his hands. Jihan frowned, not hiding his disappointment and displeasure after reading the urgent notification. Breaking news alert that Obelisk Academy has caught Instructor Smith in contact with the Black Tower, and the witness is Kim Kang-yoon's secretary. Hyul noticed how quickly Jihan made a calm face again, putting the phone in his pocket. Hyul chuckled quietly, realizing from Jihan's reaction that he was the one connected to the Black Magic Tower. Hyul's eyes flashed back to Jihan's reaction when he read the news. Now Jihan's face was a calm mask, and Hyul believed that his older brother had been caught, having given away his connection. Late at night, when the moon was already high in the sky, Hyul walked down the street, listening through his headphones to Kim Kang-yoon, who said that everything was exactly as Hyul said. Hyul was simultaneously reading a more complete version of the news that had been sent to everyone earlier. Kim Kang-yoon couldn't help but ask how Hyul could have known about Instructor Smith's actions in interfering with the preparation of the test. Hyul adjusted his earpiece, saying that it was simply a logical conclusion based on the information he had. Hyul knew that Instructor Smith couldn't just infiltrate the academy. He had to have a specific goal. Hyul took into account the time frame that Instructor Smith was trying to put him under mind control, which included the day of the exam. It was this Friday that the survival test was scheduled to take place, and it could be sabotaged. Instructor Smith knew full well that the easiest way to do this was to damage the equipment. The instructor had to sneak in right after the check because it is checked the day before the exams. And that's exactly what Kim Kang-yoon's secretary Jang Soo caught him doing today, based on information provided by Hyul. Hyul had asked the people from the Blue Magic Tower to monitor the equipment room in advance, and Hyul himself went to meet with his brothers and sisters at the same time when the representative was supposed to be caught. The result of Hyul's plan was satisfactory. Instructor Smith was captured. Hyul was able to find out that it was Jihan who maintained contact with the Black Magic Tower. Hyul was pleased with himself, because he was able to find out all the necessary information, making sure that no one would know about his interference. The only downside for Hyul was that he only received circumstantial evidence against the connection between Jihan and Instructor Smith. Kim Kang-yoon, who spoke to him on the phone from his office, said that in the end, helping Hyul turned out to be only a plus for them. Hyul laughed when he heard Kim Kang-yoon say that he would repay him somehow, and honestly said that he would not refuse. Kim Kang-yoon laughed in response, saying that he liked Hyul's honesty, and said goodbye. Hyul took out his earphone from his ear, thanking Kim Kang-yoon and the Blue Tower for their work. Just as Hyul relaxed, thinking that everything was over for today, a huge explosion thundered behind him. The shockwave threw Hyul to the ground. Hyul looked at the explosion site in shock, trying to understand what was happening. At the place where the explosion occurred, a silhouette could be seen through the raised dust and smoke. Someone was calling Hyul by name, as if possessed. Sahyuk emerged from the smoke, looking like he had gone crazy, looking at Hyul, telling him to die. Hyul was still on the ground where he had been thrown by the shockwave, looking at Sahyuk, who was shouting curses and wishes for him to die. Hyul tried to understand what just happened, and why Sahyuk looked like that. But Sahyuk didn't give him the time he needed. He immediately cast a spell, sending a fire blast at Hyul. Hyul was surprised that Sahyuk's magic became faster. He put mana into the resonant circle. Hyul cast a water shield spell and a wall of water appeared in front of him. Hyul gritted his teeth due to the effort he was putting in. Sahyuk's attack was too strong. Hyul held his hand in place with his other hand, thinking about what to do, knowing that his shield wouldn't hold up against Sahyuk's attack. Hyul changed the spell, making the water shield static, and dashed to the side. An explosion occurred, where it had previously stood as the water shield fell under the onslaught of the attack. Hyul was thrown back by the blast wave again, and his back crashed into a pole. Hyul looked at his palm, which was covered in a burn, realizing that the damage could not be avoided. Sahyuk laughed like crazy, telling Hyul to feel the difference between their skills. Sahyuk's eyes were red, and his pupils were barely visible as he looked at Hyul, saying that he was showing off too much. Hyul, who was sitting with his back against the pillar, said Sahyuk's name. Hyul looked at Sahyuk, who looked crazy, realizing that something was wrong with him. Hyul looked at Sahyuk, noticing that his skin was red and his eyes were bloodshot. Hyul thought that this reaction was similar to him taking the illegal drug Berserk. The Berserker forcibly disperses the magic circle, but the blood vessels begin to burst, and the one who used the campaign against the real Berserker. Sahyuk, who took the drug, would be ready to fight until the end until he fell dead, and while Hyul was shouting at him that he had gone crazy, Sahyuk went on the attack. Hyul looked at the approaching Sahyuk, realizing from the scarlet flashes of mana that he would use the flame infection spell. Sahyuk threw it straight at Hyul, grabbing his wrists, the AI chip system window showing a danger warning. Hyul called him a crazy psycho again, looking at Sahyuk almost point blank. Sahyuk, spitting saliva, told Hyul again that he was fine, and now everything was finally back to normal. Sahyuk laughed, saying that Hyul was going to die. Hyul couldn't dodge as Sahyuk released his hand and sent a flame infection spell straight towards Hyul's chest. Black smoke rose into the sky. Sahyuk stood over the lying Hyul, telling him to look at this bastard. Hyul coughed, looking at Sahyuk with half-closed eyes, while Sahyuk asked if he was still alive. Sahyuk covered his face with both hands, saying that Hyul was able to block his magic twice. Hyul tried to get to his feet, listening to Sahyuk's lamentations about how Hyul dared to do this, being a defective piece of trash. Sahyuk closed his eyes and grabbed his hair, screaming from boiling emotions. Sahyuk took his hands away from his face, his eyes disoriented, and continued to lament about how this could possibly be possible. Hyul stood up, noticing that Sahyuk was in a state of emotional instability, and this was definitely the influence of the Berserker. Sahyuk, as if disoriented, covered his face with his hand. Hyul watched him, feeling that something still didn't add up. He remembered the power of Sahyuk's magic that broke through his water shield. Hyul didn't take his eyes off Sahyuk, thinking that a Berserker couldn't increase his magical power that much. Hyul slowly began to use air magic, deciding to check it for sure, and Sahyuk turned his attention to him, asking why he was staring at him. Hyul used air spear magic, creating several spears in the shape of birds. Sahyuk looked at the birds flying towards him with a bit of thoughtfulness. Sahyuk activated his spell, shouting at Hyul, asking what kind of magic he was using. Hyul, meanwhile, noticed that Sahyuk was a good boy for dodging the spears. Sahyuk turned his gaze to Hyul, who was already at his feet, saying that he needed to be more careful. While Sahyuk looked at Hyul in shock while spitting saliva, Hyul had to act before he could react. Hyul cast a close-range airstrike spell at Sahyuk. Sahyuk's face twisted under the light of the airstrike. He had nowhere to dodge. Hyul was sure that he had hit the target, and he did. But then, right in front of Hyul's face, Sahyuk activated fire attribute magic, surprising Hyul with the distance between them. Hyul quickly realized that this was a fire pellet spell. Sahyuk, with a crazy smile, shouted at Hyul to die. Hyul rushed back out of range to dodge. He knew full well that the fire pellet's power was high at close range. Sahyuk looked like he was being hit by the backlash of a spell, and Hyul wondered what could have caused his power to increase. Hyul, who had gotten out of range, and the fireball exploded before reaching him. Hyul exhaled, wiping his chin, and asked Sahyuk if he really hated him so much that he installed an illegal chip. Sahyuk, while creating wind magic, continued laughing, asking what kind of nonsense Hyul was talking about, and he didn't know what kind of U-chip he was talking about. Hyul shook his head, asking if he understood correctly that Sahyuk didn't remember anything. Sahyuk, unaware that he has a EU chip implanted in his neck, tells Hyul that he doesn't need tricks to defeat trash like him. Sahyuk aimed wind spears at Hyul, telling him to stop talking nonsense and just die. Hyul dodged his spells, saying that the EU chip was capable of increasing abilities and adjusting formulas, but it was illegal. Sahyuk yelled at him, saying that he didn't care about this information. Hyul noted that this sounded ironic, since he had only recently studied how changes in the structure of circles were related to their effect on formulas. Hyul continued speaking, saying that thanks to this, he was now very sensitive to changes in magic related to these moments. Sahyuk started casting new spells, yelling at Hyul and calling him crazy for not realizing the U-chip. Hyul, who had been enlightened by the mixture of Berserk and U-chip, was about to use the second circle spell, saying that he would not thank him. Hyul knew that the EU chip allowed him to increase his magic level by 1 ring, but he had dug up a ton of information about it in the last few days. Hyul rubbed his forehead, thinking out loud that the problem was the penalty, and the boost by combining circles to speed up had negative consequences. Hyul, who started the process he just spoke about, began counting the time until he would receive a fine for using this method. Hyul was able to calculate that for a second-round master, the penalty was only 3 minutes. Hyul continued talking about the next 12-hour restrictions, but Sahyuk couldn't understand what he was mumbling. Hyul closed his eyes, saying he would only have 3 minutes, but he considered it a ton of time. Hyul dropped to the ground, placing his hands on the earth and casting the spell of earth needles. The needles pierced the ground from Hyul towards Sahyuk at incredible speed. Sahyuk screamed as one of the earthen needles pierced his thigh. Sahyuk screamed when he recognized the third circle magic, and asked Hyul where such a scumbag could get it from. Hyul chuckled, pointing at his head, and asking how to explain this. Sahyuk, having launched a new fire attack with death wishes for Hyul, heard from Hyul that Sahyuk not only had magic, but also cliché curses. Hyul summoned a water shield to block Sahyuk's attack. The fire attack crashed into the water shield that Hyul was holding. Sahyuk laughed, asking why Hyul was retorting again by saying that he screwed up last time, wishing for Hyul to burn to ashes. The water shield turned into a water tornado, easily blocking Sahyuk's attack. Sahyuk, shocked by what he saw, tried to figure out how this happened. Hyul, who controlled the water tornado, rebuked Sahyuk, telling him to think that the water shield should also be of the third circle. Hyul, with battle marks on his face, confidently told Sahyuk that his magic would no longer be able to even touch Hyul. Sahyuk shook with anger, calling Hyul's name. Sahyuk rushed forward, shouting Hyul's name. Sahyuk laughed as if he was mad, advancing on Hyul. Sahyuk laughed, saying that Hyul could only become stronger by using some other doping. Hyul calmly told Sahyuk that it was over, without reacting to his attacks. Hyul took a step that created ripples like water, telling Sahyuk not to expect mercy, since he had asked for it. Hyul cast a darkness blindness spell, and circles of darkness spread out from his feet, filling the space. Sahyuk looked at the darkness that enveloped him with confusion. Hyul, whose outline was still visible through the darkness, told Sahyuk about his obsession with killing. Before disappearing from Sahyuk's sight completely, Hyul said that none of this might have happened if it weren't for his behavior. Sahyuk, who found himself trapped in the darkness, began to shout at Hyul to stop hiding and come out. Hyul cast the earth-binding and air-binding spells. Sahyuk's body, who didn't suspect anything, was instantly wrapped in chains. Sahyuk's feet were covered with earth, which immobilized him in place. Hyul told Sahyuk that it was already late, and his last mercy for him would be to guide him on the right path. Sahyuk started yelling at Hyul again, saying that he wasn't done with him and blaming him. But Hyul said that it didn't matter who it was. Hyul continued speaking, telling Sahyuk, who couldn't see him, that he would have blamed someone else if it wasn't Hyul. Hyul reached for the chip on Sahyuk's neck, asking if he knew why they were outlawed, other than the negative impact on health. Sahyuk screamed in pain as Hyul touched the chip on his neck, calmly watching his suffering. Hyul said that he had only sent one short pulse into Sahyuk's overheated chip, asking how it felt. Sahyuk coughed, asking for it to stop with a distorted face. Hyul continued to explain with a smile why Sahyuk was in so much pain, continuing to administer short pulses, causing Sahyuk to scream at the top of his lungs. Hyul sincerely thanked Sahyuk at the end, saying that the Beck family would pay in full again for his idiotic actions. Sahyuk cried in pain as he listened to Hyul's words about his expectations of royalties from the Bayek family's magic stone mines. Hyul leaned towards Sahyuk, saying goodbye to him and thanking him, considering him his money tree. Hyul injected a large pulse into Sahyuk's overheated U-chip. Sahyuk's body couldn't withstand such an impact. He opened his eyes and mouth wide from the pain that pierced his entire body for the last time. The darkness cleared, leaving Hyul standing over Sahyuk, who lay unconscious on the ground. Hyul picked up his phone, which had fallen at the beginning of the battle. Hyul dialed the required number, waiting for the subscriber on the other side to answer. Hyul called his father, who asked why he was calling him at this hour. Hyul didn't beat around the bush, telling his father that he had seen everything and that he didn't need to pretend by looking away. Hyul's gaze was directed towards the bushes where red eyes were visible as he told his father about the absence of students and police. Father Hyul suggested that the students might have simply been hiding, and the fact that he could stop the police didn't mean it was him. Hyul agreed, saying that many people could stop the police, but only his father would watch the outcome of the fight. Hyul added, remembering Sia and Jihyun, that they couldn't watch him, and someone else would have helped or stabbed him in the back. Hyul's father laughed as he listened to his son's reasoning and said that he was right. Hyul heard movement in the bushes where he had recently seen red eyes, and movement began from that direction. A man dressed in dark clothes and a mask that covered his entire face. He knelt down in front of Hyul, and his father said that he had assigned Sakyok to him. People in the same black uniform as Sakyok stood over Sakyok's motionless body, and Hyul stepped aside, continuing his conversation with his father. Hyul's father asked his son why he was calling if he already knew about the surveillance. Hyul nonchalantly told his father that he just wanted to show off his third circle. Hyul's father replied that he did not remember any particular achievements on his son's account, and asked whether Hyul had hidden the third circle from the very beginning. Hyul agreed without hesitation with what his father said, even though it was a lie and he was only using the acceleration of the resonance circle. Hyul only added to his father that he still lacked strength. He hinted at the consequences if Jihan and Sia found out about the third circle. Hyul, without a drop of shame, hinted to his father that the pressure from his brother and sister would increase if this was not hidden. Hyul looked at Sakyok, telling his father that he used a soundproof barrier and illusion magic during the fight. Hyul's father noted that these were good measures on his part, and said that he would send a car for Hyul to spend the night at home. Hyul thanked his father, saying that he would see him soon. Father Kayul smiled after the call ended, without saying anything goodbye. Kayul's father burst out laughing, noting that he had absolutely no idea what Kayul could have been doing the entire goal if his self-confidence was so impressive. Kayul put his phone away and turned to Sakyak, calling him uncle, and saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Seokyuk began to remove the mask from his face. Seokyuk, who looked very much like Kayul's father, greeted the young master and asked for forgiveness. Seokyuk stood up from his kneeling position and applied healing magic to Kayul's cheek and neck, saying that the wound was not small. Seokyuk said that he would provide first aid and leave the rest to the family doctors, and Kayul thanked him warmly. Kayul walked to the car that had arrived on his father's orders and told Seokyuk to handle the rest. Seokyuk put his mask back on, saying that this matter was unlikely to go beyond the barrier, with his subordinates from the Shadow Squad behind him. At the same time, in one of the city's skyscrapers, Jihan cursed, loosening the tie around his neck. He had just returned to his home. Jihan entered the living room, lamenting out loud because he couldn't understand how this could have happened. Jihan froze when he saw the stranger, who was hiding his face on his sofa, asking him if he had just finished work. The stranger said he thought he would have to wait all night, but noted the comfort of the sofa. Jihyun asked him if he had come to the Black Tower. The stranger from the Black Tower, whose face was not visible, tugged at the piercing on his lip, saying that he could not believe the failure because of the Blue Tower. Jihan did not appreciate the stranger's cheerful attitude, raising his voice when asking if there was any reason to laugh in this situation. Jihan's face expressed anger and displeasure when he spoke about the Black Tower not fulfilling its promise, and asked if they wanted to destroy him. The stranger from the Black Tower asked for forgiveness in the same cheerful tone, attributing it to his nature, and promised to return the money. The stranger from the Black Tower rose from the sofa, saying that for the sake of the VIP client, all evidence would be eliminated and there would be no information leakage. The stranger from the Black Tower promised Jihan that Instructor Smith, who was caught by the Blue Tower, would not see the dawn. Jihan stated that he didn't care about Smith's life at all. He was more worried about the U-chips they gave to Sahyuk along with the Berserker. The stranger from the Black Tower adjusted his hood with a smile, saying that he didn't need to worry about such things, and Sahyuk was incapacitated. Jihan asked again, not understanding what incapacitated meant. The stranger from the Black Tower said that it seemed like Sahyuk had attacked Hyul. The stranger from the Black Tower said that Sahyuk is now barely different from a walking corpse due to the side effects. Jihan covered his face with his palm, looking at the man through his fingers and repeated that he didn't care about nonsense. He was interested in Hyul's condition. The stranger from the Black Tower tried on the appearance with his fingers, while casually reporting that Hyul might only be slightly injured, ignoring Jihan's displeasure. Jihan tensed his jaw, clarifying that Hyul could somehow defeat Sahyuk, who was Berserk and had a EU chip. The stranger from the Black Tower confirmed his words with enthusiasm, saying that this was not all. The stranger from the Black Tower reported his observations of the situation when Sahyuk attacked Hyul. He told Jihan that Mr. Sakyak was there, and immediately cast a barrier and illusion, and called him prudent. The stranger from the Black Tower said that he was unable to watch the fight to the end because of this, but it was exciting. Jihan realized that the shadows were indeed watching over Kayul. He asked if his interlocutor knew since when they had been accompanying him. The stranger from the Black Tower said thoughtfully that he first noticed them when Jihan and Hyul's paths crossed, but he wasn't 100% sure. Jihan remembered about the Shadow Squad, knowing full well that Sakyak worked directly for his father. Jihan was burning with discontent, not understanding why the power of shadows was used for Hyul. Jihan understood perfectly well that if the shadows had entered, they would now have to be extremely careful and abandon the idea of getting Hyul for a while. Jihan remembered something else, and asked the stranger from the Black Tower what to do with the U-chip that they had given to Hyul. The stranger from the tower assured that there was no need to worry about this, since the chip itself had a self-destruction program built into it. The stranger from the Black Tower assumed that the chip had already been deactivated and scattered to dust. Jihan answered negatively when the stranger from the Black Tower asked if he had any questions left. The stranger from the Black Tower came out onto the balcony, saying that he had to go then, because he still had to deal with Instructor Smith. The stranger from the Black Tower jumped down from the balcony, still hiding his face, and said goodbye to Jihan, calling him a dear client. Jihan silently looked at the now empty balcony where the stranger from the Black Tower had disappeared. Jihan thought about how he should get rid of all the evidence that could lead Sakyak to him, noticing that the protective magic of his house was not complicated. The stranger from the Black Tower hovered over the city while Jihan thought about the need to hurry. Sometime later, in the dormitory of the Obelisk Academy, Hyul closed the book he was reading. Kayul stretched in his chair, flexing his muscles. Kayulu had already been informed by the Lord of the Blue Tower that today Instructor Smith had suddenly clutched his heart and died before help arrived. Kayul leaned back in his chair, putting his hands behind his head, thinking about the situation. Hyul had expected this to happen, but he didn't think the Black Tower would act so calmly. Hyula was torn from the thought that Sakyak had easily dealt with the situation with Sakyak by the sound of a notification on his phone. Hyul read his father's long message about how the Beck family had given up 43% of their mine income as a bribe. Hyul smiled, realizing that his father was pleased with the outcome due to the length of the message, and, as always, the offer to receive something in return. Hyul looked out the window at the blue sky with white clouds. thinking that he was glad that everything had turned out well. Hyul looked at the phone screen, deciding what he would do next. Hyul looked at the information that the academic Olympiad would be held in 53 days, and he had to prepare. Hyul felt his ability to use the circle return. Hyul clenched his fist, realizing that the penalty time was up, and knew what he needed to do next. Hyul wanted to reach the third circle. Ired's pages lit up as they sensed Hyul's mana. Hyul poured mana into the page that had the magic circle drawn on it, deciding that he was ready to take on the next challenge. Hyul moved inside Ired, just like the first time, and the book fell to the floor, emitting a faint glow. Hyul closed his eyes from the bright light after moving. Hyul turned around, trying to understand what kind of dull, empty space he found himself in, realizing that this was another dimension inside the book. A bright light appeared behind Hyul, and he turned around, looking at that place in surprise. A magical creature in the form of a girl greeted him on the second page of the tests. The magical being introduced herself as Beta, and said that she was the conductor of the second page's test. Hyul listened carefully, wondering what the second test would be like and whether it would be like the first. Hyul remembered Alpha, which Beta resembled. Hyul also remembered the test itself with the elemental stone, which required establishing the final order. Beta, meanwhile, continued to talk about how the second trial tests one's mastery of the current mana circles. Beta said that the details would be revealed during the test itself, and that for passing it, Hyul would gain access to almost 50 pages. Hyul was surprised to hear the number of pages about the third circle that would be revealed to him. Hyul was delighted, comparing it to how he was given 15 pages after the first test. Hyul understood perfectly well that this meant that the third circle was on a completely different level, judging by the amount of information. While Hyul waited impatiently for the beginning, Beta informed him that his test was beginning. Hyul looked ahead where Beta had disappeared. Veitner's voice was heard in space, telling Hyul that he would now tell him about the second test. Veitner's voice said that magic circles would now appear in front of Hyul, 100 of them in a row, and he needed to activate them all. Hyul, without wasting any time, began to pour mana into the magic circle that appeared in front of him. The magic circle absorbed his mana, gradually activating. Veitner's voice stated that after passing this test, Hyul would be able to activate them naturally. Hyul was surprised to see that the magic circle in front of him had suddenly changed. Veitner's voice said that the magic circle would be updated every 3 seconds. If Hyul couldn't cope, then it would be necessary to start over. Hyul thought about it, thinking that he could simply memorize the sequence of magic circles. Veitner's voice, as if hearing his thoughts, said that the sequence would be random, and that memorization would not help Hyul in any way. Hyul, as if not surprised, said that it really couldn't have been such an easy task, and closed his eyes, mentally preparing himself to begin the test. Hyul extended his hand to pour mana into the magic circle, determined to try and pass the test. After some time, in the dormitory building of the Obelisk Academy, Ired lay on the table, a shadow hanging over her. Hyul, completely exhausted, looked at Ired without words. Hyul was feeling dejected, lamenting that he had spent 8 hours on the second test, and his record was only 10 laps. Hyul took Ired in his arms, calming down, and said that he could still gradually get used to it. Hyul began reading Ired with the thought that he needed to find some kind of pattern to make it easier. Hyul was reading Ired while taking notes in his notebook and noticed something interesting. It was written in Ired that this was not Veitner's only book, and if Hyul hit a wall, he should look for other manuscripts. Hyul was shocked to realize that the time to search for new books would soon come, when he realized that Ired was not the only one of her kind. Hyul knew that he knew nothing about the location or even the names of these books, but he felt that he had to find them. Sometime later, outside the academy, in a city near the river, Hyul walked into the store thinking that he needed some fresh air and a change of pace. Hyul stopped, noticing Adela in front of him. Adela, who was holding a bag with a bunch of banana milk in her hands, was surprised to see Hyul. After some time, they were sitting on a bench, each with their own drinks. Hyul laughed, saying that they had been running into each other quite a lot lately, and Adela awkwardly agreed. Adela blushed and covered her face, confirming Hyul's words when he noticed that she looked like she hadn't slept all night. Hyul looked at Adela, who handed him a book, saying that she had read a very interesting article. Hyul took the book while Adela said that its title was Possibilities of Technical Implementation of Teleportation Magic. Hyul laughed at the controversial title, and Adela's eyes lit up as he urged Hyul to read the article now. Hyul was surprised to hear so much zeal in Adela's voice, but he did not argue and began to read the article that Adela had given him. Adela enjoyed the taste of banana milk as she sat next to Hyul, who was reading. Adela drank almost all of the banana milk while waiting for Hyul. Hyul handed the article back to her, saying it was interesting except for one thing. Hyul and Adela simultaneously said the main disadvantage of the work, which was the lack of a logical conclusion. Hyul thought, looking at the work again. Hyul reread the line about the conclusions that were based on the analysis of information from Veitner's ancient manuscripts. Hyul almost jumped on the spot when he saw the name of his teacher and author, Arid. Hyul carefully reread some points from the article again, noticing that the structure and content were different. But Hyul clearly felt how a number of theories could be traced that Veitner himself had already put forward, albeit rather superficially. Adela was surprised when Hyul asked with special interest who the author of this article was, but said that it was Go Sungjun. After some time, Hyul was sitting at his desk in the dorm room again. Hyul thought about Go Sungjun, about whom nothing was known, not even information about his gender and age. Hyul looked back at the article, which was Go Sungjun's only work, and wondered if he might have been scared off by the criticism. Hyul calmly noted that this was the maximum information he could learn as a simple student. Hyul picked up his phone, knowing how to solve this problem. Hyul dialed the number with a smile and greeted the head of the Blue Magic Tower, Kim Kang-yoon, thinking that a simple student was not the same as him. In the office of the Blue Magic Tower, a call from Hyul appeared on his phone, and Kim Kang-yoon reached out to answer it. Kim Kang-yoon, covered in books, answered the phone, immediately asking what Hyul needed. He had been researching all night long. Hyul confidently informed him that he had found one thing that would be beneficial to both of them. Kim Kang-yoon raised his head, interested in Hyul's words, and waited for details. Hyul continued, asking if Kim Kang-yoon could help him find one person. The next day, in the Obelisk Academy's academic building, the gym was filled with students. Hyul used the magic of the Infinity Circle. Suchin prepared for Hyul's attack by using interactive magic to create barriers. Hyul aimed wind spears in the shape of birds at Suchin. Suchin began to scold Hyul, saying that it was cheating when the wind birds changed their trajectory and began to circle above him. Hyul asked where, saying that he was only using the first magic circle. Suchin had to somersault to avoid it, saying it was impossible on a normal first lap. Suchin began to follow the trajectory of the wind spears that were flying towards him in the second attack. Suchin stared at the attack, wondering what he should do to avoid it. Hyul exhaled, pleased with how the training had gone. Suchin sat on one knee, surrounded by the 4 barriers he had managed to create, sweat pouring down his face, and looked at Hyul reproachfully. Hearing Hyul's words that Suchin was able to block everything properly, Suchin said that he almost died because of Hyul's attack. Suchin rose to his feet, decisively suggesting that Hyul now try hand-to-hand combat. Hyul agreed, saying that he didn't mind, asking Suchin if he was really sure that he could defeat him in hand-to-hand combat. Suchin rushed at him, shouting whatever. Suchin's eyes widened as he saw Hyul immediately appear in front of him, his fist aimed at Suchin's chin. Hyul knocked Suchin down in an instant, sending him to the training ground floor with his hand holding the collar of Suchin's shirt. The students who witnessed the fight opened their mouths in surprise. Hyul looked at Suchin with a smile, asking how he was doing. Hyul looked at Suchin, who was lying on the floor in a strange position, hinting to him that the idea of hand-to-hand combat was so-so. Hyul began to reflect on their differences in physical form, and Suchan took it as a veiled insult. After some time, Suchin put a heating pad on his back, saying that Hyul had cheating magic and was a beast in close combat. Suchin turned towards Hyul with a pouting expression, saying that he was a dirty player. Hyul put a bandage on Suchin's back, telling him to train his endurance if he was not satisfied. There were few people in the locker room, and Suchin asked Hyul what his plans were. Suchin smiled, asking Hyul if he was really aiming for the Olympics. Hyul was surprised by the question and asked how Suchin knew about it. Suchin began to put on airs, saying that he had known Hyul for a long time, and this was obvious from his actions. Suchin reminded that Hyul was distracted and self-absorbed. Even during the last test he spent more time. Suchin said that in recent days, Hyul has always taken first place. Suchin winked at Hyul, telling him that he shouldn't lose his grip if he was going to push the seniors at the Olympics. Hyul silently listened to Suchin, who said that it would be difficult for him to take the Olympics in his current form. And Hyul himself knows this. Suchin asked contentedly if he was right in saying that he knew a lot, and Hyul only smiled in surprise. Suchin added more seriously, saying that according to rumors, the favorite of the Olympiad will be a 5th-round mage, and Hyul's victory with the 2nd round is unlikely. Hyul thought about it, realizing that Suchin was right, and that he needed to grow in order to perform well at the Olympics. Hyul remembered I read, knowing that he could temporarily speed up his 2nd lap to a 3rd, but it wasn't enough. Hyul needed a 3rd or 4th round to fight on equal terms, and to do that, he had to find Go Sang-jun. After some time, Hyul looked at the maps on his phone where a point was marked. Hyul raised his head, looking around him as if he couldn't believe he had come to the right place. Kim Kang-yoon apologized on the phone that the search took a whole week. He himself did not expect it to take so long. Hyul looked at the building in front of him as he listened to Kim Kang-yoon's words about Go Sang-jun's whereabouts. Hyul was surprised because in front of him was a used bookstore where he often shows up. Hyul couldn't believe that Go Sang-jun was in the place right in front of the academy, remembering that the most inconspicuous things are always in plain sight. Hyul remembered the old days when he began to actively study from books after the announcement of his incompatibility with the AI chip. Hyul couldn't understand where he got Aird from, and now he wondered if Aird could have come to him from this little shop. Hyul opened the door to the shop, greeting everyone from the threshold. The shop owner, who was busy with something, heard Hyul's voice. The owner recognized Hyul, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time, and Hyul asked how he had been. The shop owner was glad to see Hyul. He said that everything was as usual with him and told him about the rumors about Hyul's magic that he had heard. Hyul thanked his owner with a smile when he noticed that Hyul now looked healthier. The owner laughed, saying that there was nothing to thank him for. But Hyul noted that it was only thanks to the books in the shop that he had come this far. The store owner thanked Hyul for his words and asked what brought Hyul to the store today. Hyul asked the shop owner with a slight hesitation if he could meet Go Sang-jun, his child. The shop owner was surprised that Hyul knew about him and asked his intentions, and Hyul told about the article and his search through his acquaintances. Hyul lowered his head, apologizing for secretly collecting information, and added that this meeting was indeed important to him. The shop owner rubbed his neck, saying that he remembered some article from his son's work. The shop owner agreed, saying that he would arrange this meeting for Hyel. Hyel bowed, sincerely thanking him for the opportunity. The shop owner warned Hyel that he would hardly be able to get answers to his questions, which surprised him. Hyel didn't understand what this meant and asked the shop owner directly what he meant. The shop owner opened the door to the private part of the building, telling Hyel to just follow him to Sunjun for now. Hyel obediently followed the store owner as he approached the closed door. The owner turned to the confused Hyel and informed him that Go Sangjun was right behind that door. Hyun was surprised to see what was behind the door and asked again if it was really Go Sangjun. Go Sangjun, who was outside the door, had an oxygen mask on his face. A catheter was attached to Go Sangjun's arm. The beeping sound of medical equipment filled the room, and a guy with disheveled hair lay on the bed. The shop owner walked into the room and headed towards the bed, Hyul following behind him. Go Sangjun was lying there unconscious with dark circles under his eyes. He would have looked like he was sleeping if it weren't for the medical equipment. Hyul still couldn't believe that this was the one he was looking for. But the shop owner confirmed it, saying that it was his son. The shop owner sat down on a chair next to the bed, and Hyul followed his example. Hyul asked if he could find out what happened by looking at the shop owner, and he agreed to tell him. The shop owner kept his eyes on his son as he began the story, saying that Go Sangjun had broken a taboo. The shop owner clasped his hands in front of him, clarifying that his son had broken a taboo for all wizards. Hyul asked what taboo he was talking about, and the shop owner explained that his son had launched a mana circle through his brain. Hyul was surprised to hear what exactly Go Sangjun did. Hyul remembered the day he listened to Ered and launched a mana circle through his brain. Realizing that Go Sangjun was trying to do the same, Hyul clenched his fist, trying to find out more details and find out the reason why Go Sangjun needed to do something like this. The shop owner closed his eyes and wearily explained that his son had done it for the sake of his scientific work. Go Sangjun had a choice between proving his theory and giving up halfway. The shop owner shared his regrets, saying he should have stopped his son at any cost. Hyul looked at Go Sangjun, wondering if he might have been exposed to Whitener's magic style through other sources. The shop owner said he was unlikely to be able to answer questions, admitting his son would be happy to satisfy Hyul's interest. Hyul apologized to the shop owner, saying that it must be a difficult burden for him to bear. The shop owner placed his hand on Hyul's shoulder, telling him not to worry about it, as he knew how passionate Hyul was about science. The shop owner remembered how Hyul meticulously searched for magical literature every day, reminding him of his son. The sun was already setting below the horizon. Hyul asked the shop owner if he could take a look at Go Sangjun's literature when they left his room. The shop owner scratched his beard, agreeing that those books were still lying around collecting dust. The store owner held up 2 fingers, telling Hyul that he would have 2 requests for access to his son's literature. The store owner asked to make his son a co-author if Hyul would continue writing his work, and Hyul said that he would do so. The store owner accepted his words and, removing 1 finger, began to talk about the second condition. The shop owner told Hyul with a little irritation not to even try to pass mana through his brain, causing Hyul to flinch. After Hyul agreed to the second condition, the store owner took him to a separate room where his son used to work. The store owner walked deeper, wondering what books Hall might need the most while Hall looked at the shelves. Hyul's gaze was drawn to a book on the top shelf. The book that caught Hyul's eye moved from the shelf. Hyul was surprised when the book fell on the floor right in front of him. Hyul looked at the cover of the book, feeling that it reminded him of Ired. Hyul picked up the book, turning to ask about it to the shop owner, who was already holding a stack of books in his hands. The shop owner immediately recognized it, remembering how his son often took it with him as if there was something important about it. Hyul held the book, carefully opening the lock on the spine as the shop owner told him he could take it. Hyul thanked the shop owner and opened the book, revealing the familiar, horrible handwriting he had seen in Ered. Hyul was amazed at his good fortune in finding Whitener's second book. Hyul hugged the book to himself, asking the shop owner again if he could borrow it to read. The store owner told Hyul that he could take whatever he needed from his son's literature. Hyul sincerely thanked the store owner and decided to ask a question. The shop owner paused when Hyul asked if he had ever seen books written in that handwriting before, and said he wasn't sure. The shop owner said that such luxury books were rare in their shop, when Hyul gave a different criterion. Hyul thanked him for his answers, wondering where Go Sangjun could have gotten this book from, and how Aird ended up in his hands. Hyul returned to the Obelisk Academy dormitory late in the evening. Hyul sat on the bed. 2 of Weitner's books lay in front of him. He had searched through Sanjun's entire library, but found nothing else. Hyul picked up both books, admitting that even just finding one was a great success. Hyul was surprised to see the books light up, interacting with each other as he held them in his hands. Hyul tried to understand what was happening, staring at the glow. The book he found today opened up, and Weitner's voice came out of it, saying that he had bequeathed this book to the owner of Ered. Hyul felt himself being pulled back into the book, as frills, bows, stuffed animals, and flowers emerged from the book. Weitner's voice, which Hyul recognized, announced that this book was named Mimir as Hyul was drawn into the book space. Hyul heard Weitner's wish that he enjoy the contents of Mimir with all his heart. Mimir continued to glow faintly. A cute teddy bear appeared on her page as Hyul moved into the book change. Hyul found himself on the floor in a book dimension that resembled a cozy office. Hyul sat up, looking around and trying to figure out where he was. There was movement from the side. Someone in a cute cap was approaching Hyul. A small hand poked Hyul in the back of the neck, getting his attention. Hyul turned around and a small finger poked him in the cheek. The girl that Hyul saw happily said that Hyul was caught and welcomed him to the Mimir book. Hyul looked at the girl and asked who she was. The girl smiled and, pointing to herself, introduced herself by the name Mimir. Mimir opened her arms, pointing to the space around them, and said that she was in charge of measuring the Mimir well. Mimir extended her hand to Hyul, saying that she was glad to meet her successor. Hyul looked around, asking again about the Mimir well, and Mimir explained to him that this was the name of this library. Mimir majestically announced that Veitner had specially prepared this place for his successors. Hyul listened with interest to Mimir's words that this library was intended for those who follow the path of the teacher. Hyul noted that the Mimir well was rather modest for a library in the usual sense of the word. Looking around, Mimir immediately explained, saying that the Mimir well was capable of expanding depending on Hyul's achievements, but for now they were modest. Mimir assumed, based on the current dimensions of the Mimir well, that Hyul had not yet passed the second page test. After Hyul confirmed her words, Mimir thought for a moment and suggested that Hyul address her informally. Hyul was taken aback when he heard her request. Mimir explained to Hyul, who leaned closer to her, that they would be seeing each other often, and formalities would only create discomfort. Hyul smiled, thinking, and agreed with Mimir's proposal. Mimir was delighted and noted that Hyul was not bad, since he found her on the second circle. And Hyul asked what was wrong with that. Mimir extended her hand, showing him 5 fingers, while explaining that Hyul would be able to easily reach the 5th circle right away. Hyul was surprised, asking how this was possible, not hiding his excitement. Mimir extended her hand, flying slightly above the floor. A magical trail stretched from her hand. A book on one of the library shelves submitted to Mimir's will. The book ended up in the hands of Mimir, who smiled as she looked at Hyul. Mimir handed Hyul a book, telling him to read it so that he could understand the meaning of her words. Hyul opened the book, looked at the contents, and asked Mimir if this resonance theory was true in all its details. Mimir happily explained to Hyul that in this place he would be able to find everything that was not included in Ered, like the information he held in his hands. Hyul asked why they couldn't just add it to Ered, and Mimir appreciated his interest. Mimir explained that Ered was already overloaded with a large number of test pages to test the successor. According to Mimir, there are other reasons why Ered contains only the necessary, and because of this, other books exist. Hyul looked at the book in his hands, thinking about what the teacher had described in more detail in the Mimir well. Mimir confirmed his words by comparing the Mimir well with the reference book, while Ered contains only the main conclusions. Hyul looked around again, examining the books, repeating Mimir's words about the relationship between his level and the number of books available. Mimir praised him for understanding, and asked if Hyul would figure out how to reach the 5th circle with this. Hyul agreed without hesitation, realizing that thanks to Mimir it would be easier for him to deal with the second test. After some time on the page of the second test in Ered, Hyul was in a dim, empty space, a dimension inside the book specially created for the second test. Hyul looked tired, thinking about the fact that he had already managed to activate 79 circles. The first time Hyul began the second trial, he was only able to activate 10 circles out of 100, taking 8 hours. After Hyul visited the Mimir well, he increased his score, managing to activate 79 circles at once. Hyul sat down, thinking that it had been too hard before. Hyul was ready to push himself and complete the entire 100 in one night, and if he was unlucky, then do it the next night. Hyul thought about Mimir, realizing that the fact that he had managed to get her before the Olympics was pure luck. Sometime later, in the Shin family mansion, Hyul followed the maid through the corridors. Hyul thought about the reason why his father had called him, thinking that it was most likely due to compensation for the incident with Sahyuk. Hyul remembered how he defeated Sahyuk, who had infused himself with Berserk and used an illegal U-chip. Hyul followed the maid, thinking that his plans to study with Mimir had gone to waste, but talking to his father was also important. When his father allowed him to enter the office, the maid bowed before leaving while Hyul greeted his father. Hyul's father supported his head with his hand, leaning on the table, and told his son to sit down, for he would be brief. When Hyul sat down, his father began to talk about how this time it was not entirely Hyul's fault, and his contribution was estimated at a little more than half. Hyul's father informed his son that he would receive a total of 26% of the shares in the Magic Stone mines. Hyul agreed, and his father said that he deserved to be rewarded accordingly for the benefit he had brought. Hyul's father remembered his promise and asked his son if he had thought about what he wanted. Hyul looked straight at his father, confirming that he had already chosen what he wanted to ask for. Hyul said that he wanted to obtain an ancient relic that was kept deep in the family treasury. Father Hyul asked again, saying that it was just an antique, which rarely contained any incredible secrets. Hyul disagreed with him, saying that he believed in the truth of the legends about ancient relics and myths about events. Hyul's father sighed wearily, saying that Hyul was still young, but noted that believing in this nonsense was rather stupid. Hyul's father looked at his son again, saying that he respected his choice, and raised his finger, indicating that Hyul could only take one item. Hyul was delighted and thanked his father for his consent. Hyul's father asked his son what relic he wanted. Hyul, who had long ago made his choice, said that he wanted the ancient relic that was kept under the treasury. Hyul told his father that he wanted to get Rybel Whitener's cloak. Hyul and his father came to the underground treasury of the Shin family, which was located on the territory of their mansion. Hyul's father accepted the box with the crest of the House of Mages from the hands of the treasury worker, while Hyul stood nearby. Hyul's father placed the box on the stand, telling Hyul that he hoped his son would not regret his choice. Hyul took the box containing the relic and thanked his father. Hyul's father grumbled again, saying that he couldn't believe that Hyul had bought into such silly stories, but he chalked it up to his youth. When Hyul's father parted, he advised Hyul to focus on training so that he would not regret anything in the future, and Hyul agreed without arguing. After some time, Hyul was riding in a car with a driver, returning to his dorm. Hyul sat in the back seat, thinking that most of the heirlooms his family owned were genuine. Hyul glanced at the box he had taken from the Shin family's treasury, wondering if it really contained the genuine Whitener cloak. Hyul knew that no percentage of the income from the magic stone mines could compare to a real teacher's cloak. Hyul couldn't wait to get to the dorm. He opened the box, wanting to find out if it really contained the real Whitener's cloak. Hyul's eyes widened at what he saw. Hyul lifted the cloak, examining the fabric woven from fibers of the purest mana. Mana cloth was considered a valuable material that was obtained from magical stones through special processing. There were less than 30 people in the world who were capable of this, and the cloak in Hyul's hands was made entirely of mana fibers. Hyul couldn't hide his enthusiasm as he wondered how this cloak was made if the technology was not available in Whitener's time. The fabric of the cloak in Hyul's hands surpassed all the artifacts known to him. He had never seen anything like it before. Hyul returned to the Obelisk Academy dormitory. Hyul sat on the bed in his room, looking at Whitener's cloak. The authenticity was evidenced by the signature in a terrible handwriting that was familiar to Hyul. Hyul stretched his hands up to examine the cloak, trying to understand the structure of the fabric. It seemed to Hyul that the outer and inner layers were mixed up. Hyul knew that the reason mana tissue was difficult to work with was because the inner and outer layers had to be developed separately. The internal one should improve conductivity, and the external one should reduce it, but the cloak in his hands did the opposite. Hyul rubbed his chin thoughtfully, believing that his teacher would never have made such a mistake. An idea came to Hyul's mind. He suggested that the cloak should simply be turned inside out. Hyul turned the cloak inside out and saw changes in the layers before his eyes. Hyul realized that even when turned inside out, the structures of the inner and outer layers do not change places. Hyul thought that this was done intentionally, but he did not understand for what purpose. Hyul could understand why his father had sent Whitener's cloak to gather dust in storage. Hyul opened the Mimir well, wanting to learn more. Mimir was sitting on the sofa in the library, reading some book. Hyul appeared in the Mimir well, immediately calling her. Mimir was delighted to see him and asked how he was doing. Hyul showed her Whitener's cloak, and Mimir recognized it immediately. Mimir appeared right in front of Hyul, asking if it was really Whitener's cloak. Mimir's eyes lit up as she looked at Hyul, who had managed to find it. But Hyul told her that the cloak was strange. Mimir picked up the edge of the cloak, not understanding what Hyul meant. Mimir let out a loud gasp as she looked at Hyul, who was frightened by her sudden reaction. Mimir held out 2 fingers, asking Hyul if he was still on the second circle. Hyul confirmed, not understanding what the question was about, and Mimir said that it was clear to her why he didn't know. Hyul asked her to explain. Mimir made a cross with her fingers in front of her mouth, asking him for forgiveness and saying that she could not explain why the cloak was designed that way. Hyul began to ask about the reason when Mimir handed him the cloak back, telling him to take it. Mimir said thoughtfully that there was a special magic in Whitener's style. Mimir fell silent, her eyes wide open. Hyul became interested in her words, while Mimir grabbed her cap with her hands, lamenting that she should not have said this. Mimir calmed down, saying that she would only say this. She extended her hand to Hyul, saying that there is true magic of Whitener. Hyul asked her again, not believing that any true magic existed. Mimir explained that this magic was different from what Hyul was used to and was considered real. Hyul was surprised that he had been using fake magic until now. Mimir confirmed that Hyul was using fake magic, but said she couldn't share the details with him yet. Hyul thought, scratching his chin, he asked Mimir about the existing limitation. Mimir said that Whitener's cloak is an artifact that helps to create true magic. Hyul realized that Mimir would not tell him anything about him now, and asked what circle he needed to reach to find out more. Mimir could answer this question. Mimir told Hyul that in order to get an explanation, he needed to reach the 5th circle of magic. Hyul looked at Mimir, holding Whitener's cloak in his hands, which he was eager to learn more about. Mimir elaborated, saying that Hyul needed to master the 5th circle to access the 5th page of trials. After some time, Hyul returned to the 2nd page of the test in Ered. He had already activated the 98th circle out of 100. When Hyul activated the 100th circle, small fireworks appeared in the space in front of him. Hyul was happy that he finally made it and passed the 2nd test. Whitener's voice congratulated Hyul on passing, saying that Hyul had worked hard on the tedious challenge. Hyul heard the long-awaited words of Whitener, that now he would teach him how to weave the 3rd circle of magic. Whitener's voice informed Hyul that the 3rd level of Whitener's style was called the Circle of Interaction. Hyul closed Ired, exiting the dimension inside the book. Hyul sat on his bed in Whitener's cloak, thinking about how he had successfully passed the 2nd test. Hyul looked at Ired in his hands, ready to begin creating the 3rd circle of magic. Hyul rose to his feet, taking the Mimir well in his other hand, noting that without the cloak and the Mimir well, it would have taken him longer. The night before, Hyul was in the Mimir well. Mimir, who informed him of a condition that would allow him to learn more, promising that from this stage the magic would shine even brighter. Hyul agreed, thoughtfully saying that he had no choice. Hyul thought about the cloak and said that he would have to put it on the back burner until he reached the 5th circle. Mimir stopped his thoughts, saying that such a valuable thing could not be sent to gather dust in storage. Hyul didn't understand how to use it, and Mimir snatched the cloak from his hands, indignant that Hyul didn't understand anything. Mimir pointed to the cloak, saying that it would prevent mana from leaking out, allowing Hyul to achieve a mana surplus. Hyul became interested when he heard Mimir say that an excess of mana made the circle of infinity rotate even faster. Mimir concluded by saying that Hyul's brain would be able to get rid of fatigue faster, and this also applies to physical exhaustion. Hyul took the cloak back, saying that he realized that it would help him reduce his sleep time, but Mimir was amazed at his moderate thoughts. Mimir winked at Hyul, saying that with this cloak he wouldn't have to sleep at all anymore. Hyul asked again in surprise, looking at the cloak in his hands, not believing what he heard. Mimir repeated once again, saying that if Hyul wore the cloak for at least 5 hours a day, he would quickly reach his peak. Hyul looked at Mimir, who said that this was just one of the side effects of the cloak, and it was valuable information for the successor. Hyul was pleased with what he heard from Mimir, and promised to reach the 5th circle as quickly as he could. Mimir warned Hyul just in case that this cloak only works on the successor, and for others it will be poison. 2 days later, at night, Hyul sat in his room dressed in a cloak. Hyul opened his eyes, interrupting his attempt to create a 3rd circle. Hyul looked at Erd, feeling that he was very close, and he would soon understand what he lacked to create the 3rd circle. Hyul read the information in iRed about the circle of interaction that opened up for him after passing the test. The 3rd circle of the Whitener style allowed for interference in the process of creating spells by other people. In iRed it was said that in order to interact with someone else's mana, one must be in perfect sync with it. Hyul was finally able to understand why the 2nd test was like this. It helped him learn how to influence other people's magic. Hyul smiled as he read iRed, finding it very interesting. Hyul had never even thought about this. He didn't expect that the 2nd test would serve as a basis for the creation of the 3rd circle. Hyul read that in order to create the 3rd circle, the 1st and 2nd must be in perfect harmony with the surrounding mana. Hyul found a clue, realizing that by continuing to use resonance, he could form a 3rd circle. Hyul rose to his feet, resolutely declaring that he would definitely succeed this time. Hyul concentrated, absorbing the abundance of mana in the air and synchronizing it together, paying attention to the excess mana in his body. The process felt like building a new house brick by brick. Hyul concentrated completely on his sensations, harmonizing the 1st and 2nd circles. Hyul began to sense the mana surrounding him, which was supposed to harmonize with his circles. Hyul felt that the mana he had absorbed had found refuge in his body. Hyul could hear the voices of this mana. She asked Hyul to play with her, comparing his body to a playground. The mana surrounding him said that it was very cramped inside Hyul, but she still didn't want to leave, because it was warm inside. Hyul knew he was only halfway there. He needed to maintain the resonance. The mana surrounding him wanted to play. It felt like it needed a spacious playing field. The mana lined up in a circle. Hyul was getting hot. He needed to watch the readings closely to make sure there was no deviation of more than 1%. Hyul gradually reduced the deviation rate to 1/100%. Hyul did this using the mana of the circle. He acted quietly and unnoticed. The sun was already high in the sky when Hyul finished. He sat on his knees with his head bowed, hidden in the cloak of his hood. Hyul raised his head, throwing off his hood, sweat pouring down his face. Hyul rose to his feet. Erd and the Mimir well were lying on the floor in front of him. He realized that he had succeeded. Hyul stretched out his hand in front of him and created the 1st circle, the call of the heart. It began to spin around Hyul. Then Hyul raised his 2nd hand, creating a 2nd circle, a resonance. It joined the 1st circle, rotating around Hyul. Hyul clenched his fist, preparing for the next step. Hyul raised his hand, creating a 3rd circle, interaction. Now 3 magic circles were spinning around Hyul. Hyul was happy that he finally got the 3rd circle, interaction. Hyul looked at the interweaving of the 3 circles, and thought that he had to become stronger as quickly as possible, to become a master of the 5th circle. The next day in the forest, Hyul was lying on a tree branch, and sparrows were jumping on him. Hyul was completely relaxed as he thought about the combat survival test that was being held on the spacious training grounds. Hyul had a special assessment artifact on his hand, like the other students. The exam lasted 32 hours. The essence of the exam itself was simple. Students were simply required to hold out in a shrinking zone as long as possible. Hyul looked at the screen of the evaluation artifact, where a congratulation on the awarding of 1,000 points appeared, and decided to move on. The main catch of the exam was that it required you to survive not only the attacks of monsters, but also other students, earning points. The birds that were resting peacefully on Hyul took off into the sky. A student appeared on the ground, shouting at Hyul, whom he could find, to die along with the fireball attack. Hyul dodged, managing to jump up, and the fire attack landed on the spot where he had been sitting before. Hyul jumped to the ground, landing not far from the student who attacked him. The student shouted at Hyul that he wouldn't be able to get away, no matter how skillfully he dodged. Hyul swung his fist, rushing towards the student. The student created a barrier using interactive magic, calling Hyul a dumbass for wanting to swing his fists. Hyul did not stop. He resolutely moved towards the enemy. Hyul used the interaction circle, touching the enemy's barrier. The student saw the barrier crack right in front of his face under the pressure of Hyul. The student could not understand how this was possible. Hyel instantly cast an earth push charm, knocking his opponent to the ground as the barrier crumbled under his touch. The student flew a short distance and hit his back on the ground. The student couldn't believe that his barrier had failed to withstand some kind of earth jolt. Hyel looked at the student who had already lost consciousness, asking which one of them was the idiot if he was going to attack from behind. Kayul rubbed his neck, indignant at not understanding why the student had screamed before the attack, which had given him away. Hyel stopped thinking about it, focusing on the power of the third circle in his clenched fist, with which he broke the barrier. Hyel was able to easily weaken the second circle's barrier core with the interaction circle, and this allowed Kayul to finally break through the barrier with an ordinary push of the earth of the first circle. The evaluation artifact on the unconscious student's wrist reported that Kanjirak had dropped out. Kayul went the other way, leaving the student lying on the ground, thinking that the idiot had exposed himself, and that was why everything had happened. Hyel's evaluation artifact reported that he had been awarded 10 more points. Hyel moved further into the forest, thinking about how he had gotten hooked on the new circle, knowing that he could start using it against the enemy's third circle of magic. Something flashed behind Kayul at high speed. Hyel turned around, sensing someone's presence. Hyel immediately sent a fireball to attack the place where he heard movement. Hyel was surprised when the smoke from his attack settled. The Bloodclaw wolves had already surrounded him from all sides. Hyel watched the monsters closely, realizing that they might have been lured by the sounds of the recent battle. Kayul stretched his shoulders, saying that he could start whining about the unfairness of the fights that followed one after another, while the wolves bared their teeth. Kayul chuckled, saying that he was one of those who aimed for first place, and now he was even grateful for this turn of events. One of the Bloodclaw wolves howled. The wolves, following the signal, rushed to attack Kayul, who was just waiting for this moment. At the same time, Kayul's fight was watched through monitor screens. The instructors sat in a large room in front of a bunch of monitors, calling out the names of some of the students. The instructors continued to look at the monitors, talking about the students who should be recognized based on the results of this test. The instructors discussed the possibility of the named students making it into the top 10, noting that it would be difficult to hold out until the end. The female instructor looked at Hyul's class teacher, saying that now no one doubts Hyul's skills. Hyul's class teacher continued to watch Hyul's battle with the wolves, not paying attention to what was happening around him. The female instructor once again called Hyul's class teacher, Instructor Go Chung-soo. Instructor Guo Chung-soo smiled without taking his eyes off the screen, agreeing with her words. Another instructor echoed the discussion of Hyul's changes, noting that he was now, like no one else, farther from being expelled. In the table with intermediate results, Kayul's name was in first place. He had a big lead over second place Adela. The instructors were amazed at how well Hyul fought the pack of wolves, scoring more points due to his knowledge of their habits. Instructor Go Chung-soo listened with a satisfied face to other people's reasoning that at this rate, Hyul would be able to win the Olympics. Meanwhile, Kayul wiped the sweat from his face, examining the battlefield. Hyul checked the evaluation artifact, thinking that defeating the pack was worth about 60 points. Kayul tried to keep his balance and felt a push from underground. Hyul jumped, feeling the ground move, realizing that this didn't feel like a simple earthquake. Kayul learned the reason for the Earth's movement by looking at what appeared in the place where he stood. A huge carcass appeared under Kayul, comparable in size to an elephant, with emeralds on its shell. The emerald turtle emerged from the ground and waved its tongue right under Hyul. Hyul smiled contentedly, thinking about where such a rare monster could have come from. Hyul landed on the ground next to one of the turtle's huge paws. Hyul looked with interest at the emerald turtle, which he saw in real life for the first time. The turtle opened its mouth, screaming, and Hyul decided to fight. At the same time, in the tower of the Examination Commission experts, where the instructors of the Obelisk Academy were sitting, the instructors watched with interest as events unfolded when Hyul decided to fight the emerald turtle. One of the instructors noted that usually they run away from the rarest monster of the training ground, or cooperate with other students. Another instructor spoke up, saying that even a genius like Hyul couldn't handle the turtle alone. The emerald turtle was a famous 4th-class C-rank monster. Due to their incredibly high defense ratings, they were considered the natural enemy of all wizards. The emerald turtle rushed towards Hyul. Hyul dodged the attack, jumping to the side at the last moment. Hyul looked at the turtle, thinking that killing this monster would earn him a huge amount of points. Hyul noticed that the turtle was trying to hit him with its tail while he was in the air. Hyul instantly created a barrier using first circle magic. Hyul used the barrier as a base under his feet to be able to dodge the attack. The turtle's tail easily broke through the barrier, and Hyul simply jumped off it. The instructors watched the battle with interest, discussing what they saw, and saying that not every 6th circle mage could handle this monster. Hyul, meanwhile, used the flame volcano charm against the emerald turtle after it pierced the barrier with its tail. Hyul landed on his feet, trying to see something beyond the fire and smoke. Hyul wondered if this attack would work against the turtle. The turtle emerged from the disappearing smoke without a scratch from the attack, surprising Hyul. Hyul was stunned by what he saw. Hyul rushed from the spot, trying to escape from the turtle, thinking that it was not easy at all, and even with the 5th circle, this monster could not be defeated. The turtle was catching up with Hyul, who was trying to figure out if the monster could be so fast because of the mana in its body. This thought gave Hyul an idea. He thought again about how mana could affect the body. Hyul rushed to the side, deciding to try. Hyul crouched on the ground, channeling mana into his legs to strengthen them. At the last moment, Kayul jumped to the side, and the turtle attacked with its head the place where he was sitting. Kayul lunged away from the turtle again, this time with mana-enhanced legs. Kayul dodged headbutts from the turtle that could have broken a centuries-old tree into splinters. Hyul stopped, thinking that running after the turtle would not bring him closer to victory, and he needed to fight. Hyul created a barrier, protecting himself from the emerald turtle's paw. Hyul felt the force of the blow, realizing that he had underestimated him. Hyul realized that he wouldn't be able to block the attack with such force, and used the third circle of resonance to strengthen the barrier. Kayul clenched his jaw, enduring the face-to-face confrontation. Hyul waited for the moment immediately after the attack, when the turtle would not move for some time, restoring its strength. Hyul immediately began to use a wind spell. The turtle, as Hyul expected, did not move, giving him time to maneuver while he used a wind spell to speed up. Hyul remembered reading in a book as a child that a turtle stops moving to relieve tension from weak ligaments after an attack. Hyul made the most of this opportunity. He jumped into the air, helping himself with wind spells. Hyul created a huge ice spear, pointing it down at the emerald turtle. The instructors watched Kayul's fight with their mouths open in surprise. All the screens that were meant to monitor the students showed Hyul creating an ice spear. Hyul aimed an ice spear at the turtle, activating the interaction circle. The emeralds that covered the turtle's shell flew apart, and blood poured out of the turtle's mouth. Hyul landed on the ground next to the corpse of the emerald turtle, which he managed to pierce with an ice spear. Hyul held his chest, trying to catch his breath, amazed that he had managed to handle the emerald turtle. The evaluation artifact informed Hyul that he had been awarded 1,000 points for the victory. Kayul was pleased with the result. At the same time in the House of Magicians, Hyul's father sat on a chair in front of a huge TV. Behind him stood Sakyok, Hyul's uncle and the leader of the shadows. They watched Hyul's fight. Father Kayul watched what was happening on the screen with a smile. Hyul's father asked Sakyok if it was possible to defeat the turtle in the third round, even though it was vulnerable to the ice attribute. Sakyok did not take his eyes off the screen, saying that he himself did not understand anything and asked for forgiveness. Sakyok reasoned that the monster should still have natural resistance while Hyul was getting the monster's meat. They looked at Kayul, who was carrying pieces of meat, having taken care of food. His father said that he did not raise him to be a weakling. Sakyok asked the chief if he could ask about one thing, and Hyul's father asked what he wanted to know. Sakyok couldn't understand why Hyul was acting so brazenly, pointing out that Jihan and Saya would take it as a challenge when they watched the broadcast. Hyul's father agreed, saying that it would be so, and Sakyok asked again, not understanding the leader's point of view. They looked at Kayul, who was about to cook meat on the fire. Kayul's father spoke about the past when his son dropped out of the race for the position of chief. Kayul's father explained that things were different now, and that Kayul's status within the family was no longer below the plinth. Hyul's father recalled their conversation in the reception room, when Hyul set his conditions, saying that Hyul's progress could now not be denied. Hyul's father told Sakyok about the agreement with Hyul, that he would be protected by his brother and sister until the Olympics. Sakyok listened with his mouth slightly open as Hyul's father explained that his son could afford to stand out. According to Kayul's father, in this way, Kayul will be able to attract public attention and strengthen his position and increase his power. Hyul's father smiled, saying that this was all so that Jihan and Sia would not pose a threat to Hyul once the protection period was over. At the same time, they saw on the screen how Hyul was seasoning the emerald turtle meat on the fire, and his father called him a show-off. At night, when the moon was shining high in the sky, Kayul, wearing Vaitner's cloak, sat on a log opposite the fire where the meat was being cooked, holding a piece of the finished product in his hands. On the first day of the test, fights were prohibited between 11 o'clock in the evening and 1 o'clock in the morning. Hyul looked at the meat in his hands, knowing it was done for the safety of the students, but he didn't like the ease of the test. Hyul knew that in the past, the training of mages in some countries had been quite brutal, and such changes were necessary. Hyul adjusted the hood of his cloak, helping him shake off his fatigue, glad that they were allowed to take the magical devices. Kayul took a piece of meat in his hands, strung on a branch, and took a bite, thinking it was time to have a snack. Kayul quickly finished the piece and smiled contentedly, stroking his full belly. A sound from the bushes attracted Hyul's attention. Suchan and Adela went out to see Kayul, surprised to find him. Suchan and Adela each found a log and sat around the fire. Kayul asked why they were wandering through the forest together. Adela said they bumped into each other before the break and had a minor argument, but Suchan corrected her by saying she had beaten him up badly. Kayul looked at Suchan, guessing that he had crawled towards the aroma of food after the battle ended, and Suchan confirmed his words with a smile. Suchan and Adela looked at the piece of meat languishing on the fire with burning eyes, asking Hyul if he would share it with them. Hyul was surprised that Adela was acting the same way as Suchan and said that the food was his. Suchan looked at Hyul with a sweet face, hinting that there had never been anything yours and mine between them, and Adela repeated after him. Kayul closed his eyes, unable to look at them. Suchan and Adela were delighted to hear Hyul's consent, as he was going to throw out the excess anyway. Suchan and Adela took a piece of meat for themselves, noting the amazing smell and thanking Hyul for the food. Suchan and Adela took their first bite, enjoying the food. Hyul felt like an important chef as he listened to their compliments on his cooking. Adela asked Hyul whose meat it was, suggesting that it might be Honey Bear. The Honey Bear was a bear-like monster that lived in the forest, and its meat became very tender when cooked over a fire. Hyul said it wasn't him, and Adela continued to reason that there were only 2 monsters here whose meat was fit for food. Adela continued speaking, naming only the honey bear and emerald turtle as edible. The rest were either poisonous or tasteless. Adela looked at Hyul and asked in disbelief if he really had finished off the emerald turtle. Suchin continued eating, waiting for an answer. Hyul admitted that this was indeed the case, pointing to the west and saying that he had done this during the day. Suchin, with his mouth full, began asking questions, saying that he had only seen the turtle briefly once, and was curious how Hyul had managed. Hyul reminded him not to talk with his mouth full, but Suchan didn't stop chewing, saying that Hyul was cool. Adela thought about it. After a short silence, Adela said that this was unheard of. Adela continued to say that it was unheard of for a wizard below the 5th circle to be able to defeat the turtle while looking directly at Hyul. Hyul saw her mood and decided to explain. Hyul raised his hand to the sky, casting a fiery volcano spell. A huge column of fire shot up into the sky. It seemed to have no end. Suchin and Adela looked at Hyul's spell in shock, recognizing it as 3rd circle magic. Hyul continued to demonstrate his abilities to them. Adela exclaimed, noticing that Hyul had managed to modify her to the power of the 6th circle. Hyul finished his demonstration and turned to face them, rubbing his wrist. Hyul listened with admiration, thinking that this was simply 3rd circle magic enhanced by the teacher's technique, but he couldn't tell. Suchin remembered his questions, suggesting that Hyul was able to hit the turtle in the head to win. But Hyul said that he simply broke through the shell. Suchin came closer, telling Hyul not to rush, but Hyul only said with a smile that that was how it was. Hyul suggested looking at the recording from the Academy's drones after the end of the test, confident that it had been preserved. Hyul quickly changed his mind, saying that Suchin and Adela would be able to see it sooner. Suchin looked at him, not understanding what Hyul meant, and Adela looked at him with a confident gaze. Hyul explained, saying that tomorrow they would have to fight fair and square. Suchin childishly said that they would beat up Hyulu, and Adela only agreed and wished him luck. Adela was confident. She said that she also had something that she could show Hyul. On the 2nd day of testing, the barrier separating the training area in the forest was reduced. The instructors monitoring the test discussed the fact that there were only 4 left and tried to figure out who would emerge victorious. The next day, Hyul was walking in the forest. Not far from Hyul, there was movement. Someone directed a magical wind cutter spell at him. Hyul turned around, feeling the fluctuation of mana. Hyul instantly created spears of wind in the shape of birds, directing them towards the direction where he sensed movement. Hyul looked in the direction where smoke rose from the impact of the wind spears on the magical wind cutter. Ji Sangwok moved towards Hyul, saying that everything he heard was not just rumors, but a real supernova explosion. Sangwok jumped down from the tree towards Hyul, who was looking at him. Hyul barely managed to dodge as Sangwok punched that spot. Hyul noted Sangwok's speed, barely keeping up with his movements. Sangwok jumped and kicked Hyul, who dodged it at the last moment, tilting his body back. Hyul jumped back into the distance, realizing that close combat with Sangwok was dangerous. His kick whistled past Hyul by a millimeter. Sangwok smiled and greeted his opponent, telling Hyul that he was unlucky to run into him. Hyul disagreed, saying that he was, on the contrary, lucky to have recognized a wizard who specialized in close combat. In the memories of Hyul from the Obelisk Magic Academy, Hyul witnessed Sangwok's training fights at the academy. Hyul knew that Sangwok was a master at enchanting his body. Sangwok was in the top 2 among 2nd years in martial arts. Hyulu took a fighting stance, preparing to fight the body enchantment expert. Hyul looked at Sangwok, knowing full well that he was not someone the interaction circle could be used against. Hyul decided that he would also use body enchantment and directed mana into his fist. Hyul began to move using his body enchantment and his combat skills. Sangwok appreciated Hyul's willingness to engage in honest, direct confrontation. At the same time, in the tower of the examination committee, the instructors were discussing the students' decision to choose the combat magic of body enchantment. One of the instructors suggested that in this case, Sangwok would emerge victorious from the duel. The instructor watched the events on the screen, listing Sangwok's merits, due to which he would be able to win. Instructor Go Chang-soo chimed in, saying that Hyul's potential was immeasurable given his fight with the turtle. Meanwhile, Hyul dodged Sangwok's fist. Hyul used the Demon Eye spell to see Sangwok's mana flows. Hyul saw that the mana was concentrating right in Sangwok's fist. Right before Hyul's eyes, the mana from Sangwok's fist was transferred straight to Sangwok's knee. Hyul put up a barrier in front of himself, realizing that Sangwok was going to deliver a knee kick. Hyul felt how heavy the blow was from Sangwok. Cracks appeared on the barrier, and Hyul decided to press him with it. Hyul finally broke the barrier, sending the fragments towards Sangwok, who didn't expect this. Sangwok watched with interest as Hyul completely destroyed his barrier, waiting for further action. Sangwok looked at Hyul's magic, realizing that he had never seen anything like it before, not believing that the genius magician had actually returned. Sangwok finally admitted that all the rumors about Hyul did not just appear out of nowhere. Hyul went on the attack against Sangwok, who was thinking that the fight was getting more and more interesting. Sangwok was confident that he would not lose in close combat. Hyul thought he had a chance after seeing Sangwok's slight confusion, and was about to throw a punch. Hyul's fist was enchanted with mana. Sangwok blocked Hyul's strike, crossing his arms over his chest. Hyul was surprised at how quickly he reacted. The instructors, who were watching the fight through screens, watched the fight attentively, rising from their seats in excitement. Hyul did a backflip, avoiding a kick from Sanwok. Hyul thought about Sanwok's combat sense that allowed him to react in time, but he noticed that he lacked common sense. Hyul thought that if he had disguised the flame throw in the strike, Sanwok would not have had time to put up a barrier. Then both of Sanwok's arms would have been seriously damaged. Hyul charged again, causing Sanwok to be amazed by his speed. Sanwok crossed his arms over his chest, expecting Hyul to repeat his previous attack. Hyul chuckled, asking if Sanwok really continued to defend himself like this. Hyul, at the last moment, kneed Sanwok in the ribs that were open, saying that this place was open. Sanwok gritted his teeth in pain, realizing too late that Hyul had used a feint with his hand's enchantment that distracted him from the real blow. Sanwok tried to figure out when Hyul had managed to enchant his legs to hit him with his knee. Sanwok felt pain in his side and, checking it with his hand, assumed that he had a broken rib. Sanwok considered himself a true fighter and was going to endure this pain using only willpower. Sanwok rushed to attack Hyul, believing that attack is the most important thing for a fighter. Hyul increased the distance between them to calculate the attack. Hyul told him that if Sanwok relied too much on his strength, his body would quickly break down. Sanwok was about to jump kick Hyul. Hyul asked if Sanwok had overheated while diving down to avoid his attack. Sanwok tried to minimize the damage from the failed attack, enduring the pain in his side. Sanwok landed on the ground and barely managed to regain his balance before he noticed Hyul's attack. Sanwok didn't have time to dodge, and Hyul hit Sanwok with his fist from below, up on the jaw. Sanwok was thrown to the ground by the force of Hyul's blow. Sanwok lay on the ground unconscious from the blow, and Hyul shook his hand. Hyul noticed that Sanwok concentrated mana into his lower jaw at one point before his strike to reduce the damage. A bright mark from the blow was visible on Sanwok's lower jaw. Hyul wiped his face with his shirt, smiling as he noticed that Sanwok's fighting sense was incredible, not only in attack but also in defense. A notification was received on the evaluation artifact on Hyul's hand that 100 points had been awarded for the victory. At night, the radius of the training ground in the forest decreased again. Hyul walked through the forest, checking the information that there were only 2 survivors of the test. Hyul looked ahead, thinking that there was only one enemy. Adela appeared before his eyes under the moonlight. She greeted him and said with a smile that it was a wonderful time for a battle. Hyul and Adela looked at each other. Earlier that day, at the subsidiary office of the House of Mages, Seiya and Jihan watched the broadcast with Hyul. Seiya said that it couldn't be that Hyul reached the final. Seiya couldn't contain her emotions, indignant that they couldn't lay a finger on him, while Hyul had gotten completely out of hand. Jihan looked at Si, who was biting her nails, nervous that Hyul would become the heir again. Jihan remained silent, despite the fact that Seiya addressed him directly. Seiya couldn't accept Jihan's silence, asking him to answer, and remembered that Hyul had even managed to defeat the turtle. Seiya continued to lament how someone of Hyul's caliber could defeat the turtle, and she was sure that her father was watching the test like the others. Seiya rose from her chair, unable to sit still due to the emotions that had washed over her, and Jihan exhaled tiredly and asked Seiya to calm down. Seiya grabbed her head with her hands, hysterical and saying that she couldn't remain calm in such a situation. Si flinched and fell silent halfway through what she said. Jihan looked at her, not hiding his contempt and anger, and said that he would not repeat it twice. Seiya began to tremble from one look of Jihan. She asked him for forgiveness, saying that she would remain silent, and asked not to punish her. Jihan asked again about the punishment, holding out his hand to her. A smile appeared on Jihan's face, but the emotion was still there as he stroked the trembling Seiya's head, asking what she was talking about. Jihan adjusted her hair while Seiya looked at him, listening to the question of why he would punish her. Jihan leaned closer to Seiya with a scary smile and said that they were brother and sister. Seiya fell to her knees, thanking Jihan as he walked away from her, thinking about the sly Hyul, who was snagging good opportunities. Jihan smiled dangerously, saying that if Hyul continued to behave like this, he would not leave it like that, despite the relationship. At present, a fire was rising from an explosion in the forest, where the test was being conducted. Adela used the moonlight bullet spell, telling Hyul that he wouldn't be able to catch her off guard. Adela watched the videos of his battles many times, and even took into account how he used the sun in the last fight. Now Adela came on purpose at night, confident that everything would be different. Adela wasn't going to give Hyul a chance to counterattack. Adela moved, casting spells without stopping. Hyul found himself under a hail of moonlight bullets, and tried to dodge them. One of the moonlight bullets grazed Hyul's shoulder, drawing blood, making it impossible for him to dodge all of them at once. Hyul noticed that Adela was creating many more magic missiles than she had during the midterms. Adela said that a mage capable of single techniques is vulnerable to dense magical fire. Adela watched Hyul's movements, continuing to cast her spell. Adela told Hyul that this was his weakness, and that she was superior to him in strength and efficiency in everything. The place where Adela's magic projectiles hit was covered in fire. Hyul exhaled, feeling tired. Hyul held up a barrier as the shells hit, shouting at Adele to think as she wanted. Hyul was thinking about Adela's strategy to try to overcome him with the advantage of the magic circle. Hyul didn't believe that this was the entire result of the analysis of his battles, which Adela was pleased with, judging by her face. Hyul held the barriers, fully understanding that not everyone could spam magic like that. which was expected from the Divine Guardians. Hyul smiled, noticing something. He asked Adela a question. Hyul looked at Adela, who continued to perform magic, and asked since when she had mastered the 4th magic circle. Hyul held the barrier with one hand, and with the other behind his back, carefully cast a spell of ice needles. Adela stopped attacking Hyul with magic projectiles, admitting that she thought he would notice right away. Hyul took advantage of the smoke that had not yet cleared from Adela's attacks to cover his attack with ice needles. Adela told Hyul that she had mastered the 4th circle about 4 days ago, and there was more to come. Adela closed her eyes. Behind Adela, who stood with her eyes closed, an icy needle of Hyul was flying from the direction of the moon. Adela told Hyul that he would no longer be able to impress her with such obvious tricks. Adela waved her hand, still keeping her eyes closed. At the last moment, Adela turned to the side, and at the same moment, she broke Hyul's ice needle with her eyes closed. Adela opened her eyes. Her pupils were cross-shaped. Hyul immediately recognized this magic, and asked if Adele was too fat for the 4th circle and vision with the heart at the same time. Seeing with the heart was the secret magic of the noble French steward family, to which Adela belonged. This detection magic was similar to the red eyes that Kim Kengan, the Lord of the Blue Tower, had. The current Adela was a combination of the strengths of the Divine Guardian magic, and detection magic made her a formidable opponent. Hyul wiped his face with the back of his hand, thinking that in front of him was simply a monster in human form. Hyul looked at Adela, who was about to cast her spell again, knowing full well that he would have to give her everything he had. Adela said that she was no longer so naive as to give him breaks. Adela attacked Hyul again, asking when he would show her the magic he used to defeat the Emerald Turtle. Hyul watched as Adela's magical projectiles approached him. Hyul smiled, telling Adela that he was just about to do so. Hyul activated his demonic eye as he looked at the approaching attack. Hyul was able to disassemble the entire structure of the Moonlight Bullet Charm using the Demon Eyes and activated the interaction circle. All the magic projectiles that Adela sent at Hyul went off course and didn't even hit Hyul. Adela couldn't believe that her bullets had veered off course just before hitting their target and asked what trick Hyul had pulled. Hyul smiled, asking Adela her thoughts on how he did it, and wondered if even seeing with her heart hadn't helped her. At the same time, in the estate of the House of Magicians, Hyul's father, Inhyuk, looked at the one who called his name and asked what kind of magic this was. Wee Sangchol, the head of the Divine Guardian House, held a glass of wine in his hand, not understanding. Vi Sangchol was curious about what kind of spell could change the trajectory of magic projectiles in such an unprecedented way. Inhyuk said that he himself didn't understand it, watching the broadcast from the tests, and Sangchol asked if Hyul really didn't say anything. Inhyuk sighed tiredly, saying that it was nothing, and Sangchol looked at his friend, saying that it was unexpected that Hyul was hiding something from his father. Inhyuk propped his head up with his hand, saying that Hyul had grown into a real brat over the past year. They continued watching the broadcast of Hyul's fight with Adela, and Inhyuk admitted that Hyul has more secrets than revelations now. Sangchol understood his friend, saying that Hyul had changed a lot in a year away from home. Inhyuk agreed with his words, and Sangchol added, saying that a man only grows up when he leaves his home. Sangchol rubbed his chin, admitting that during the midterms, he thought that Hyul was just lucky. Inhyuk listened to Sangchol's words about Hyul, who shamefully admitted that he thought Hyul's fame was fleeting. Inhyuk looked away, saying that he understood everything, since his son was incompatible with artificial intelligence. Sangchol continued, looking at the broadcast. He noticed that in the first ball between their children, Hyul won with strategy and technique. After that fight, people began to analyze Hyul, immediately exposing his weaknesses, after which they promised a quick defeat. Inhyuk wasn't surprised when he mentioned Adela's analytical skills, and Sangchul proudly agreed with his daughter's assessment. Sangchul continued more seriously, closing his eyes. Sangchul admitted while watching the fight between Hyul and Adela that he greatly underestimated Inhyuk's son. Sangchul called Inhyuk's name again, and Inhyuk looked at his friend. Sangchul admitted that he was even grateful to Hyul. Sangchul remembered how Adela, his daughter, lost her purpose in life for the first time. Her eyes were expressionless. But now Sangchul sees changes in her daughter. Adela's eyes shine brighter than ever as she competes with Hyul. Sangchul smiled and said that he was very happy that Hyul had returned, and even Jin Su had regained his motivation. Inhyuk looked at the screen, which showed a close-up image of his son during the fight. Inhyuk smiled, agreeing with Sangchul, saying that it was worth saying thank you for that. The warning system carried the instructor's voice, announcing the end of the exam and forcing them to stop fighting. Hyul touched the appraisal artifact while standing in the smoke that rose from the battle. Hyul covered his mouth with his hand, looking at the area in front of him. Adela stood some distance away from him, the ground around her covered in the marks of battle. Adela wiped sweat from her chin, breathing heavily after the fight. Hyul said with a grin that he would have definitely won if he had more time, and he considered it a pity that the exam was over. Adela chuckled, saying that would never happen, and said she had the advantage. Hyul and Adela looked at each other, maintaining the tension of the battle. Instructor Guo Chang-su walked up to them, breaking the tension and telling them to return to the tower with him. The next day, at the Obelisk Academy dormitory, Adela argued, saying that she would have won yesterday's fight. Hyul, with his arms crossed over his chest, said that Adele shouldn't even dream about it, because Hyul would have won. Suchin listened silently as Adela and Hyul argued among themselves, proving to each other who would win and why. Suchin told them to go to another room if they were going to discuss this all evening, because he didn't need fights in his room. Adela and Hyul simultaneously yelled at Suchin, telling him to shut up and calling him Mr. 26th Eliminator. Suchin said, crying, that this was his room, and he called them to review the recording of the fight, and not all this. Suchin pointed to the table, saying that he even bought pizza and drinks for them. Adela was happy to see banana milk. Suchin continued to whine, saying that he did everything for them, and they behaved like this. Suchin saw that Hyul and Adela were already sitting on the sofa, telling him that he was blocking their view. Hyul hurried him by saying that they wanted to watch it all over again, and Suchin began to complain about the long recording. When the recording ended 14 hours later, it was already deep into the night. Hyul and Adela were sitting on the sofa, and Suchan was lying on the floor with a pillow under his head. Suchin whined tiredly, calling the guys monsters of analysis. Adela laughed softly, and Hyul asked her why. Adela said she was just having fun while covering Suchin, who was lying on the floor, with a blanket. Adela sat back down on the couch next to Hyul and said that she thought they would abandon the idea halfway through, pointing at Suchan. Hyul said that although Suchin acts like a weirdo and constantly whines that he can't handle it, he always tries his best. Hyul looked at Suchin, who was dozing on the floor. Adela smiled as she told Hyul that he had good friends. Hyul propped his head up with his hand, saying that they were even too good for his taste. Adela lowered her gaze, asking for forgiveness. Hyul asked why Adela was suddenly asking for forgiveness. Adela explained that she apologized for pretending they didn't know each other, and keeping her distance for a whole year. Adela realized, looking back, how wrong she had been, and she felt sorry. Hyul asked Adela what there was to apologize for, saying that he himself had rejected all her signals for communication. Hyul told her not to worry because he was the one who chose to distance himself, and added that he tried to do the same with Suchin. Suchan immediately woke up upon hearing his name and indignantly asked Hyul if what he had heard was true and had frightened Adela. Hyul rubbed his wrist, saying that he was no longer the same as he was then, and now had gained new strength. Adela and Suchin listened to Hyul with interest. Hyul added that he also found new friends, and now wants to show them something. Hyul stretched out his hands, beginning to cast a spell with concentration. Adela's mouth dropped open in surprise as she recognized the sight of the charm. Suchin shouted that it was impossible. Hyul extended his hand, showing the two the moonlight bullets. Hyul was pleased with the result of repeating the Steward family's spell that Adela had used. The boys still looked at Hyul's hand in disbelief when he said that this was his magic. Suchin asked if this meant that Hyul's magic was capable of interfering with the enemy's spell formula itself. Hyul confirmed that Suchan's thoughts were correct, and pointing to his eye, said that he was able to see the structures of magical formulas. Adela covered her mouth with her hand, shocked by Hyul's revelation, and asked if it was thanks to his eyes that he was able to unravel her family charm. Hyul confirmed her words, noting that this is usually very difficult, and this is his personal development as a result of long-term analysis. Hyul said that to do this, he would need to see the spell up close several times, and Adela made some guesses about the spell that had affected the turtle. Hyul confirmed her guess, saying that he had studied the shell, and then used a charm that reduced its durability. Suchin raised his hands, saying that the monster here was only Hyul, and Adela continued to think, finally understanding how Hyul was able to interfere with her magic. Adela wanted to know more details, to clarify whether her assumptions were correct. Hyul confirmed everything Adela said with a smile, saying that she quickly grasps all the information. Hyul gave Adela a hint, saying that her focus on only bullets during the match made it easier for him to calculate the formula. Adela exhaled, saying that she had no idea that her choice to use bullets would be such a fatal mistake. Adela asked if Hyul's magic had any weaknesses, and Hyul said it was difficult to calculate attribute mana. Hyul noted that he could only interfere with the spells that were right in front of him, and in a real fight, that would be a great luxury. Adela asked if he could turn the magic projectile around and return it back to the enemy, showing with gestures. Hyul noted with regret that there would definitely not be enough time for this in battle. Adela noted that this was sad because it could have been a really cool feature if Hyul could mirror spells. Adela said that Hyul's charms were already too cheating while Suchin tried to stop them in the background. Suchan took Hyul by the shoulders, moving closer to his face, and asked him to finally listen to him. He asked why Hyul was discussing his secrets. Hyul and Adela asked if Suchin really didn't understand, and Suchin asked what they were talking about, not understanding anything at all. Hyul and Adela simultaneously spoke about the Olympics. Suchin was surprised to hear their explanation. Hyul told them that they would be performing with him at the Olympics, and asked them to help him. Suchin was moved, calling Hyul's name with a slight stutter. Suchin quickly came to his senses and raised his hand, finding an objection, and Hyul pointed his finger at him for Suchin to speak. Suchin rubbed his neck, saying that he understood the reason why Adela was chosen, but he felt that he wasn't strong enough. Suchin said that the selection was being conducted among second and third year students, and it would be difficult to get a slot, but Hyul said not to worry. Hyul, with a smile that was frightening to Suchin, declared that he would achieve his participation one way or another. Adela said thoughtfully that there would be many obstacles, but Hyul's circle of interaction was their trump card. If its use is acceptable, then it's a team match where you have to protect your magic stone while destroying enemy cannons, or a match where you need to steal a flag from the enemy base while protecting your own. Teamwork will be effective in any such competition. Hyul said that they had team or siege battles in their pocket, not counting everything else that interested Adela. Adela asked Hyul in surprise if he had any other trump cards. Hyul chuckled softly with a smile. Hyul confirmed her assumption, saying that they certainly exist. Sometime later, when Hyul returned to his room in the dormitory of the Obelisk Academy, Hyul put on Veitner's cloak and opened the book Mimir's Well. Hyul moved to the Mimir Well, deciding that it was time to begin. Hyul was transported to the library, accompanied by flower petals. Mimir, who was lying on the sofa with a book, greeted Hyul in return. Mimir noticed that Hyul came to her later than she expected, and told him not to even tell her that he had failed to win first place. Hyul told Mimir that of course he had won first place, and the points he had earned from defeating the Emerald Turtle had helped with that. Hyul asked Mimir if she remembered how he told her about his plans for a gold medal, and she confirmed this, saying about the Olympics. Hyul said he discussed participation with friends and told them about the interaction circle. Mimir was surprised, remembering how Hyul said that he would tell her only after he had completely mastered it, and said that it happened somehow quickly. Hyul confidently said that everything was just in time, causing Mimir to be surprised. Mimir was surprised that Hyul had managed to master the interaction so perfectly so quickly. Mimir called Hyul amazing, clutching the chicken in her hands in excitement. Hyul accepted her compliment and continued talking about the Olympics. Hyul asked Mimir to find destruction-level books for him. Hyul believed that it was time for him to learn the third magic circle of destruction. After returning from the well, Hyul heard his phone ringing. Hyul answered the call from the Lord of the Blue Tower. Kim Kang-yoon immediately started talking about how he watched the broadcast, saying that Hyul had amazingly defeated the turtle. Kim Kang-yoon continued to point out moments from the broadcast that struck him as his secretary followed him down the hallway. Kim Kang-yoon asked with interest how Hyul was able to break through the shell and what he did with the moonlight bullets. Hyul looked at Kim Kang-yoon on the video call, who made suggestions about how it might work. Hyul smiled apologetically at Kim Kang-yoon and said that he was truly sorry, but he couldn't share his secrets yet. Kim Kang-yoon admitted that he got carried away with his questions and said that Hyul didn't have to answer. Hyul listened to Kim Kang-yoon's words when he said that a magician has the right to his secrets. Kim Kang-yoon told Hyul that his magic is incredibly interesting, and he hopes that he can figure it out on his own. Kim Kang-yoon stopped talking about Hyul's magic. Kim Kang-yoon said that he called him because of the elemental stones that Hyul asked about. Hyul asked if there was good news or bad, prepared for either. Kim Kang-yoon smiled when he heard Hyul's question. Kim Kang-yoon came in and said that the news was good and that everything was ready now. Kim Kang-yoon walked into the lab with the researchers standing around the elemental stone and said it was time to up the ante. Hyul was surprised to hear his words, and just in case asked if the people of the Blue Tower were tired, suggesting that he might think the opposite. Kim Kang-yoon winked at Hyul, pointing to the researchers in the background, who, as he said, could not be torn away from the elemental stones. Hyul looked on with admiration, realizing that they were ready to work until they were sweating. Kim Kang-yoon meanwhile said that Hyul doesn't have to worry, and that he will get his artifact, for which Hyul thanked him. Kim Kang-yoon was about to say goodbye, but Hyul asked him to wait for him for another minute. Hyul said he had one more request. Kim Kang-yoon asked what the request was, guessing it might be for compensation for the incident with Instructor Smith. Hyul said that this is not entirely true, and depends solely on Kim Kang-yoon's personal interpretation. Kim Kang-yoon listened to him with joy, saying that he was already curious about what Hyul had to offer this time. Hyul said he wanted to ask the Blue Tower engineers to join the national team for this year's Olympics. After some time in the well, Mimir asked Hyul in shock that he needed to fight the Fifth Circle Magician. Hyul let out a tired sigh, and said that this was the condition of the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower. Hyul closed his eyes, wondering if he had taken this too lightly. Hyul recalled a conversation with Kim Kang-yoon, who asked Hyul about his desire for his person to become an official developer for the Olympics. Kim Kang-yoon told Hyul with a happy smile that he refused. Hyul held the phone in his hand, thinking that as expected, this request was not beneficial to Kim Kang-yoon. Kim Kang-yoon continued with a sly smile, saying that this is how he would have answered in any other case. Kim Kang-yoon made a condition to Hyul, saying that if he defeats the Fifth Circle Mage one-on-one, he will reconsider his decision. Hyul stuttered and agreed, not expecting such a reaction from the ruler of the Blue Magic Tower. Kim Kang-yoon continued by asking if Hyul was aware that there would be 2 Fifth Circle magicians among the foreign participants this year. Kim Kang-yoon said he doesn't necessarily doubt Hyul's skills, but bringing his man in will require a huge investment. Kim Kang-yoon told Hyul that he wouldn't sign up for this just like that. Hyul stood with the phone, realizing that Kim Kang-yoon wanted him to first prove to him that he was capable of winning the gold medal. In the present tense, Mimir asked what Hyul was going to do, saying that it was almost impossible for him to overcome the Fifth Circle now. Hyul also understood this, and said that this is why he asked for a 10-day delay for now. When Mimir asked if Hyul planned to take action and prepare during this time, Hyul said he had a couple of ideas. Mimir noted that it would not be easy for him to do this, and asked if it was really important to go so far for the sake of an engineer. Hyul sat in front of a stack of books and told Mimir that otherwise everything would lose its meaning. Hyul turned to Mimir, explaining that in their country, only the masters of the Blue Tower could gain access to tuning the artifacts for the Olympics. Mimir was surprised, saying that the Blue Tower must really be an incredible place. While Hyul carried the selected stack of books, Hyul said that artifacts made by an ordinary craftsman and a Blue Tower master differ by at least 10%. Hyul added that only people from the Blue Tower know how to tune elemental mana stones. Mimir realized that the difference in artifact settings could affect winning the competition, recognizing that it was not unnecessary. Hyul was collecting more books, saying that they definitely needed to involve them, and Mimir asked when Hyul would go on the next test. Hyul said that he first planned to study all the books that Mimir had prepared for him, holding the stack in his hands. Mimir noted that this was a good mood. Mimir said to say hello from her, and to praise her for her efforts when Hyul starts the third test. Hyul was surprised, asked Mimir if she knew anyone there, but Mimir turned away from him, holding the rabbit, and said that it was a secret. Mimir hugged the stuffed rabbit, saying that if she told him now, it wouldn't be as interesting. At the same time, in the office of the subsidiary of the House of Magicians, Jihan's voice echoed throughout the hall as he greeted everyone present at the celebration of the House of Mages subsidiary company. Jihan was immediately surrounded by people, saying that they had expected to hear from him since he was the president of the branch. Someone present said that this was almost a confirmation of his new leadership, but Jihan kindly replied that he was just lucky. Jihan smiled and put his hand on his heart, saying that everything he has is only thanks to them. Someone appreciated Jihan's words, saying that the House of Magicians definitely has a bright future. Someone from the outside noted that these were accurate words, mentioning that even the youngest son distinguished himself, making the man next to Jihan nervous. Jihan glanced towards the one who spoke. His eyes turned black again. The guy who praised Hyul's achievements without a second thought continued to chat, noting his success in broadcasting. Jihan squeezed his glass, hearing the words about Hyul that once called a genius. He remains a genius. The guy continued to chat, starting to talk about Hyul's fight with Adela. The guy said that after what he saw during the fight, he couldn't bring himself to call him unfit. The fight was serious. Jihan stood among the crowd, which picked up the conversation about Hyul. People were talking about Hyul from all corners, noting that they were eagerly awaiting his participation in the Olympics. On the other side, they said that the head of the House of Magicians was probably also impressed by the performance of his youngest son. Jihan clutched his glass as Hyul's name was heard around him non-stop. Jihan felt a rising rage when he heard someone say that the position of head of the family would be taken away by the youngest. Jihan thought about how noisy it was here. Memories from the past flashed through his head, where they always talked about Hyul. In Jihan's memories, the smiling face of little Hyul appeared when he thought that he hated him the most. People at the gala evening noticed that Jihan had gone out somewhere. There was a glass of wine crushed by Jihan lying on the floor. Jihan walked outside, wanting to get away from the noisy hall where everyone was repeating the name of Hyul. Jihan loosened his tie as he stepped outside. Jihan walked to the edge of the terrace, saying that this was not good and could not be. Jihan covered his mouth, muttering with a creepy look that Hyul, this boy, should die. Hyul was still in the Mimir well at this time. Hyul continued to read the books that Mimir had selected for him, while Mimir herself sat quietly nearby and drew. There were numerous towers of books around it. Hyul closed the book, finishing reading, assessing his progress. Mimir looked up at him and asked if he had finished reading, and Hyul said that he had, if that was all the literature. Mimir stood up, exclaiming that Hyul had learned all the basics, spreading her arms out to the sides on the stacks of books, and asked if Hyul understood them. Hyul honestly answered that he didn't understand a thing, to which Mimir said that Hyul now at least had an idea about this circle. Hyul looked at the book he had just finished reading, and said that he understood its structure a little. Mimir assured him that it was normal, comparing the process to how a person would not understand an explanation of how to use wings when they were not there. Mimir raised her finger, saying that until Hyul encountered destruction directly, he would not be able to comprehend it. Hyul looked at Mimir's drawing for clarification, saying it was so-so, but Hyul understood the point she was trying to make. Mimir puffed out her cheeks, saying that this was her masterpiece. Hyul touched his chin, thinking about how he needed to face destruction. Hyul concluded by saying that he had no choice but to step onto the third page of the tests in Ired, and Mimir confirmed this, saying that she would find all the answers. Hyul rose from the sofa and asked Mimir if the one she asked to convey her greetings to taught destruction. Mimir folded her arms across her chest, telling him to go and ask if he was so interested, since he was finished with the books. Hyul asked her to at least answer whether her reluctance to talk about the third page was connected with some kind of restriction. Mimir smiled a sad smile, saying that these were not limitations. Mimir folded her hands across her chest, remembering someone important, and told Hyul that it was a promise, and they gave each other their word. Hyul walked out of the Mimir well and back to his dorm room. Hyul wondered what promise Mimir could have made if she was afraid to say an extra word about the test. Hyul took Arid, which lay near the Mimir well. Hyul opened the book to the right page, deciding that he would find out the reason on the third page of the tests. Hyul poured mana into the magic circle, and branches with green leaves began to grow from Ired. The branches that extended from Arid grew huge and wrapped around Hyul. Hyul, with a puzzled expression on his face, allowed himself to be pulled inside, saying that he hoped everything would become clearer. Hyul closed his eyes, preparing himself for what he was about to see. When Hyul opened his eyes, he was shocked. Hyul looked around him, seeing only a huge forest. Hyul looked up, seeing the disproportionately tall trees all around, and wondered where such trees could be found. Hyul thought that he would be transported to another dimension again, like the previous times where Alpha and Beta were. But here, no one meets him. Hyul went deeper into the forest, deciding to explore it. Hyul was amazed. He did not believe that such a large area could be a page of trials that was contained and aired. Kayul stepped out onto the ledge, looking out over the vast forest from above. Hyel found it maddening. The magic of Weitner, his teacher, surpassed all bounds of imagination. Kayul saw no end or edge, no matter how long he walked through the forest. Kayul approached a small lake, assuming that this could be his test in itself. Kayul felt a shudder, sensing something. Hyul dismissed the idea that it was an earthquake. A huge shadow covered Hyul as he thought the sensation was like someone was staring at him. Hyul looked back, not imagining what he might see behind him. A huge monster stood above Kayul and did not take its eyes off him. The monster was too close to Hyul. Its size was astonishing. Kayul froze in shock, feeling that he didn't understand anything. The monster growled at Hyul, opening its mouth as he thought about how the monster was so close and he didn't notice. Hyul fell into the pond behind him, startled by the monster's growl. Hyul looked at the monster in shock as he found himself in the pond. Hyul noticed that the monster had a vertical pupil, typical of reptiles. Hyul noted the armored scales, similar to a crocodile, and the razor-sharp claws and fangs. Hyul had no doubt that he was seeing a disaster-level monster right in front of him. A drake that was beyond A rank. Kayul sat in the pond, unable to look away, thinking that he considered all these creatures to be imaginary. Drake kept his eyes on him, and Hyul wondered if defeating this monster might be a condition for passing the test. Hyul knew it was impossible, looking ahead at the drake trying to figure out what to do. He couldn't even move. The drake's slightest exhalation made the mana flutter in the air. Hyul had never met a monster even close to its level. Hyul knew that in the drake's eyes he was nothing more than sweet prey for mana. He wondered if he could even escape. Hyul strained his arm to lean on the bottom of the pond and try to rise. This movement did not go unnoticed under the drake's watchful gaze. Hyul looked up at the monster, knowing he had no chance with its speed, and his body refusing to move. Hyul knew that if the drake attacked him, it would all be over. Kayul winced as he noticed something. Hyul tried to understand why the drake was not approaching, but simply looking at Hyul. Kayul suggested out loud that something was stopping him. A voice behind Hyul caught his attention. Hyul turned around to see who had complimented him. A girl was moving along the surface of the pond towards Kayul. Her hair glistened in the sun, blending with the green of the forest, as she complimented Hyul's will, even in the face of a monster. Hyul noticed the pointed ears, as the girl told him that he was keeping himself under control, and not panicking, despite the situation. Hyul did not take his eyes off the stranger who told him that he could now move since he had overcome the test. Hyul asked who she was, stuttering weakly in shock. The girl pointed to herself, introducing herself as Elena L. Greenwood, saying that she was known as the Guardian of the Forest, a great sorceress, and a friend of Ray. Kayul looked at Elena with wide eyes, assuming that she was a dryad. Elena stood next to him, looking at Kayul with a calm gaze while he tried to comprehend everything. Elena looked away, saying that she should probably get it out of the way first so that Hyul would be calmer. Hyul didn't immediately understand what she was talking about, as if he had managed to forget about the drake when Elena appeared. Elena shielded Hyul with her body and spoke to the drake, telling him that she appreciated the fact that, despite his hunger, he had not entered her abode. Elena said that she acknowledged his patience and added that she forgave him for ruining her garden. Elena quietly concluded, deciding to forgive the drake. Elena channeled magic into the drake, telling him to return to his forest in peace, and calling him a remnant of a fallen noble being. Magic swirled between the branches, lifting leaves behind it. Kayul had already risen to his feet and was looking as if enchanted at how the forest itself responded. The forest interacted with Elena, as if confirming that she was the mistress of this place. Elena extended her hand to the drake, saying that he would turn into nothing and be forgotten if he was unable to understand her words. Elena looked at the drake with a slightly sad look. The drake's entire body was hit with lashing blows that cut through his skin. Hyul watched with his mouth open as the drake's body became covered in countless wounds. Hyul didn't notice any sound. He only saw the visible consequences, as if something had riddled the drake at great speed. Hyul couldn't understand what Elena had done to the drake. The wounds on the drake's body were not deep, and steam was rising from them. The wounds inflicted by Elena quickly healed. Drake growled, looking at Elena. Elena closed her eyes, saying it was just a warning, and told the drake to leave. Drake turned around and, under Elena's gaze, walked back into the forest. Hyul was amazed that the wounds on the drake's body immediately disappeared. Hyul looked at Elena, not understanding who she was to so calmly stand up to a monster outside the classroom. Elena turned her attention back to Kayul. Elena approached Kayul, asking if he was okay, and he said that it was thanks to her. Elena understood that Kayul was probably a little shocked. Elena extended her hand to him, inviting him to come with her. Elena brought Kayul to her house, which was carved out of wood. Elena placed a neat cup in front of Kayul, saying that this herbal tea was very popular with Ray, as she called Weitner. Elena said that after tea Kayul would feel calmer, and Kayul thanked her. He was sitting at a table in Elena's house. Kayul took a sip of tea. Hyul's eyes opened in surprise. Kayul looked ahead, surprised at how his thoughts cleared up in an instant after taking a sip. Elena watched as Hyul enjoyed his tea, while Hyul took more sips, impressed. Kayul placed an empty cup on the saucer that was lying on the table, and Elena said that she was glad that Kayul liked the tea. To be completely sure, Elena asked if Kayul really liked it. Hyul, putting his hand on his heart, said that this was the most delicious tea he had ever tasted. Elena was pleased by his words, and she asked if Hyul felt better after meeting the Drake. Elena sat down on the chair opposite while Hyul shared that he felt a little ashamed for showing his unsightly side. Elena bowed her head and folded her hands, saying that there was nothing to be ashamed of. Elena reminded him of what a Drake was like, and told Hyul that the fact that he didn't give in to him was already quite impressive. Hyul thought about it. Scratching his chin out of habit, he realized that it really was a Drake, and shared that he couldn't even move. Elena said that although the Drake is the master of the forest, he usually does not enter her territory. Elena folded her hands under her chin, looking at Hyul, and said that the Drake seemed to be having a hard time holding back this time. Hyul asked again, which was hard to resist, and Elena pointed at him, saying that his concentrated mana was a delicacy. Elena continued to ponder, saying that the Drake found Hyul incredibly appetizing, and the voice pushed out the fear, making Hyul nervous. Elena smiled, asking Hyul if he had any more questions. Hyul thought for a moment and asked if it was true that all this space was inside aired. Hyul couldn't wrap his head around the scale of this very real world, which was different from the other test pages. Hyula was interested in where exactly this place was, and Elena was about to answer. Elena said that the third test in Ayard is located from page 214 to 232. Hyul's eyes widened, realizing that this was truly a magical space. Hyul even stood up from his chair, asking if that Drake was not real, but created with the help of magic. Elena tilted her head, pressing her hand to her chin, and looked away, vaguely answering that he was neither real nor unreal. Hyul doesn't know how to understand this, and Elena tried to explain, saying that this space was created on the basis of memories of the past. According to Elena, the world inside Irad copies Leg Greenwood, which was once quite real. Elena said that it could be called a copy of the real world, hoping that it would be clearer, and therefore it was neither real nor fake. Hyul thoughtfully concluded, saying that they took the real world of the past and rewrote it, placing it in Arad's book. Hyul remembered Elena's house where they were sitting, and asked how this was even possible. Elena said that she doesn't know the details. The only one who understands this magic is Ray, and his only student. Elena looked at Hyul, saying that he would be like this. One day he would be able to reach Ray's level and understand everything. Hyul asked why the teacher created this space, and Elena said that it was done in order to transfer some magic to him. Hyul was surprised to hear this and asked again with interest. Elena nodded and closed her eyes for a moment. Elena opened her eyes, her pupils became narrower. Hyul became interested, wanting to know more. Elena said that she must pass on the magic of the third circle, necessary for gaining destruction, the divine eye. Elena showed Hyul what golden eyes looked like, which were able to see through everything, even the nature of magic. Hyul was amazed, and asked if the divine eyes were really the eyes of the style of the eyes of Weitner. Elena confirmed and pointed her finger at her eyes, saying that they were not perfect, she could not fully control them. Elena told Hyul that Ray asked her to awaken this magic in the successor, which is why it exists, even if only as a recording. At the same time, on the city streets, the car with the driver of Hyul's father, Shin In-hyuk, was driving along the road. In-hyuk sat in the back seat, telling the one next to him to start the report. Sakyok, who was sitting in the seat next to him, began to report on the matter that had been assigned to him earlier. Sakyok said that young masters Min-hyuk and Minji showed a little interest in young master Hyul. But the most surprising thing, in Sakyok's opinion, was that the young lady Sia did nothing. Sakyok was sure that she was being severely restricted, the head of the family pointed out, looking at In-hyuk, and he thought about it. In-hyuk agreed, saying that Seiya seemed to be lenient towards Hyul, but she was unlikely to leave him alone, and was simply being cautious because of the shadows. In-hyuk asked about his eldest son Jihan. Sakyok said that young master Jihan seemed a little wary, but even at the reception he organized, nothing came of it. In-hyuk was a little surprised when he heard Sakyok's report. In-hyuk wondered if his older children might have learned to separate the private and the public. But she immediately told Sakyok to be vigilant until the protective period expired and to continue watching. Sakyok accepted the order, telling the head of the family that he understood, and cast a silence spell around them. Sakyok explained about the barrier, saying that what came next was confidential, and In-hyuk approved of it. Sakyok told the chief that information had come out that one of the family members had colluded with the Black Magic Tower. Sakyok revealed that suspicions are falling on all the elders who are not happy with Hyul's return, as well as the high-ranking officials. In-hyuk remained silent as he listened to the fact that there were ultimately 32 suspects. Sakyok continued, saying that no direct contact with the Black Tower was recorded. In-hyuk propped his head up with his hand, clarifying that this didn't mean they were clean. Sakyok handed him the tablet, agreeing, and said that among all of them, there were 5 who were the most suspicious. In-hyuk said that the hyenas would immediately notice if the situation escalated by looking at the information about the people on the tablet. In-hyuk told Sakyok that he would deal with these people himself. Meanwhile, Hyul was still in Elena's house, which was carved into the tree using magic. Elena was going to tell what needs to be done next in order to master the Divine Eyes. Elena stood behind Hyul, explaining that they would be training the Divine Eyes. Hyul turned to her, readily agreeing and saying that the more difficult they were, the better. Elena laughed slightly, saying that as expected, Hyul looked very much like his teacher. Elena covered Hyul's eyes with her hands, telling him to keep them closed. Elena said that now she would begin to very slowly pour her mana into him. Helena placed her hand on top of Hyul's cloak on his back, slowly filling Hyul with her mana, and said that she would tell him about the eyes next. According to Helena, information about divine eyes is only available after reaching the fourth circle, and Hyul was surprised. Hyul did not see a single mention of divine eyes in the studied Erd and the Mimir well. Hyul believed Elena's words that this information would not be available to him until he reached the fourth circle. Hyul asked Elena about the other volumes that she had mentioned, naming Mimir. Elena was surprised that Hyul knew about the book Mimir, and Hyul confirmed their acquaintance, remembering what he was asked to convey. Hyul relayed Mimir's words to him before he left on the third page, considering it something personal between them. Hyul called out to Elena, and she apologized, once again beginning to pour mana into Hyul. For a moment, Hyul felt like Elena's mana flow faltered, and he wondered if he might have said something wrong. Elena concentrated on her task again, smoothly directing mana into Hyul's body. Elena apologized again and called it wonderful that Hyul had already managed to meet Mimir. Elena suggested talking about her later, in a less tense atmosphere, and now returning to the topic of divine eyes. Elena explained why they were only available on the fourth circle, saying that there was nothing special about it. Just like there was nothing special about it here. Hyul asked, and Elena said that it was Ray who had distributed it that way, and it was he who had trusted her to explain everything. Elena thought about it, adding that it was also a matter of the amount of information. Ray had calculated it so that everything would work effectively. Hyul remembered that he had already heard something similar from Mimir. Hyul remembered Mimir explaining to him why not only Erd existed, but also additional volumes like her well. Elena used her divine eyes to infuse mana into Hyul. Elena's hand poured the last drops of mana into Hyul's body. Elena said that everything was ready and Hyul could open his eyes. Hyul opened his eyes, their color changed to gold, and he himself felt the change. Hyul felt that Elena's mana had completely synchronized with his magic circles, and it was now difficult to tell whose mana it was. Hyul reached his hands to his eyes, telling Elena that he felt strange. Elena, who was casting a spell behind his back, said that everything was as it should be since she blocked his optic nerve with mana. Hyul asked her again in a nervous voice, shrouded in complete darkness due to the blocked optic nerve. Elena said that it was too early to be surprised. The divine eye is a sixth sense, existing separately from the other five. Elena explained that in order to develop it, it is necessary to turn off distractions. Hyul trembled as Elena listed everything she turned off, naming skin sensitivity and smells. Elena said that the tastes were also slowly leaving Hyul's body. Elena named the last sense organ, hearing, turning it off, and Hyul realized that he no longer felt anything at all. Elena stood over Hyul, who was lying on the floor, and told him that they would now go to the world of death. Elena looked at Hyul without saying anything. Hyul lay on the floor with his eyes open, in a world where he felt nothing. Hyul had no sight, hearing, or touch. He couldn't even tell whether he was standing or sitting. Hyul felt that his body was completely deprived of external stimuli. He had no sense of smell or taste. Hyul couldn't tell if his body was functioning. Moreover, Hyul wondered if he was even alive. He was not just scared, he felt horror. It was different from the sensations he had experienced in absolute darkness, as if he had been covered by absolute loneliness, where nothing could be felt. Hyul could compare this state to hell. Hyul tried to stop his hands from shaking. Hyul reassured himself that this was just training, according to Elena, and now he needed to train his sixth sense to see mana with his mind. Hyul realized that this meant he could still see mana, remembering the feeling when Elena opened the divine gaze in him. Hyul closed his eyes, concentrating on seeing the mana. Hyul forced himself to focus, to learn to see mana with his mind, as his training required. At the same time in Elena's house, Elena looked at Hyul with surprise and emotionless expression, not understanding how he managed to do this. Hyul lay on the floor, remaining calm after the sensitivity was turned off. Usually, everyone who experienced this spell went crazy, succumbing to panic. Elena knew better than anyone how terrible these spells were. She planned to just let him test them first and then immediately cancel them. Elena herself acquired this spell only after she went through it step by step, gradually getting used to the sensations. Elena looked at Hyul, who had been under the spell for 3 minutes now, and looked as if nothing was bothering him. Elena was surprised, especially by the fact that the forest was already resonating with Hyul's mana, and realized that they could continue. Particles of forest mana flew into Elena's house, resonating with Hyul's mana. Elena was shocked by this, saying that it was amazing. 20 minutes had passed since the start. Hyul was stable, and his mana circles were rotating as expected. A completely stable state. Elena was amazed at the successor that Irid had chosen, knowing full well that Ray had known in advance that he was capable of enduring. Hyul raised his voice, asking Elena if she could hear him. Elena looked at Hyul in surprise. Hyul lay with his eyes open. Their color was golden. He asked if she could remove the blockage of feelings. Elena agreed, carefully removing the spell. Hyul immediately sat up, saying that he could finally breathe normally. Hyul stood up and began to stretch his muscles, surprising Elena, who asked if he would be okay if he was going to move so abruptly. Elena asked how Hyul was able to cope with the seal because it was an indescribable horror. Hyul agreed, saying that just thinking about a world where he was deprived of all his senses gave him goosebumps. Hyul closed his eyes and said that he desperately convinced himself that this was just training, and that it was safe. Hyul suppressed his fear with self-hypnosis, and only in this way was he able to focus on the vision of Mana. Elena was surprised, saying that such fear was not easy to suppress even by self-hypnosis, and Kayul admitted that he almost broke down halfway. Hayul said that although he understood that it was part of the training, his body did not respond to what it did not understand, and for a moment, darkness overtook him. Hayul felt the hell called loneliness, the feeling of despair and death, and then his concentration was almost broken. Hayul shared a thought that flashed through his mind, saying that it was still better than the events of a year ago. Kayul told Elena about the moment when he realized that he was incompatible with artificial intelligence. Kayul continued, talking about the day when the path to great magicians suddenly ended. Kayul admitted that his father and family turned away from him then, remembering everything that happened a year ago. Kayul had experienced one hell, and compared to that feeling, the loss of all feelings seemed more bearable to him. Kayul and Elena went out into the forest from her house. Elena was surprised, asking again that Hayul considered sealing feelings more tolerable, and Hayul confirmed. Hayul said that this seal was just one step forward. Elena couldn't help but say out loud how much Kayul had been through. Without taking her sad gaze off him, Kayul interrupted her, saying that he was fine now, looking at his hands. Hayul rubbed his face with his hand, his eyes closed, and said that it was all in the past. Hayul raised his hands up with a smile, saying that he was grateful that he had his own special path forward. Elena's eyes watered as she looked at Hayul. The image of Ray, who was her close friend, flashed through her memories. Elena wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, trying to calm down. Hayul turned to her, thanking her with a sincere smile. Elena wondered what he was thanking her for, and Hayul explained, saying what he saw in the darkness that blocked all his senses. Hayul shared that he saw Elena's mana, and she seemed very gentle to him. Hayul thanked Elena, whose mana made it easier for him to remain unconscious in the darkness. Hayul wondered if it was because he was under her sense-sealing spell. Elena was surprised to hear her mains described as gentle. This reminded Elena again of Ray, who had once said those words too. Tears were gathering in Elena's eyes again. She didn't think she would ever be able to hear these words again. Hayul remained in the forest on the third page of the tests until night fell outside. They returned to Elena's house. Hayul finished telling how he came here right after Mimir, and Elena said that she was glad that Mimir was doing well. Elena thanked him for telling her the good news, and Kayul said that it was nothing, since he had promised to send his regards. Hayul remembered Mimir when she asked him about it. Elena said that Hayul must have heard something about her and the Greenwood Forest, since he had already met Mimir. Hayul said that he had not heard anything, mentioning some promise between Elena and Mimir, which is why Mimir did not tell him anything. Elena was amazed that Mimir still remembered that promise, but said with sadness that she could no longer keep it. Kayul became interested in what this could mean, and called Elena with a questioning intonation. Elena apologized to him for having unnecessarily spoiled the atmosphere of their conversation over tea. Kayul assured her that everything was fine, and Elena decided to change the subject. Elena said with a smile that since Kayul mentioned the promise, Mimir really liked him. Kayul didn't understand what this meant, and stupidly asked again. Elena looked at Kayul, placing the bowl on the table, asking if she was wrong. Kayul scratched his head, awkwardly saying that he had a pretty good relationship with Mimir, and asked what exactly that promise was. Elena noticed that Kayul seemed bothered by the promise, but apologized and said that it was a secret. Elena said it was just between the two of them, remembering their shared past, and remarking that she wouldn't even tell Ray. After Elena's words, Kayul had a new question. Hayul wondered if this was a promise from the past, so did that mean that Mimir had once been real too? Elena noticed that it was expected from Mimir that she did not tell him, and decided that she had no right to answer this question. Kayul understood her perfectly, saying that it was okay if she didn't want to talk, since she had given her word. Elena thanked Kayul for understanding them. After a while, Kayul got ready to leave, saying that it was time for him to go back. Elena came out to see him off and said that Hayul needed to continue training until he mastered the Divine Eye. Kayul asked if he could ask a question before he left, and Elena agreed. Kayul asked what the relationship was like between Elena and Mimir. Elena thought about her answer for a moment before saying that they were friends. Elena said that they are defending Waitner's style together with Ray. Elena compared them to constellations that, even being far from each other, are still connected. After visiting the third page of the test, Hayul immediately headed to the Mimir well. Kayul said with a smile that he was already back. Mimir asked in disbelief if he had really returned so quickly. She was lying on the sofa with her toys. Hayul said that he had classes tomorrow, so he came early. Mimir asked Hayul with disbelief if he had been training on the third page. Kayul laughed, saying that of course he had. Hayul showed Mimir how to use the magic of the Divine Eye. Hayul said that judging by the lazy mana he could see around Mimir, it was a success. Hayul said that he was still not a master, but he did not shirk training. Mimir caught his face with her hands, saying that it was strange. Hayul looked at Mimir closely as she spoke, saying that he shouldn't be so calm, and was surprised at how cold and unperturbed her mana was. Mimir smiled slyly, asking him again, and said that she was actually quite a cold person. Hayul and Mimir drank tea together while discussing how Hayul's meeting with Elena went. Mimir couldn't believe that Hayul had gone through the seal of all feelings and remained okay. Mimir even thought that Elena could be lenient towards Kayul. Mimir then asked if the forest magic had helped Hayul, but Hayul had no idea what kind of magic was in that forest. Mimir was amazed that Hayul didn't even have to be treated for the effects on his brain. Hyul recalled how he immediately stood up and began to stretch his muscles, and asked if there should be consequences. Mimir jumped up from the couch, asking how Hyul had endured that horrible magic without any consequences, assuming there had been some kind of trick. Under such pressure, Hyul had to tell Mimir the events of the past that he had recently shared with Elena. Mimir was furious, asking if this really happened. She called the culprit a bastard, saying that she had to deal with him. Hyul concluded by saying that until last year he was in complete despair, not paying attention to Mimir's violent reaction. Hyul said that moreover there were high expectations placed on him, so the consequences were unbearable. Mimir clarified that the darkness she felt in him was due to Hyul being used to this kind of treatment. Mimir felt sorry for Hyul, finally understanding how everything was in his past. Hyul was surprised by Mimir's reaction, because he expected her to take it as if nothing had happened. Hyul remembered Elena's words of gratitude for accepting them, and that they were ready to respond in kind. Hyul was embarrassed, answering Elena out loud that it was not worth worrying about. Mimir looked at him, not understanding what kind of fantasies he was stuck in, and asked if he would make it in time, since the training was successful. Hyul rose from the sofa and answered in the affirmative with great determination. Hyul couldn't believe how just a year of despair had made him feel how lucky a mage he was. Now was not the time to stop. During the day, in the student dormitory of the Obelisk Academy, on the table in Hyul's room lay 2 books, Aird and the Mimir Well. Hyul lay in bed, thinking about what Elena said. Elena said that the divine eye progresses as the circles of infinity expand. In the first circle, Hyul will be able to see the colors of mana with its help. In the second circle, the structures of magical formulas in the circles become distinguishable. On the third circle, Hyul can see the very essence of the spell. Hyul thought that he needed to see mana at its first flash in order to master the divine eyes perfectly. Hyul looked at his hand, which had mana visible in it, thinking that he needed to expand the scope of the divine eyes. Hyul wondered for a moment if he could do it before remembering the message from the Lord of the Magic Tower. Kim Kang-yoon had already identified an opponent for him in the 5th circle of magic and sent the data to Hyul as a file. Hyul looked at his future opponent, Ju Hanwok, who was 29 years old. Hyul was confused when he opened the file that Kim Kang-yoon sent him. The next day, at the Obelisk Academy. In the internal training ground for magicians, students were training. Suchin looked tiredly after his training at what was happening in front of him, sitting in the lotus position, doubting that these guys were even people. Adela attacked with moonlight bullet spells. Hyul, who was being hit by magic projectiles, looked at them, continuing to stand in place. At the last moment, Hyul put up barriers, protecting himself from Adela's magical projectiles. Adela asked, without interrupting the fight, if it was true that the Lord of the Blue Tower had sent Hyul a strategy guide. Hyul launched a counterattack at Adela as magic projectiles flew towards him. Hyul confirmed, saying that it was not just an opponent profile, but a full-fledged guide. Adela dodged Hyul's attacks, intermittently shouting out questions about the Blue Tower Lord's goal. A wind spear in the shape of a bird was flying towards Adela as she finished her question, asking why Hyulu was being given so much information. Adela noticed the attack from the air, shielding her face from the rising smoke. The wind spear suddenly changed its flight path, circling above her. Adela tried to understand what was happening, not taking her eyes off Hyul's attack. Hyul walked up to her, the wind spear in the shape of a bird landing on his shoulder, as he said that he didn't understand their intentions either. Hyul extended his hand to Adele, who was sitting on the floor, to help her up and asked if she had any ideas. The bird disappeared from his shoulder. Adela accepted Hyul's help by asking if she could take a look at the data, and Hyul agreed. After some time, Adela was reading a file from Hyul's phone, which was a whole strategy guide, wiping her face after the fight. Hyul took the phone back, saying that he was shocked himself, and Suchan ran up to them, saying that he wanted to see it too. Adela reflected on the fact that the file contained impeccable analytical data as Suchan leafed through the file. Hyul didn't understand why Kim Kang-yoon cared so much about him that they took it upon themselves to search for information so that he could develop faster. Hyul said that this is most likely the case, since he is at a disadvantage, and Kim Kang-yoon really wants to level the playing field. Suchan gave Hyul the phone, saying that it was good since they barely had time to practice, and Hyul reluctantly agreed. Hyul and Adela went back to training, deciding that it was better than just thinking about it, and told Suchan that the break was over. Suchan, on Hyul's advice, ran to increase his endurance, considering Hyul to be a real devil. A loud explosion was heard behind Suchan, causing him to stop. Suchan shouted to Hyul and Adela, who had started a new fight, that this was a training ground. Suchan scolded them so that they wouldn't shoot magic left and right when they saw a hole in the ceiling. In the evening, in the student dormitory of the Obelisk Academy, Adela returned to her room after class, letting out a tired sigh. Adela immediately fell onto her bed fully clothed, leaving her bag on the floor. Adela thought about at least changing her clothes before going to bed, but the desire to sleep was too strong. Adela gave in to the desire to sleep and closed her eyes. An image of Hyul flashed before her eyes, whose moon bullets he had copied were already faster and stronger than hers. Adela opened her eyes again, telling herself to stop. Adela clutched the blanket in her fist, feeling resentful that the gap between her and Hyul was still wide despite how much she worked. Adela sat up in bed, telling herself that she couldn't afford to continue like this. She needed to try harder. Adela was adamant that she had come this far thanks to her family's charms, and she must not lose to Hyul. Adela got out of bed, saying that she had no time to sleep and needed to take a cold shower and analyze her training videos again. At the same time, Hyul went again on the page of the third test to the forest to Elena. Hyul appeared in front of Elena, who praised him, saying that she didn't think they would end up using the sense seals so quickly. Hyul called Elena again. They were standing in a clearing near her house. Elena pointed to her eyes, telling Hyul that he seemed to have fully mastered the ability to see mana. Hyul agreed, admitting that he gets headaches if he looks for too long, but can now see mana at any time. Elena suggested that Hyul move on to the next training session, creating a magic circle in front of her. Hyul looked at the magic circle, listening to Elena explain that he would need to observe the spells with his divine eyes. Elena said that after observing, Hyul would be able to naturally comprehend the essence of magic and see the gaps in it. Hyul asked again about the gaps, not understanding what she meant. Elena explained that every spell has its weak spot. Elena told Hyul that he should use it to break the spell and make it disperse. Elena still held the magic circle in front of her, saying that this was the essence of destruction. Hyul was amazed that the magic circle itself could be erased. Elena continued, saying that permission is the work of the divine eyes to the maximum, to nip the spell in the bud. Elena suggested that Hyul try, saying that she was sure that he would quickly get the hang of it. Hyul took a closer look at the magic circle that Elena had created. Hyul could see Elena's mana flowing from her hand. Hyul became interested, trying to see more. Hyul felt the mana with a strong and warm aura, but no matter how much he looked, he couldn't find a single gap. Hyul concentrated on the task at hand, thinking that he needed to find a hole in the magic circle. Elena prompted him, telling him to activate the divine eye and analyze the structure of the magic circle itself. Hyul obeyed her, activating the divine eye and putting in more effort. Hyul thought that theoretically ideal magic formulas do not exist. Hyul read in Mimir that magic can be taken apart brick by brick, and because there are no perfect formulas, Whitener's style of destruction always works, because gaps are inevitable. Hyul understood that he only needed to see the very essence of magic, listen to the echoes of mana, and grasp the gap in the teacher's precepts. Hyul mentally walked this path and understood. Elena looked at Hyul, who managed to understand something while holding his magic circle. Hyul realized that magic would cease to be magic if he could grasp the gap. He extended his hands towards Elena's circle, using destruction. At the same time, at the Obelisk Academy, the conference hall announced the end of the preliminary meeting for Olympiad participants. Hyul's father, In-hyuk, sat among the listeners, and at a distance from him was Kim Kang-yoon and his secretary. As In-hyuk was leaving, the Lord of the Blue Tower, Kim Kang-yoon, stopped him and greeted him. Kim Kang-yoon said with a smile that he didn't expect the head of the House of Magicians to personally attend the meeting. In-hyuk replied that he could say the same about the presence of the Lord of the Blue Tower, since he shouldn't have a reason to come. Kim Kang-yoon replied that he was just an invited sponsor, and In-hyuk asked him again about his role as a sponsor. Kim Kang-yoon corrected himself, saying that for now he is only a potential sponsor. In-hyuk said it sounded like the Blue Tower was ready to send its masters to organize the Olympics. They walked out together, and Kim Kang-yoon confirmed his words, saying that the matter was under consideration. But In-hyuk said that the fact itself was surprising. In-hyuk asked if the Blue Tower had the ability to share its masters now, looking at Kim Kang-yoon. Kim Kang-yoon looked at In-hyuk, saying that their affairs were fortunately settled, and he thought that the upcoming Olympics would be worth it. In-hyuk was surprised, and asked again if the Olympics were really that worth it. Kim Kang-yoon said the Korean team, led by Hyul, could well snatch gold for their country. In-hyuk stopped when he heard his son's name and asked the Lord of the Blue Tower again. Kim Kang-yoon said that he is sure that In-hyuk is looking forward to it just like he is. In-hyuk rubbed his chin, clarifying that this meant that his son had offered a deal to the Lord of the Blue Tower. After Kim Kang-yoon confirmed, In-hyuk asked what Hyul offered him in return. Kim Kang-yoon crossed his arms over his chest, thinking about his answer. Kim Kang-yoon recalled his conversation with Hyul on the phone, and said that he promised to win a gold medal for engineering, and asked about In-hyuk. In-hyuk adjusted his coat, saying that Hyul had also promised a gold medal, and in return, asked for maximum support until then. In-hyuk said that his son is completely different from last year, and now seems very confident. Kim Kang-yoon asked if In-hyuk accepted Hyul's proposal unconditionally. In-hyuk confirmed that it wasn't difficult on his part, which was completely different from sending engineers because of a boy's words. Kim Kang-yoon continued to smile despite In-hyuk's pressure, realizing that Hyul was just like his father, Kim Kang-yoon, who would gladly invest if Hyul satisfies the condition he set for Hyul. In-hyuk asked what condition the Lord of the Blue Magic Tower had set for his son. Kim Kang-yoon said that Hyul must defeat the 5th Circle Mage in a one-on-one fight. In-hyuk chuckled, saying that the Lord of the Blue Tower had made a good condition. Kim Kang-yoon asked if In-hyuk would come to watch the fight, and said that everyone would be glad to see him before they parted ways. Hyul, meanwhile, was still on the 3rd challenge page, continuing to train. Hyul fell onto the grass, exhaling and saying that he was tired. Elena brought tea for them, telling Hyul that he had worked hard. Elena put the tea on the table outside, saying that all training was like that, and Hyul agreed. Hyul said that Elena worked as hard as he did, and he was able to get this far only thanks to her. Elena only said that she hoped she hadn't put him too much pressure, because this was their last meeting. Hyul said that thanks to the teacher's cloak, everything went smoothly, getting to his feet. Elena gave him a cup of tea, saying that it would help relieve fatigue, and Hyul accepted it with gratitude. Elena said that Hyul was a little different from Ray, who hated anything that required physical endurance. Elena remembered with a laugh how Ray grumbled and whined when it came to physical effort, because he was supposed to solve everything with magic. Hyel said that a teacher-level mage could be understood by drinking the tea that Elena treated him to. Elena turned to Kayul, looking around her. Elena thanked Kayul for holding out until the end, and said that their training had come to an end. Elena told Kayul that it had been a pleasure to mentor him, but along with the joy and relief, she felt sadness. Elena admitted that from the moment she began waiting for Ray's successor, she understood perfectly well that separation was inevitable. Kayul couldn't understand what she meant by these words. Elena raised her hand to the sky, saying that once she had fulfilled her role, the page of destruction would disappear from Ired. Elena told Hyul that this forest and she herself would cease to exist. Such was the agreement with Ray. Kyle was stunned by this information. He was not ready to say goodbye, but Elena asked him not to make such a sad face. Hyul noticed that the world was indeed beginning to crumble before his eyes, as if proof that it had been created for time. Elena also said goodbye to Kayul, ready to disappear soon. Kayul began to tell Elena of his gratitude, believing that without her, he could not even dream of mastering destruction. Elena shared with him the joy that Ray's teaching had found Hyul, as he could inherit it properly. Elena could not hold back her tears, saying that if she had anything to regret in the midst of this happiness, it was only that she would not see him grow up. Kayul ran towards her with his hand outstretched, as if he wanted to stop her disappearance. Elena took his hands, telling him not to give up, no matter what obstacles and difficulties he encountered in the future. Elena's hands, which Kayul was holding, became completely transparent. Elena finally asked Kayul to take care of Mimir, saying that she was left all alone. Hyul vowed to take care of Mimir, as Elena, who was disappearing before his eyes, asked, making it clear to Hyul that this farewell was forever. Elena asked Hyul to accept her congratulations on the fact that he had fully mastered the third circle of magic. Elena disappeared, as did the pages of the third trial in Arid, leaving behind in Hyul's heart pain and sadness from the inevitability of farewell. As soon as Hyul returned to his dorm room, he immediately opened Arid, but the destruction page was indeed missing. Kayul thanked Elena with tears in his eyes, holding Arid in his arms. Kayul knew that the days in that forest would remain in his memory forever, as would this farewell forever, which gave him the incentive to move on. The next day, at the duel training ground of the Blue Magic Tower, Kim Kang-yoon said that the duel between Hyul and the invited Fifth Circle magician was about to begin. Suchin was silent, feeling out of place. He was so nervous that he broke out in a sweat. In Hyuk, Hyul's father, asked Kim Kangan what Hyul's chances were in his opinion. Kim Kang-yoon laughed, asking why he was asking him, while Suchin was restless, trying to figure out how he ended up between them.